This is an extraordinary Sage's Not-So-Ordinary Adventure by Redfist Cannon. Link is in the description.
A large male clothing store, near Washington State Park, New York, 27th of September, 2000. Amidst the hustle and bustle of the Big Apple, an unusual commotion coming from a small corner shop attracted the attention of passers-by. None of them stopped for long, having been used to strange sights in the city and thus, putting it aside in favor of their more pressing priorities. Chad, a young part-timer manning the store, however, wished nothing more than to be in these busy people's shoes. At least then, he wouldn't have to witness and later on clean up lest his boss gets on his case the veritable chaos occurring in his establishment. The other workers had quickly taken their own customers aside and left the young man with the current problem to deal with alone. A short blond boy, a tall man who shared a similar shade of hair had entered the shop, greeting him pleasantly in the man's case before simply bulldozing their way through his stock. Chad had seen things in his time here. He'd witnessed the depths of human depravity on Black Friday last year, had to play riot police against angry housewives whenever the manager decided to have a limited-time sale, started praying again when mothers started bringing their toddlers and forced them into dresses. He even stopped a shoplifter before. Basically, Chad believed he'd handled all this business could throw at him. He never expected it to be literal however, as he was dog-piled with about half of the store's inventory. The troublesome duo had initially dragged him with them asking all sorts of questions on high-class male clothing, questions that he answered to the best of his ability. Both his charges had been in the store for a couple of hours now, going through shirts, ties, and pants at a faster pace than most teenagers the young man had seen. He'd have long since kicked them out had it not been for his boss's insistence on treating the customer like royalty, and the fact the blonde man had assured him they'd compensate him for the damage. From what little he could gather from the conversation, the two big clients, or at least he hoped they'd be big, had an appointment or a reservation with some hotshot. They were clearly tourists, as the rest of the conversation had been in a foreign language, something related to Chinese or some other Asian language if the man had to guess. The rest was lost to him as a pair of designer moccasin shoes impacted his forehead with great force and put him out for the count. Several more articles of clothing were thrown atop the now unconscious man as the pair of clients continued arguing with no regard to their surroundings. HMPH. The boy struggled as his father forced him into a moss green cardigan to fit over his yellow dress shirt. Tilda stay still boyo. Naruto, clad in a simple orange shirt and cargo shorts, fretted over his son as he forced his head through the fabric. Pops, come on, this is stupid. We got tons of outfits back home. The younger Uzumaki complained. He had taken the disguise he used initially when they first came to the US, that of a young child. I know, but it's all too old-fashioned and not Western. Heck, my most modern fancy suit is from the Meishu period, and all you got is a few yukatas to hide your tatas. Now stay still. The whiskered man grinned cheekily. But, Zetsu protested again. I need your butt in these pants, boy. The father interrupted him, his large grin never leaving his face, even as his son visibly groaned at him, but complied with his father's request. You got us invited to a dinner with probably one of the most influential people in this pantheon, so we gotta look our best and I wanna show off my handsome boy. The sage continued, as he adjusted the cuffs. After Zetsu's telepathic discussion with Hestia and Ria, they had agreed to meet at the Titan's own residence for dinner and introduction. The duo had thus decided to usher the group to New York, where both had then sneakily left the young demigods with a couple of clones while the originals went clothes shopping. Sure, the sage could just conjure up the clothes with his creation of all things ability, but where was the fun with that? Plus, both knew squat about what was and wasn't fashionable. That said, Naruto had chosen a shop near the ex-Titan Queen's address and decided he and his son needed a makeover, much to the staff's displeasure. The man knew they were being a bother, so resolved to leave the workers with tips bigger than their respective salaries for the trouble the father and son duo caused. But looking at his child now, the sage knew it was all worth it. A pair of small brown khaki pants complemented the moss green cardigan and white shirt the younger Uzumaki wore for a top. The outfit was topped with a pair of Italian black leather shoes, all of it of a chic brand. And yet, it was still somehow lacking. The man thought while looking around the mess he had inadvertently caused in his search for the perfect outfit. He needed one last thing to really top off the cute look. A necklace. Not good. A tie. Nah, too formal. His eyes landed on a black bow tie before he snatched it off the ground. Crouching down in front of Zetsu, Naruto tied the item around his neck before covering his eyes and turning the boy around to face a mirror. Alright, Naruto looked around for a moment before looking at his son again and smiling. Change back, boyo. Zetsu sighed but obeyed. His skin turned an inky black, his yellow hair became the same shade of green as the cardigan, small horns grew atop his head, his nose, lips, and ears vanished while his mouth elongated and teeth sharpened. Looking at his boy's shaggy hair, Naruto frowned before a wooden comb grew out of his palm and he passed it through the green locks, pushing them down into the side a bit. He'll of course do a better job later with an actual comb, but this Naruto smiled before uncovering his son's eyes, revealing the yellow dot-like eyes the boy sported. Tilda ta da tilde, the man sang before making jazz hands, showing the boy his work. Zetsu hated every moment of this torture that his pops had seen fit to put him through. The man saw an opportunity and much like a fox, pounced on it. With the arrangement they made with Rhea and Hestia, and thus the need to, as proper decorum dictates, dress to impress, the sage had seen fit to force his son into snazzy child-sized outfits. And the occasional bunny suit. They've been at it for a couple of hours. It was hell. Zetsu knew it had something to do with the scrapbook his pops was so obsessed with filling up. He swore on his uncle's tails to destroy the damn thing if he ever got his hands on it. First impressions are a huge thing in these kinds of formal meetings. Ya gotta show class, ya know. His father said as Zetsu looked at the latest ensemble the man put him in, and blinked at the sight. There was only one sensible response to this. I look like a dork. I think you mean you look like a classy dork. The man rebuked him with a waving finger, as his grin, if possible, grew bigger. Pops. Trust me Zetsu, I've been to these sorta meetings, you gotta take the diplomatic route, make sure they know who you are but also put them at ease. So you have to look your best while also not coming off as a pompous prick. It's that small gray area between simple and grandiose. You get me, quote. I want to give myself a wedgie, the younger immortal deadpanned as he looked at himself in the mirror. I need to make sure no one back home sees me in this or, his thoughts were interrupted by a horrifying sound that spelled his doom. Click. Bahaha, that's a nice one for the scrapbook. The man guffawed like a donkey, his trusty Polaroid camera in hand. Pops, come on. Zetsu immediately lunged at his father, aiming for the picture in his hand as the man sealed the camera into his palm, and held his son back with that same hand, the other continuously shaking the printed picture. As Zetsu fought in vain with his father, even shifting his shape to coil around the man's limbs, Naruto laughed in amusement and proceeded to roughhouse with his dear child. Meanwhile, the poor worker was left unconscious in a pile of clothes. Just so you know, I'm proud of you. Naruto's grin was replaced with a genuine smile, as he lowered a hand on his sulking son's head, ruffling his green hair affectionately. Zetsu looked up from the ground, still in his new clothes and brooding about his potentially ruined reputations. Especially with his family. Then again, his younger sisters and aunts already treated him as a plush toy, so that would just increase the intensity of their coddling. You managed to extend a hand in friendship and take the first steps towards us potentially avoiding any conflict with the Greeks. Heck, you're the reason we stayed undercover for so long. You did good my boy, real good. The blonde patted the green-haired Uzumaki on the head. Naruto was a proud papa. His son never ceased to amaze him. From being a jutsu-creating genius to his phenomenal skills in stealth and infiltration, Zetsu was the ideal shinobi, and part of the sage wished his old comrades would have seen him, if only to, as all dads like to, flex his superior parenting and skills on them. And now, Naruto could safely add diplomacy to the list of skills his son was acquiring. That was a big step from the formerly cynical and pessimistic person he used to be. If nothing else, Zetsu was proof Naruto wasn't a bad dad. Despite growing up an orphan and a social outcast, getting drafted into a war against seemingly countless enemies, and even witnessing his entire world ending, the man was able to safely put all that behind him when it came to raising his child. He wasn't like his own father. While Minato Namikaze was a great leader and even had good intentions in the end, he was far from a stellar parent. Naruto had long since forgiven his dad for burdening him with a hard life, but he would never forget about the mistakes he made, and the importance of not replicating them. He wanted Zetsu to enjoy life above all else and live happily even as an immortal. To that end, he had resolved to shoulder as much weight as he needed to do so to ensure his children had a life they could spend without regrets. Like any parent, nothing pleased him more than to see his kid growing up and realizing their potential. The sage still remembered how cold his son acted in his earlier years. The kid was hauntingly similar to the original Zetsu, what with his almost robotic attitude, his yandere-like loyalty, his ruthlessness to his enemies, and especially his apathy that used to extend to his allies. It had initially worried the father, seeing his dear boy acting so similarly to an old and hated foe. But as the years went by and their family grew, the younger Uzumaki began to mellow out, and even though he kept some of his old mannerisms, as he had shown even recently, he became more accepting and more open to others, especially his own father, whom he even started to defy. His boy, originally born with a mindset Naruto abhorred, that of being a tool to others, had grown into his own person. He'd become independent and even capable of making his own big decisions. Sure, some were still rash due to Zetsu's own lack of tact. The man could still not get over the fact his son infiltrated the Greeks' stronghold by sticking to a goddess's sandal. It was amazing, hilarious, and terrifying. But all in all, Naruto was feeling a lot of fatherly pride right now. Said feeling was shattered as he felt a pair of sandals conk him on the head. Oi, what the hell, boyo? The man said, annoyed. Pops, listen to me already. Zetsu yelled at him, a leather boot in hand, revealing he's been trying to get his attention for a few minutes now, even going so far as to tug the man's shorts down to his knees. The man adjusted his shorts, seemingly unbothered by flashing his boxers in a public place. What is Zetsu? You say something. The blonde chose to respond in a fitting manner to his son's actions. Zetsu glared at the man. I was asking, the younger Uzumaki said, annoyed. What about you? What about what? Naruto titled his head in confusion. If I dress like a geek, you're dressing like one too. For God's sake Pops, you're still in Crocs, you look like a beach bum, and you don't get me started on the ramen print boxers. The younger Uzumaki gestured to the man's attire wildly. Facing this onslaught of criticism, Naruto looked down at himself and came to a similar realization. Ah poop. About an hour later. Zetsu, now clad in a pair of shorts and nothing else, sat facing the curtains of the shop's dressing room. He'd seen his father come out in various outfits and combinations and proceeded to sadistically shoot down and criticize every single one of them. Yes, he was petty, and yes, his pops completely deserved it. But it was also necessary. His pop's fashion sense was, as his aunts Matabi and Kokuo would put it, There was no other way to describe it. The man was obsessed with three things: orange, ramen, and humor. So it made sense why his appearance usually fell into one or more of these categories, such as the initial outfit he came to the US in. But even his father knew how important this meeting was, so it wasn't a surprise to Zetsu when he'd agreed without much protest to play dress up. That, and Zetsu had also threatened to tell Amaterasu their father put Shinto-Greek relations in jeopardy with his antics. Needless to say, the threat of his the man's darling ray of sunshine getting upset with him had him looking for the fanciest and classiest suit the store had to offer with gusto. Zetsu debated on whether he should have his pops simply conjure a suit since he now had an idea of what to look like. Nah. Let him squirm a bit more. Hue, the lad inwardly cackled. Am I interrupting something? A female voice echoed in his mind. Gah. The green-haired Uzumaki jolted in surprise. Huh, boyo, you okay? The curtains of the dressing room parted briefly for Naruto to peek through. It's nothing Pops, now get back to changing, I wanna see you looking like a penguin hee. Zetsu laughed a bit forcefully, making his father groan and retreat back inside. Seeing the coast was clear, the shorter Uzumaki addressed the sudden visitor, Big Air Hestia. He caught himself, what do you need? Also, can you stop popping up like that? Give me a warning first, said Goddess audibly giggled in response. Sorry Zetsu, I simply wanted to check in on you too. Are you in New York now? Yeah, we're like 2 blocks away from the address you gave us. Pops wanted to get some new clothes because the hundreds of outfits we had back home clearly weren't enough, the Uzumaki thought back sarcastically. You foo, I take it you're not having fun. Zetsu could practically feel her smirking through the link. I am now, but that's only after hours of torture to end up looking like a nerd. He attempted to convey his grouchiness through the mental link and was rewarded with the feeling of a shoulder pat. I'm sure it wasn't that bad, and that you look great, Hestia tried to placate him. You don't know what I mean, he growled to himself, only to feel the goddess uncharacteristically roll her eyes. Oh trust me, I do. The greenette felt the goddess of family cut the link after that cryptic answer, leaving him wondering about what she meant. A feeling of dread crawled up his back, making him shiver just as his father emerged from the dressing room. Ray's penthouse, sometime later. Hestia, while optimistic, was having her patience tested in a similar way to the Uzumaki lad. As she sat in a gorgeous-looking toga, one designed by Aphrodite herself to look as if it was made of flowing flames in a beautiful mix of dark orange and red. Hestia had even managed to convince the love goddess to keep the design conservative, much to the fashionista's chagrin. Unlike their two guests, both Greek immortals had a much easier time picking out their clothes. Seeing as both had much more experience in professional or high-class settings, all Hestia had to do was summon that one dress she used for such occasions. She didn't really care for extravagances like her sisters or some of the more feminine goddesses, even if Aphrodite always badgered her to accept her new designs, some of which revealed more skin than the eldest Olympian was comfortable showing. The goddess sat on a plush chair in the hallway leading to one of her mother's walk-in closets and tapped her heel-clad feet on the ground as the ex-Titan queen continued rummaging through the bric-a-brac in the large room. Oh, Tia, how about this one? Rhea held up an item from the door. It's nice mom, was the daughter's curt reply. But don't you think it's too flaunty? I don't want to come off as a pompous woman, the mother's voice echoed from the closet, showing some worry. Mom, trust me, it's nice, Hestia insisted as she rubbed the bridge of her nose. But the others were too thin, the Titans replied. Mom, I doubt Mr. Naruto and Zetsu are going to care much about the cutlery or the color of the plates, they'll mostly be focused on the food. The goddess said firmly. She had been watching her mother rummage through her extensive collection of plates, bowls, and accessories for an hour now. She heard her mother hum in thought, before letting out an ah, and pushing some of the bigger boxes aside with a flick of her wrist to reveal what she needed. When Rhea came out, Hestia raised an eyebrow in surprise. I don't know about that collection, the others were fine but that one's a bit bizarre, she said hesitantly. Hoo. I'm sure, her mother assured her as she came out with a larger but notably dustier box than the rest. Her mother was dressed just as well, if not better than the goddess, but that was partly because the woman could throw on literally anything and make it look amazing. One of her domains as a titaness was beauty after all. The more family-friendly immortal did, however, have to steer her mother away from her more revealing outfits for this one occasion. No offense to her dear parents, but the Titans did not understand how much attention she tended to attract from men in general, let alone fellow immortals. Any potential suitors usually kept their distance because Ray's children, her included, drove them off. Yes, she was a mama's girl. Her siblings thought no different either since they tended to let their mother coddle them without shame. That being said, Rhea still looked breathtaking as ever in a custom white empire gown dress, having been adjusted to fit her larger size. The dress seemed to take some inspiration from the more frilly styles of the first half of the 20th century but was also adapted to not look out of place in a modern setting. It stretched down to her sandal-clad feet. Unlike her daughter, Rhea found no use in high heels and was topped off with a front knot at the waist that seemed to only emphasize her curves while the outfit still left much to the imagination. Both immortals had favored very little makeup aside from Rhea applying some lipstick, and their hair was let down in both cases, letting their respective chestnut brown and ebony black curls cascade down their backs. As for accessories, only the Titaness opted to wear a pair of emerald earrings that matched her eyes and made them pop. All in all, both ladies were ready to receive. Ding dong. And just in time too. Rhea hurriedly moved to the large dining room where a beautifully crafted mahogany table sat. She took the box of cutlery in one hand and twirled her other hand, wordlessly making the box's contents set themselves perfectly on the table, while the box itself was returned to the closet. Checking on the food she prepared and being satisfied by the smell and taste, she speed-walked back to the front door where her daughter stood waiting for her. Commenting Tilda, the Titan sang as she came up to the entrance. With a swift swing, the door came open and Ray's eyebrows raised in surprise. Oh, hello Tilda, she mused appreciatively. With the Uzumakis, a few minutes earlier. Woo, that is one fancy hotel. Naruto whistled as he faced the large skyscraper where their hosts for the night awaited them. Seeing who Hestia's mom is, I guess that's a given, Zetsu spoke up from next to him, clad in his disguise for the moment. He briefly sensed the large energy signature enveloping the structure, figuring out it was probably a barrier of some sort akin to a privacy seal. It seemed to absorb whatever noise came from both sides of it, and the Uzumaki even noticed people deliberately avoiding the building, as if it wasn't there in the first place, while only a few ever entered the front doors. He was sure his father felt it as well. I guess, though I feel like our gift is a little underwhelming, the elder blonde pulled on a sack he had slung over his shoulder. It's rare enough to be good for a first meeting, the younger blonde said with a shrug as he looked up to the man. The whiskered blonde had ended up choosing a black three-piece suit and had altered it slightly to fit some orange accents to the outer lining of the jacket while opting for an orange bow tie. He had joked about wearing a top hat and monocle as well, but Zetsu, not knowing whether his father was serious or not, had almost started a fight out of exasperation. Thankfully his father had gone with a relatively normal choice. The younger Uzumaki walked in front of the man and entered the building. Immediately, both felt a shift in the air, noting the overwhelming energy that felt tangible in the air. The lobby itself was gigantic, almost the size of a ballroom with various priceless decorations, Greek statues, and other pieces of art littering it, all under a giant crystal chandelier. Another curious observation was the busy staff on the ground floor who seemed to be an assortment of different creatures, mostly nature spirits, satyrs, and the few mortals who either had a distinct signature, demigods, or lacked one, probably clear-sighted. Zetsu chose to keep his disguise, for now. Odds are his appearance would alarm even these folks. All Naruto could do was whistle again while his son looked around curiously before his eyes landed on the elevator. Tugging his father in its direction, the golden doors opened and a satyr wearing a bellboy's attire greeted them. Floor, the goat man asked in a voice that conveyed how utterly bored he was. Top floor please, was Naruto's reply, making the man straighten up in surprise at the answer and put on a too large smile as his demeanor did a 180. Of course good sirs, please allow me, the satyr said with a sugary sweet tone and motioned to carry the sack on the blonde's shoulder. Nah thanks, just get us up please, the man replied with an amused smile as the bellboy obediently pressed a button. It didn't take long to reach the penthouse floor, but even then, Naruto had taken to humming the elevator music before Zetsu lightly hit him on the stomach to shut him up. The man snickered at his son's annoyance, knowing he was still bummed about his outfit. And the dopey haircut. Hey! Naruto whistled a third time as the doors opened to reveal the top floor's hallway, furnished with a selection of Persian carpets and porcelain busts every few feet. Can you stop doing that every 2 minutes? We haven't even gotten to the room yet, Zetsu complained as he came trudging out of the elevator. I dunno how else to show my amazement. This is some fancy stuff, it reminds me of Susanoo's crib whenever I dropped in, except there are fewer statues of himself. At least we know the lady doesn't have that big an ego. Bahahaha. Naruto emerged behind his son, leaving behind a confused satyr as the elevator doors closed. I guess, the younger sage reluctantly admitted. His relationship with the two brothers of Amaterasu was bordering on hostile, seeing as Susanoo and Tsukuyomi never outgrew their jealousy of their sister and viewed the Uzumaki family as unwanted intruders due to their, not godly, nature. Oh, I can't wait to see Hestia-chan again. I got a fatherly headpad with her name on it. The blonde flexed his free hand and cracked its fingers in anticipation. Poops, can you behave? Zetsu hissed. You're telling me to behave. Look at you dragging your feet like it'll make you taller. Bahahaha. The man didn't seem to care and smacked the boy on his back. Come on, please don't do this here. The son groaned. Then stand up straight, boyo. This ain't the gallows, we gotta look our best, Naruto finally said with some measure of seriousness just as they got to the door. Standing up straight and adjusting his bow tie, Naruto raised his free hand and rang the doorbell. Ding dong. He suddenly felt a bit nervous. It was as if he just now realized how important that meeting was to the future of their stay and how high the stakes were. As a bead of sweat formed on his brow and he continued to wait a few minutes in silence, he hesitantly raised his fingers to ring the bell again, only to hear a muffled, "Coming Tilda," from behind the door. Not a few seconds later, the door swung open and Naruto found himself staring eye level at the biggest bosom he had ever seen in his 12 millennia of life. Briefly, he pondered on the fact that this woman somehow beat Tsunade Senju in the chess department, before his brain caught up with him and he raised his eyes quickly. His sun-like eyes finally met with a pair of emerald green eyes. "Whoa mama," was the only thought that came to him. Chapter 15. I could never forget the day I met my esteemed teacher, the only man to ever defeat me. I was but a young lad then, growing up in a small village of Banshu with naught but my sister and our father to keep us company. My father was very adept at martial arts, a master of the sword and of the jute. Couple that with the noble deeds of my grandfather, and it ignited a desire for greatness in me even at a young age. With my first few duels, all of them victories, I grew confident in my own strength. By the age of 16, I had left my village in search of stronger opponents, leaving my possessions with my sister and brother-in-law. My travels would end up taking me to Kyoto, wherein I dueled and defeated several challengers. Tragedy struck me as one of the losers of the duel, having connections to the magistrate, framed me for a despicable crime, and dishonored me in the eyes of the people. I swiftly took his head for that. I stayed in Kyoto for a month, living life as I wished, answering the various attacks and challenges against me in kind, whether it was from petty criminals or the magistrate itself. I never lost. That is until I was approached by a startling yellow-haired individual with whisker-like markings on his cheeks who challenged me to a duel. Initially writing him off as a foreigner of the far west, I coldly dismissed him, assuming he was simply an arrogant peon with no knowledge of the blade. The man, on the other hand, had smiled and, unlike what his adult appearance would suggest, went for what might have been the most childish taunt I have ever heard. He called me a chicken. It was a pathetic insult, and while it should not have tempted me, I gave in to my anger and answered his challenge. I lost. Memoirs of Miyamoto Musashi, excerpt from The Book of Five Rings, Athena's Temple, Olympus, 27th of September, 2000. Artemis blinked in surprise upon entering her sister's home. For the first time in the last few days, the place was utterly devoid of any activity. After the huntress had initially given her wise sister the newest tidbit of information, Athena had decided that a complete revision of every single scrap of paper in her eastern section was mandatory. Now though, there were no flying books or handmaidens running errands in a hurry, and for the first time in millennia, a peculiar sound invaded the giant library. The sound of soft snoring. The goddess of the moon raised an eyebrow before walking deeper into the temple, intent on finding the central desk. As she turned the corner to look at her sister, she was shocked to find her usually dignified and regal sister asleep with her head in her arms. Her black hair, usually perfectly coiffed and tied in a braid, was let down and frizzled from obvious lack of care. The desk itself was overflowing with documents and papers while the few handmaidens her sister had in the temple slept around it on the ground. It seemed like they had taken the opportunity to rest when her sister crashed. Artemis would have punished them for slacking had it not been for the signs of overwork and creases visible on their faces. She sighed at the sight, not really knowing how else to react to the spectacle. Moving with a feathery light step, something natural given who she was able to get close to her sleeping sibling without making a sound. Tentatively, she raised a hand and put it on the older goddess' back. A bad decision in retrospect, since Artemis had to lean her head back immediately to avoid a golden spear, and jump back a few feet to avoid a second one. Athena woke up with a snort and materialized another spear in hand, looking around frantically for any threat. When her eyes landed on Artemis, she visibly relaxed, dismissing the weapon in hand before looking at the goddess of the moon tiredly. Artemis merely raised an eyebrow at the wise goddess. Sorry, Athena said slowly before dropping her head back on her desk. Are you okay, sister? Artemis asked, already knowing the answer. MMFMFMMF, the goddess of war mumbled unintelligibly. Artemis sighed and rubbed the bridge of her nose, before she gained a determined look, marched forward, and yanked her sister up by the back of her toga. Woo Artemis. Sister. Unhand me right now, the studious goddess sputtered as she struggled against the huntress' grip. Athena, enough is enough. I expected that clue I gave you to help you but all I see you doing is tiring yourself out. Artemis avoided one of her siblings' hands and wrestled her out of the chair. But I was so close. I know it. Athena held onto the desk desperately. Did you find anything? The silver-eyed deity questioned with a raised eyebrow as her sister stopped her struggles momentarily. No, but the gray-eyed goddess attempted to justify herself before her little sister managed to drag her out in the direction of her temple's door, having taken advantage of her tired state. But nothing, we're going to the hearth and I'm asking Aunt Hestia to make us something. You're taking a break, Athena. The younger immortal finally yelled back as she adjusted her hold to drag the goddess of strategy by the armpits. Okay, just let me get more presentable at least. I can't let anyone see me like this. Athena finally agreed, seeing the wisdom in her sister's words. She had been working non-stop for a month now after all, and her work ethic had only intensified in the last week since her sister brought her a crucial clue on her target's identity. It had gotten to the point where she had pretty much commandeered her handmaidens into helping in the workload, while she burnt herself out. Goddess of stamina, however, she was not. Good. Now let's move. I hope Aunt Hestia can make us some of her macadamia cookies. I could use some, Artemis said as she licked her lips, feeling herself drooling at the thought of her aunt's pastries. Ray's penthouse, same time. Hestia and Zetsu looked nervously at their respective parents. Both older immortals were silent and obviously sizing the other up. The tense silence lasted until Ray's green eyes broke away from Naruto and moved down to look at Zetsu. Oh, my heavens, was all the well-dressed Uzumaki boy heard before he felt a dainty but powerful pair of arms lift him off the ground. Before he could protest, the green-haired lad felt his head and half his body get enveloped by something soft and voluminous. He is so adorable. The Titaness squealed as she smushed Zetsu into her chest. That remark seemed to have sparked something in the blonde man as a giant smile appeared on his face, his tension all but disappearing. I know right, my boy's handsome as a button. He crowed excitedly. He had felt an aura of warmth around his fellow parent, one eerily similar to her daughter's, and it had put him instantly at ease. And you've had him dressed up like he's going to a Sunday school. Hoo. The raven-haired immortal giggled into one of her hands before she stuck it out in greeting. I'm sure your son already told you, but I'm Rhea, little Tia's mother, she smiled, heedless of said son's struggles. Hestia flushed from the side at the embarrassing nickname. MMMMPH. Zetsu attempted to make his disapproval known. Naruto looked down at the offered hand and thought. What did Mana-chan say I should do in this case? Alright, his eyes lit up as he remembered details of his surrogate sister's etiquette lessons. The giant hellcat had always been the most social amongst the Biju, his family. She'd taken an interest in mortal traditions, arts, and culture since the dawn of humanity. She'd regularly try and imprint the many values she'd learned on her siblings and followers. Dense as he was, some of her teachings did end up sticking. So, with a soft, miss, accompanied by a practiced and gentle movement, he took Ray's hand into his own and bowed, his lips merely brushing her knuckles before getting up and smiling at the woman. Rhea was amused at the man's shift in character. She was also a little flattered at his gesture. A gentleman, She threw a quick knowing look at her daughter who narrowed her eyes at her. The name's Naruto and Uzumaki, nice to meet you, Rhea. And just like that, whatever sense of class he projected vanished, leaving behind a grinning, energetic man. An eccentric gentleman. Hoo, she giggled internally before noticing her other guest frantically tapping her sides. Mom, please, you'll suffocate him, Hestia spoke out and tapped the Titan's arm hurriedly. Bahahaha, don't worry, Hestia-chan. Zetsu's a tough nut even if he doesn't look like it. The father didn't seem to share the goddess, worry and waved it off. But then, he snapped his head in the goddess' direction and widened his eyes, as if he only now noticed her presence. Oh, is he starstruck by my little girl's beauty? I knew my Tia could snare a man. Rhea thought excitedly, content to watch the ensuing scene, even as her captive's struggles continued. Hestia-chan. The blonde cooed with adoration and walked towards her with his hands opened up for a hug, something that had the goddess take a step back with a nervous look on her face. This made the Titan's eyes narrow. That was a bit forward, no. She did not want to make assumptions, but her daughter's reaction raised alarm bells in her head. She extended her senses and attempted to feel out his intentions. Rhea was an empath. Unlike her daughter though, she was an active one, meaning she required active concentration to read another immortal being's emotions. If for 1 second she sensed the man was about to do something unsightly to her daughter, pantheonic threat or not, she was going to make sure he backed off for good. A quick scan, however, alleviated her worries and made a grin bloom back on her face. Just as soon as she did so did the man reach Hestia, enveloping her in a tight hug despite her protests. Oh, you look so cute in that dress. Like a little flower I wanna pick up and keep with me forever. The man was laughing and swinging the goddess from side to side. There was no shred of lust in him. The ex-Titan queen let out a sigh of relief. She then laughed audibly at her daughter's expression as the blonde continued hugging her, even as the man's son remained trapped in her bosom. Put me down, Mr. Naruto, or I swear to Olympus I'll start burning you. Hestia yelled out. MMMMMMPH, Zetsu added his 2 cents from his fleshy prison. The two parents laughed. This dinner was going to be fun. Not so much for the kids. Olympus, Hall of the Gods, same time. The largest room in Olympus was the Hall of the Gods. It served as the throne room, the place where the gods have their summer and winter solstice meetings. It lacked a tangible ceiling, opting instead for a view of the clear sky above glittering with constellations. The thrones in question stood in AU and surrounded the object of Artemis and Athena's current objective. Hestia's hearth. To be more precise, the two virgin goddesses were looking for the third maiden, their aunt, and probably their favorite family member. Hestia was Bestia, as Apollo and Hermes liked to say jokingly. The giant doors leading to the hall opened on their own, allowing the two deities to pass. Athena, now dressed more appropriately and has managed to fix her appearance with a bit of magic, quickly scans the thrones. She agreed to take a break. She did not need any of her annoying siblings or that damn barnacle beard to show up and ruin her day any further. She was here to de-stress. That meant snuggling into one of the cushions by her aunt's hearth and possibly, maybe, hopefully getting to eat something she made. Apollo, what are you doing here? Artemis' voice snapped Athena out of her thoughts and soured her mood. Great, juiced great. MMF. Huh, Lil, sis, come give your big bro some sugar. The god of the sun had been lounging around the hearth in a black AC/DC shirt and a pair of shorts, and munching on something, as evidenced by the crumbs littering his lower face and shirt. He swiftly got up and made to hug his sister. The goddess of the moon answered his request by showcasing her flexibility and planting her boot-clad foot on his face. Don't touch me, little brother. How many times do I have to tell you that I'm older? She snarled at him as he stumbled back from the unexpected hit. Ah, seize, he whined. The huntress didn't seem to care about his suffering and instead marched up to him and held him up by his shirt, shaking him back and forth. You didn't answer my question, you pig-headed buffoon. Why are you here? She asked before stopping her shaking, and have you seen Aunt Hestia? She added, glaring at him. The god, looking like a more handsome version of a California frat boy, groaned at the rough treatment and tapped his sister's hand in surrender. The huntress complied with his request, dropping him back on the ground and tapping her foot impatiently. Well, she snapped as Athena stood at the side, nursing a growing headache. Relaxing today, he began, groaning all the while. And only, Hestia leaves, he continued as Artemis' frown grew more pronounced. Enjoying the treats, he pointed at a tray filled with delicious ambrosia cookies left near the fire. And just like that, the goddess of the hunt became the goddess of gluttony and hurriedly stepped over her brother to get to said treats, plopping down next to it and taking a cookie to munch on with a pleasant hum. Athena slapped a hand to her forehead. Really, Apollo? Again with the haikus? She asked, visibly annoyed. The handsome god of the sun rose up from his position and spotted the goddess of wisdom. Hi Athena, how are you today? He said nervously, obviously picking up the vibe his oldest sister was emitting. The smartest being on Olympus' side again, noticing how she's done that a lot lately before gazing at her brother in a deadpan. Apollo, did Hestia leave a note behind or anything to indicate her location? She asked. The blonde god scratched his cheek and shrugged. She didn't say where she was going but she was here like 3 hours ago, left these cookies and told me to only take a couple before whooshing away. I've been chilling here since then, he finished before he turned around to join his sister around the hearth. At her glare, however, he laughed sheepishly and opted for a seat on the opposite side of the hungry goddess. Athena sat down next to her sister and took one of the treats, settling herself into a cushion and sinking into it with a content sigh. She closed her eyes and let her mind rest. She had reread all the material she could possibly find on the East, and while she knew that Japan had a lot more books and documents she did not possess, it was Shinto territory, meaning it was off limits. For now, she'd have to relax, just like Artemis said. Just take a breather. Apollo's presence was unwelcome but she honestly did not have the energy to rebuke him or chase him off. Even if he was stuck in that stupid haiku phase. Ever since he'd gone to Japan, huh? Zeus, beard, she exclaimed, sitting up in alarm. Bah. Woo. Both siblings shouted out, spitting out the cookie they were eating in surprise. Apollo started coughing before he felt a grip not unlike that of an eagle's talons seize his shoulders. Opening his eyes he was met with his sister's gray ones as she looked at him intensely. Before he could, nervously, ask what his scary older sister wanted, the goddess of war spoke. Apollo, I need you to answer me clearly, she said sternly. Why yes. He pulled on his collar a bit. Sister, are you serious right now? The other virgin goddess called out from her position but was thoroughly ignored. How much of Japan have you seen? How much can you see? Can you do it without arousing any interpantheonic issues? The goddess barraged the blonde with questions. Apollo started before he regained his composure. Well, I've seen Tokyo and some of its rural areas. I can't peer at it as I do here, but I can physically visit the main cities and tourist spots, and even then, I can feel myself being watched by some of the Shinto. I might have a bit more freedom there seeing as I drive the sun chariot, but I'm still restricted, he explained as best as he could. The black-haired goddess took all that information in, muttering to herself a bit, before she summoned a picture in her hand, one that Artemis took of the tombstones. I've got a job for you, she said with a positively sinister smile. Apollo shivered. Ray's penthouse, later. Hey Zetsu, look at what mine says. Lunch is on me, get it? Oh, or that spoon. My life is pointless, genius. Bahahaha, Naruto guffawed as he sat at one end of the table and gestured to his dinner plate and utensils which had various jokes etched on. Zetsu caught himself from slamming his head on the table, opting instead to paw at a bottle of hard liquor and pour from it into his cup. Hestia settled for sending him a pitying look and awkwardly sipping from her own cup. Hoo. I'm grateful you like it, Mr. Naruto. The green-eyed titaness said with a laugh before taking a sip of her nectar-filled cup, choosing to ignore the children's actions. She smiled to herself. Looks like she made the right choice. Her joke set was one she had received as a gift from her sister decades ago but never had many chances to use it. But seeing how Hestia described her guest, she took a gamble and was rewarded for it. Are you kidding? I rarely ever meet someone that shares my sense of humor. You're one funny lady, Rhea. And stop calling me mister, I ain't that much older than you. Hey. The blonde man grinned at the titaness before drinking some orange juice, having refused wine or alcohol under the excuse that it did nothing to him. Turns out she found a comedic compatriot. That sounded right. Hoo. You flatter me, sir. The titaness held one of her cheeks as her ears colored a bit, before she perked up, going back to the subject of their ongoing conversation. So in the end, all you're doing here is some tourism. He had explained his entire story to her and confirmed what Hestia said. Still, though, she had to poke around a bit. No other reasons at all. She waggled her eyebrows. What? Aphrodite wasn't the only one looking for gossip. Who knows? Maybe the man came looking for, what did her grandbabies call it again? Hook up. It sounded naughty. Naruto scratched his cheek in confusion. Dunno what you mean, but that's really the only reason we came. Japan's been getting stuffy lately and my boy wanted to go somewhere. It was either the US or Europe and I haven't really seen the Americas in a long time. You mean you've been here before? The titaness asked curiously. She had honestly thought the sage would have been confined to the East since his legend mostly originated from there. Thousands of years ago, yeah, I mostly went through the South, met some of the folks living there and taught them some agriculture. Hey, I even got a daughter still living there, ya know. Rhea blinked in surprise. That was news to her. You have a daughter, an immortal one at that. She probed. Yup, Quatsy's a sweetheart, if a bit too much of an adrenaline junkie, but I love my radiant serpent all the same. He laughed heartily. Quatsy, radiant serpent. Could it be Quetzalcoatl? It was to her knowledge, the sky god of the Aztecs. She didn't much like thinking of those folks because of how violent and fanatic they were, what with their love for sacrifices. Despite the taboo nature of her thoughts, she was grateful that particular pantheon had all but faded. But if one of their main deities was this man's progeny, it raised some questions. Rhea used to be a queen herself, she was very familiar with interpantheonic politics. The fact the gallant sage of the East, a being who had terrified her own husband, had relationships with more than one pantheon was troubling. She shook her head to rid herself of these negative thoughts. None of that now. The man wasn't lying and she knew for sure he wasn't, having taken the precaution of activating her empathic abilities on him since the start of their discussion. There was that one time where Quatsi tried pranking me. That girl actually put a bowl of soup in the ground with a hidden rope around it. Bahahaha. Rhea snapped out of her thoughts, realizing that her guest had continued talking while she had, rudely, been daydreaming. The man luckily didn't seem to notice, having derailed the conversation into a series of tales involving him and his daughter. As amusing as exchanging embarrassing tales of her children with another parent would be, she still needed to make sure of one last thing. Deciding to shelve her worries, for now, she opted to change the subject. As interesting as that is, there is another matter I wished to discuss with you, she began with a small cough to get his attention. It worked as he visibly perked and smiled back at her, nodding for her to continue. As he did, great pressure fell onto the table. Rhea interlocked her fingers in front of her face, while her hair cast a shadow over her eyes, making them glow ominously. The sage pursed his lips and tilted his head in confusion. What are your intentions towards my little Tia? She finally said, in all seriousness. That brought Hestia's attention away from the brief conversation she was having with Zetsu. The goddess flushed in embarrassment at her mother. I intend to give her the one thing she's been missing the most, he replied casually. Hestia's face might as well have caught on fire with how much heat it emitted. Zetsu on the other hand slammed his head on the table. How so? Have you perhaps found a flame in her? Rhea probed, disengaging her fingers. A deafening silence stretched at the table as the man's face seemed to get a lot of definition. Zetsu's own forehead developed a layer of sweat while a menacing aura filled the room. Nah, she's a bit too young for me, but she did light a spark in me, Naruto replied with a grin. And what might that be? I'm just burning to know. The Titans put both hands on the table and rose up, grinning competitively all the while. Anything for a fellow enthusiast. If you must know, I saw something I've only ever seen in a few people in my long life. The blonde got up into a similar position to the Titaness before his eyes shifted to Hestia. The goddess narrowed her eyes. With a lightning-fast movement, Naruto's right hand blurred in her direction, palm open. His potential victim caught the hand with her own, applying an unnatural pressure on his wrist. Even then, he only smirked. Gotcha, he said with an evil-sounding chuckle, as a second copy of the man appeared behind the goddess. Before either Hestia or Rhea could react, the clone palmed the top of the brunette's head. If you must know, Rhea, I found in Hestia a target. His grin grew outright fierce to the point even the mother grew serious, assuming he was up to no good. Silence once again descended upon the group. Except for Zetsu, who for his part, reached for another bottle. A full-blown grin erupted on his face. To give all the hugs and headpats she can handle. What? Ray's face went through several shifts. From one conveying confusion to realization, relief, disappointment, and finally, acceptance. It seemed Hestia did charm the man, but as a child would to a parent. That explained why he wasn't attracted to her daughter despite the latter's beauty and amazing personality. He and Rhea were in a way, birds of a feather. They were old enough that even the elder gods seemed like children in comparison. Suddenly, Rhea felt a great amount of relief well up in her. There really was nothing to worry about, the two guests didn't have any negative intentions. Hey, well, in that case, some fun was in order. Well, that's nice to hear. I was worried for a second, she said, still in her standing position and resuming the little pun-off they began. I get you, we're both pyro nuts. I get worried about my kids too, can't have 'em be fueled around by random punks. The blonde matched her pace, bringing both hands back on the table and leaning closer to her. Oh, a challenge. You know Naruto, I've rarely ever met someone with such a flare-precious talent like yours, but are you sure you can match me? She smirked and leaned forward herself. Right back at Cha, you better have brought ice water cause you're about to get burned. His face got closer to her as a competitive glint shined in his sun-like eyes. Who needs burns when I'm already on fire? Her voice gained an almost sultry nature as she met him in the middle of the table, their faces only a few inches apart. Both immortals continued their stare-down, before both of their cheeks puffed up and they fell back in their chairs, laughing heartily. Bahahaha. This is the most fun I've had in a while. You're amazing, Rhea. Hoo. I couldn't agree more. You're a delight to have, Naruto. Both immortals continued laughing, both of their respective children settling for gazing at the spectacle in horror. After calming down, the four settled back in proper positions as Rhea finally decided it was time to dine. With a snap of her fingers, light shined on the table and a literal feast appeared before everyone. The first thing to assault both Uzumaki's noses was the mouthwatering smell. A grand three-course meal stood before their eyes, from starters to desserts and hello, the sage thought with glee, as his eyes immediately zeroed in on a moderately large pot set to the side while his son focused on a covered tray. Rhea and Hestia made him ramen. These gals were practically family now. I told Mom about your fancy for ramen and Zetsu's love for meat, so we decided on introducing you to our cuisine while adding something you're both familiar with. Hestia took the initiative and presented the food, first pointing to the starters, so we'll begin with the meze consisting of some tzatziki with homemade pita bread. She gestured to a bowl filled with yogurt and pieces of vegetables, alongside some Caesar salad. She then pointed to the two main dishes. While we're not that familiar with Eastern cuisine, we tried our best to make the noodles as tasty as possible. She paused, looking at a drooling Zetsu as a smirk came onto her face, and for the little one, we went with a classic moussaka. His son not reacting to having his height pointed out was simply evidence of how good the food was. And for dessert we have, the goddess began before Naruto raised a hand to stop her. Sorry to interrupt you, Hestia-chan, but I actually brought something for that. The man reached behind him and raised up the sack he brought. Rhea was surprised but smiled pleasantly. Oh, you didn't have to do that, Naruto. Pop. You already made us dinner, this is the least I could do. He nodded to himself and then threw the Titaness a smirk. Besides, now that I know I have a fellow partner in puns, I'm sure you'll love it. He opened the bag and reached inside. The two Greek immortals were surprised to see the blonde deposit 4 fruits on the table. Their patterns were reminiscent of watermelons, but each was a different color and had some particularities. A blue melon with green stripes shaped like a regular watermelon, a white one with blue stripes about the same size as the first, a red one with brown stripes that was smaller than the others, and a brown one with black stripes, the last one being the largest. I once did an experiment that yielded some interesting results, he began explaining, seeing both ladies were paying him attention, while Zetsu was still drooling to the side. I've exposed fruits to different natures of chakra, or magic as I call it, to get me some neat results. He pointed at the fruits in order. Water, wind, fire and earth. No way. Rhea immediately caught on to the man's thought process, while Hestia was simply amazed by the fruits. Yes way, my dear hilarious homie, I have gone above and beyond. Naruto raised his hands to the ceiling as he proclaimed his genius, much to Hestia's confusion and Rei's growing excitement. You've seen the watermelon, but does it not make sense for there to be a windmelon, firemelon, and earthmelon? Together pending FDA approval they are. He paused, for effect. Hestia finally realized the error she had committed by bringing this madman to her mother. The Elemelons, both Naruto and Rhea said in unison, before exploding in laughter. Ha, you did not just bring that joke to life. The Titaness held her side as she laughed in delight, foregoing any type of regularity and letting loose completely. Bahahaha, you better believe it, sister. The sage was just as happy as the ex-Titan queen. This was the start of something beautiful. Chapter 16. A beautifully soothing melody resounded over the cries of different animals. Deep in a dense jungle, amongst the millions of unique species of bugs and animals, the sage found what must have been the most unique amongst them. Shulalalala tilde, a snake clad in rainbow-colored feathers swayed in rhythm to the song the man was playing. Clad in a makeshift cowl and loincloth made out of a jaguar's hide, with his muscular tattooed body on display, he moved his hands in a manner reminiscent of a maestro, manipulating the wind itself to create sound waves, giving birth to different notes in the process. At his side lay a wooden club with several embedded obsidian blades, a macuahoodle and a small gift he had gotten from a mortal he'd saved and who had apparently mistaken him for a deity. He was a nice guy if a bit loopy. Bahaha, she's such a cutie, look at how she's dancing Zetsu. With his hands still miming, the man laughed out and looked at his son, who was nonchalantly lifting a nearby fallen tree to look at the insects under it with interest. The other Uzumaki cast a glance at the snake before returning to his earlier observations. I see it too, Pops. I think snakes tend to sway to music, he said. Yup, the blonde said happily before raising a hand towards the serpent. The animal seemingly understood Naruto's intention and pressed its head up against his palm, hissing pleasurably. The man cooed at the sheer preciousness of the action before he looked back towards his son. Hey Zetsu, he said teasingly, as the animal slithered up his hand to rub against his face. The greenette sighed, what? Let's keep it, the blonde declared happily with his hands in the air. Pops, not again. Bahahaha. Shulalalala tilde the sage meets the serpent tilde. Miles off Nagasaki, Japan, 27th of September. Apollo was nervous. For good reason too. Taking the form of a cherry-red Maserati or, the ultimate chick magnet, as he liked to call it, the sun chariot was powered down, even as it flew in the Japanese airspace. Apollo shivered as a particularly cold breeze tickled his skin, before he inhaled the cool air, psyching himself up for his next ordeal. Getting through security. No really. Much like mortal airports, there was an agreed-upon standard procedure when it came to visiting foreign pantheons. Similar to how Greek gods could not breach into one another's domain, the same logic applied to other pantheons, especially the Shinto, who were known for their reclusiveness. In the Japanese deity's case, any visiting foreign deity had to land on the island nation either in Aiz in the Mie prefecture during the day, or Amaterasu's turf as the supernatural knew it, or the other option which Apollo dreaded. Nagasaki, aka Tsukuyomi's stomping grounds, during the night. Yeah no. There was a reason he almost always entered Japan during the day. He and Tsukuyomi were far from being on friendly terms. The god was known as one of the three strongest in his pantheon except for the Shinigami and able to comfortably rival one of his uncles and thus, quite easily wipe the floor with him if the guy felt like it. A feeling he seemed to get almost every time Apollo made the mistake of coming at night time. One time I flirted with Amaterasu and it's like I made his shit list permanently, the blonde lamented that particular rejection. He remembered Aphrodite had a field day over that tidbit, so much so that the love goddess had taken it as a challenge. She shot her shot, missed, and suddenly Apollo wasn't the only one in a sour mood. Anyway. Here he was now, flying over the home turf of the one deity he did not want to piss off at the moment. Keeping his eyes peeled for any unusual sights and his senses open to any other signatures, Apollo lied in wait. No pressure. Seeing the city come into view, the deity began descending. Before he could advance any further, however, a small cloud materialized in front of him, something that had his reflexes screaming at him to avoid. The chariot abruptly swerved and missed the obstacle by a hair. Apollo grinned as he saw more clouds appear. Oh, so the man in the moon wanted to play. The god conjured a pair of aviators and pushed them up to his nose. Challenge accepted. He shifted gears before stepping on the gas pedal and with a purr, the chariot accelerated and swiveled between the clouds with grace, making its way through the surprise obstacle course and over the city. Haha, nice try old man, but you'll have to try harder to catch my baby. The god guffawed once he saw the end of the line. Just a little more. Crack. Just as he finished his taunt, a giant hand that looked like it belonged to Typhon exploded out of the center of the city directly below him. Buildings flew through the air, explosions erupted as Nagasaki was bathed in fire, drowning the screams of countless innocents. Apollo's eyes widened at the sight of the catastrophe, but before he could scream out a response, he found himself turning sharply to the side to avoid a second hand aiming to swat him. What the Hades? The god screamed in shock just as a monster emerged from the destruction. Gau, the creature roared out, sending shockwaves through the air. He knew he hadn't made contact with a cloud or anything that could trigger Tsukuyomi's traps, so this wasn't an illusion. A Godzilla-like cataclysmic creature just rose up and annihilated the entire city. But before he could properly react, the monster seemed to lock onto him before it lunged, jaw wide, towards him. Strangely enough, despite every fiber of his being commanding him to dodge, his body remained deathly still and refused to obey him. It was like in those mortal dreams where reaction time was infinitely slowed. Internally panicking for a moment, he had no choice but to face the monster as its building-sized teeth inched closer to his chariot. Before the titanic jaws clamped shut around him, Apollo used the last moments to curse out Athena for that stupid mission, just as his world dissolved into complete darkness. Everything around him bar his chariot, be it sight or sound, vanished. It took him mere seconds to understand he's been duped. Oh us, come on. The sun god slammed his head into the steering wheel in frustration as he was left floating in his vehicle alone in an empty void. When did he get trapped? Themdomnit. That was why he hated dealing with Tsukuyomi. The god had a flavor for mental attacks and loved mindfucking his targets with nightmarish illusions. The only thing needed was a trigger which he was sure he had avoided. Unless. Cold evening no, a voice whispered in his ear. Eek. The god almost jumped out of the car in surprise and turned to see his tormentor. Sitting in the passenger seat with an infuriatingly smug smirk on his face was an equally handsome man with long silver hair pulled into a ponytail. With no facial hair to speak of, his facial features were soft, almost feminine, and highlighted by a pair of silver eyes that always creeped Apollo out with their eerie resemblance to his twins. He was dressed sharply in what the Greek could recall was a fancy kimono, the one priests usually wore to holy ceremonies. It only served to highlight how traditional some of the gods in that pantheon were. He'd never been to Takamagahara, but he had no doubt from his previous meetings with the Shinto that it was probably modeled to look like the feudal era of Japan. Hey, always nice to see you lose your marbles, Gaijin-chan, the silver-haired god snickered at the blonde. Oh yeah, there was also that stupid nickname. Apollo sighed to himself and once again, slammed his head on the car horn. US damn it. Ray's penthouse, same time Zetsu felt as if he was levitating. He had taken a single bite off his plate, choosing to begin with the main dish, since you know. Miot, he thought with glee as he gazed at his favorite food. Gastronomy's true king of the hill. His one true love. His pops could go stew in his ramen, while he, Zetsu, food connoisseur, and world-class critic basked in the delight offered by the manliest of foods. And he was proven right again, with his mouth as his witness. His tongue was dancing between his teeth, trying its hardest to cover every taste bud in the delicious combination of minced meat and vegetables. A perfect balance between the robustness of the sliced potatoes and the juiciness of the aubergines, the latter acting like sponges, soaking up the creamy bechamel sauce. He'd have to give his compliments to Hestia, who had bashfully admitted to preparing his meal, on her attention to detail, especially when it came to the eggplants. It would have been so easy to mess up and have them come out bitter, but whether by magic or sheer talent, he felt nothing but the sweet taste of the sauce while the meat countered it with a more salty and sour combination. All in all, a real mixer of flavors, yet not chaotic or crude. Just perfect. Zetsu closed his eyes in bliss and leaned back in his chair. Click. His eyes snapped open and a screech tore from his throat. Pops. He looked at his father only to find the man smirking at him without any camera in hand. Ah, he's so happy. The Titaness cooed from the side and Zetsu creaked his neck towards her, only to see, to his horror, a smaller more advanced device than his dad's, in her possession. Make sure to send me a copy, Ria. He looked so precious. Bahahaha. Naruto laughed while his fellow parents tittered in delight. Zetsu groaned in despair and sank down in his seat. He blinked when he saw his fork held up in front of him and turned to see Hestia looking at him with a demure but happy expression. Thank you for the compliment, Zetsu, it's very appreciated. I'd be delighted if you had some more too, she said with a kind look in her eyes. The green-haired sage looked back at the fork and took it from the goddess, grasped, before muttering a faint, thank you for the meal. Both looked at their parents who were immersed in their own conversation, with Ria even gesturing to the pot of ramen she had made and inviting Naruto to taste it. I'm sorry about Mom, I know she can be a bit overbearing but, the brunette began with a demure smile, but her fellow immortal cut her off. Don't. I've been dealing with Pops for the past 7 millennia, it's nothing unfamiliar at this point, he said. Oh, the goddess blinked at his answer, before noticing a key detail. Zetsu, did you say 7 millennia? Yeah, I mean it's more like 6,844 but I might as well round up the value at this point. Big sis, something wrong? He asked with a tilt of the head. It's just you're actually older than me, the goddess said with a wince. Zetsu went on red alert at this revelation. Had he been mistakenly calling her his senior? By around 2,000 years, give or take a few decades I believe, the goddess continued, unknowingly and ironically adding fuel to the fire. Zetsu looked at her with a blank expression, or as bland as he could convey with his features. His cheeks then flushed a green color. How embarrassing. God damn it, he muttered. Don't worry, it's an easy mistake to make amongst us immortals, the goddess tried to placate him only for the immortal to sigh. It's just, you're so mature and motherly I just instinctively did it, ya know. He said before his eyes widened and he clamped his hands over his mouth. He quickly looked at Hestia and glared at her. You heard nothing, the shorter immortal said sternly. The goddess simply raised an eyebrow at the older immortal. What? You mean that? Yeah, the verbal tic. I know about the verbal tic. I've been trying to get rid of the verbal tic for centuries. Pops wouldn't let me hear the end of it if he knew about it. He growled only for the deity to giggle at him. Foo, I wouldn't truly see it as a bad thing, I think it's cute. No, I already get this treatment from my aunts and sisters. I don't need this from you. He childishly pointed at her, even jumping up on the pile of cushions he had on his chair much to his earlier embarrassment. Foo. Alright, the goddess raised her hands in surrender before adopting a more serious expression. Speaking of siblings, what are you going to do about mine? She asked with narrowed eyes. Zetsu blinked before he realized who she meant. Yours. You mean Demeter. Right. He scratched his green hair thinking, to be honest, I was hoping to wait until the whole thing blows over. But yeah, our best option is to meet her and clear the air, so you'll take responsibility for it. The brunette asked him skeptically. Pops didn't raise no wuss, Zetsu fired back. Besides, I'll do it, but obviously not now. Unless you can get her here to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Hestia thought about the request and shook her head. That wouldn't be possible, she refuses to come out of her temple and has become more antisocial than my nephew, the goddess said with a sigh. The Uzumaki scratched his head. Huh, I turned a goddess into a hikikomori, he said in shock. Hestia was confused at the foreign term, but having a feeling it wasn't a compliment, she went with her gut instinct and pinched her fellow immortal's cheek painfully. Ouch. This isn't a joking matter, mister. Your lucky Hermes was blamed for your stunt. And even then, I'm not comfortable at all with my nephew being the scapegoat for your crime, she told him sternly, even pinching both his cheeks and stretching his face out. Boo Hestia, I'm a fiction it. He mumbled unintelligibly, prompting the goddess to let him go. Pardon, she asked. I said I'm fixing it. Zetsu rubbed his cheeks and glared at her. How? Well. This looks amazing, Ria. Naruto picked up some of the noodles, opting to use the cutlery he was given instead of chopsticks. He wanted to be polite. And the utensils were too funny. May the fork be with you. Ha, genius. Well then I'm sure the taste will be something you won't forget, Ria tittered from her side on the table, with a glass of nectar in hand and a small plate with small red orange cubes next to her. With that, both immortals took a bite, or in Rei's case, a dip, and a sip of their respective treats. And moaned in delight. This is so good. The blonde held his whiskered cheeks while his eyes closed in bliss, even ditching his table manners momentarily. Ria had done a marvelous job. The noodles were perfectly steamed, and absorbed just enough of the broth to give them a slight flavor, all the while being just chewy enough to complement the shrimp and, Oh, you didn't, you sly minx. The man thought in mirth upon spotting a few Naruto makis floating in the mix. Sure, it was a common ingredient in Japan, but something tells him his new friend had every intention of landing that particular pun. The ramen itself was nothing overly fancy, the ingredients were common or even basic. But the level of care that went into preparing them was phenomenal, especially considering he could tell almost all the ingredients were homemade, from the ramen noodles to the fish cakes. Yes, it wasn't the same as the authentic ramen he'd grown to love or addicted to according to anyone who knew him, but it safely secured itself on his top 3 favorite dishes of all time. The other 2 spots were occupied by 2 old friends of his. Hey, even 12,000 years after they passed, Old Man Kyuki and Big Sis Ayame's ramen remains the best. Either way, Naruto was more than satisfied. Ria was a great gal. Looking to the side, he was glad Zetsu was talking animatedly with Hestia as well. He might have to introduce her to his little girls, they'd love her. Quatsi might try to wrestle her though. His little serpent tended to do that to everyone. The ex-Titan Queen for her part had a more subdued but equally pleased reaction, so much so she didn't reprimand her guest for speaking with his mouth full. According to the man, his peculiar, firemelon, gave off a bit of a strong taste, one that could be comparable to very strong liquor even if it did not have any alcohol. It was thus perfect to pair with nectar or any sweet drink really to enjoy the experience fully. And enjoy what she did. She couldn't wait to taste the others. She and Hestia hadn't planned on eating any more than a small quantity, opting to leave the lion's share of the food for their guests. Thank you for the kind words, Naruto, she smiled at him. Honesty's the best policy. Hey, do ya think you can make me some again? The man asked her, no trace of shame on his face. Why of course, you can come by any time. Oh, she suddenly sat up excitedly and gestured to a nearby closet. I should have asked this before, but do you like board games? We could have some after dinner. She swayed in her seat from excitement. Ooh, she couldn't wait to have a pun off in Scrabble. No one ever did it with her anymore. Hey, ya kidding, I love those. Although I'm a bit of a go man myself, I did get a collection back home. Need to stave off the boredom sometimes. He rubbed his chin before gaining what Ria could only describe as a 1,000-mile stare, but no monopoly, oh. She was intrigued now. Yeah, can't have another, Reign of Zetsus incident again, the man waved her off with a troubled expression. There was definitely a juicy story behind that. Hoo, tell me more, she prodded. Well, Naruto raised a finger. You what? A yell from the side interrupted him, and made Ria spill her nectar in surprise. Oi, what's going on there? Are you kids getting along? Naruto asked, looking surprised as Hestia hoisted Zetsu by the front of his shirt, foregoing any social etiquette. Your son here just told me he's sent thousands of clones over the country. Are you two trying to start a war? The goddess turned to the sage with a glare while Ria adopted a similarly shocked expression. What? The Titans abruptly got out of her seat. Naruto's eyes widened at the accusation before he stood up with his hands raised in the air. Alright, just wait for a darn minute. This is just a misunderstanding, the man said placatingly. Oh, there better be a damn good explanation for this, Ria thought while folding her arms across her chest and adopting a stern expression. You have an army within our territory. How do you think the others are going to understand this? The green-eyed Titaness asked, already knowing the answer. Little Sparky would lose his marbles. Scratch that, she had a feeling her little moon pie and guppy would too. It's not an army though. It's a search party. Naruto's voice cut through her thoughts, but it was Hestia who replied to him, still holding the other Uzumaki like a ragdoll. What would be so important it'd need so much effort? She said with more heat than Rio was used to hearing from her. Pun intended. Now wasn't the time. Focus, woman. Naruto seemed to gain a nervous expression, and with squinted eyes, he stammered an answer, ah. Well, you see, it's that one sheep god. The Titaness racked her head for an answer, and she could see her daughter in a similar state of confusion. Pan. Pops means Pan. I'm looking for Pan, the greenette said with a sigh before muttering, and it's goat god, under his breath. Both women didn't hear him, however, they were both too shocked to comment. Was the only thing they could utter. Cliffhanger. There is no cliff, only pain. This took me way more time than it should, but I was awfully busy. BTW regarding Tsukuyomi's trigger, it was the cold breeze. As for the timeline, you can see the updated version down here alongside another omake. Don't worry about the action. That's coming, soon. Zetsu Gaiden, the Hunt Quest for Pan Part 2, somewhere in the Midwest. Oi, did you hear the news? About Z2. Z7-120 kept babbling about it. Apparently, the first 2 clones are gonna be here for this one. Oof, sounds like this is important. A horde of Zetsu clones marched silently in a single file line through a small tunnel hundreds of feet underground. It was obviously one made just for the little immortal, as it barely allowed any movement beyond going forward. There was no audible chatter among them. Any and all conversations were done telepathically to avoid detection. The many clones were currently congregating into a much larger underground room, one about the size of a football field. Just as before, no sound was made, except for some typing noises in a corner of the room that went largely ignored. Zetsu Chatroom 42, attention. A single Zetsu wearing a fedora walked on a small stage in the middle of the room. Hi Z42, was the single shared reply of the thousands in attendance, making the moderator hold their head in pain. Stop spamming, the mod Zetsu yelled back, only to receive another headache. Alright, he finally snapped as the other clones shut up. I don't know if you're all aware, but we've got a special guest today. Please stay silent in appreciation for the eldest clone and our leader next to original and originals. Pops with that piece. Z42 came down to stand next to the others. More typing ensued. A new Zetsu melded out of the wall adjacent to the stage, looking the same as all the others with the exception of a green cloak with the number 2 on the back. The Zetsu clone took his place and looked at all the others in attendance. Hello everyone, I'd like to thank you for answering these summons. Now I'll be honest and say the only reason I even came here specifically and not the other 50 rooms is that it was the closest. Z2 could taste the disappointment in his audience but soldiered on. He snapped his fingers as one of the Zetsus in the middle, this one wearing a neon green security jacket, turned on a projector. A PowerPoint was shown on the wall, the title of it being, Hunting a God, a Retrospective. In any case, I've come to bring you all a progress report to avoid any disorganization. As you know, we've started this project on the 16th of September, which means exactly 11 days ago. As of now, we've spread out to the 4 corners of the United States, with 3 extra cells going to Alaska, Hawaii and Puerto Rico. The clone snapped his finger again, making his assistant switch from a slide that showed a progress graph to 3 different pictures. One showed a clone in a fur coat sitting on the edge of a fishing hole, another showed a clone in a volcanic suit holding a stick with a ridiculous amount of hot dogs over a pool of lava, and a third showed a clone sitting in a lawn chair. Some of the audience chuckled. Type. Z2 ignored the background noise and continued, now that we're more spread out and with around 10,552 of us on the job, we should have a much easier time finding Pan. He could see many of the clones were spotting confident smiles and elbowing one another, giggling slowly all the while. But we hit a small roadblock. A slide appeared showing a massive map of the United States, with several X's and O's all over it. We seem to have all encountered the same issue. We can sense and even find large pools of nature energy, but they all seem to disappear. As you all know, energy cannot simply vanish, unless we're talking about space-time travel, which is what I will get into, he explained, even showing a slide with a picture of Albert Einstein and some equations next to it. Our initial team consisting of Z342 through 50 was enlarged to include several more research squads. Type. They all tackled the same issues. First attempting to find a pattern, then attempting to find a common cause. He showed the appropriate slides, his eyebrow twitching all the while. The first issue was a lost cause. The pattern was deemed to be completely random and unpredictable, but the second. At this statement, Z2 smiled almost ferally. That's where we had our breakthrough, he proclaimed as many in the audience looked at each other with excitement. One of the teams found a small, almost imperceptible amount of space-time energy being used at the center of each of those fields. And after looking into it, the eldest clone showed a slide with a picture of a rock with an engraved delta on it. Type. Is what we found, he finished with a shaky sigh, prompting some silent fist pumps in the audience. So with that said, all that's left is, goddammit, WHO the hell is doing this? Z2 finally exploded at the incessant noise. A Zetsu clone sitting on a desk in the corner looked up from his work. This one sported a large feminine blonde wig and was using an honest-to-God typewriter. "What the hell are you doing?" the eldest clone asked incredulously. The Zetsu clone blushed before hesitantly tearing off the long piece of paper he'd been working on. "Nothing." Chapter 17. "I'm weak, too weak." The sage slammed his left fist on the ground in frustration, cracking the earth beneath him. His right arm was missing from the elbow down, the prosthetic he used hadn't survived the fight. "Sasuke." He looked up and saw the prone form of the man he called brother. Despite the man missing both arms, despite the assortment of metallic stakes impaling his body, and the injuries littering it, his face was relaxed, almost peaceful. "Sasuke. Damn it." His voice was hoarse from overuse. He'd tried everything. His techniques hadn't been enough. His best hadn't been enough. Kurama and his siblings' power only upped the extent of the collateral damage, something their opponent seemed to want, and even then, the Biju were somehow overpowered and put to sleep or in a state he just couldn't contact them anymore. "I have to admit, you surprised me, mortal." "Not many have done so," his opponent spoke from her place a few feet to his right. Her injuries were already healing, as were her ripped robes. A woman with beauty only matched by her cruelty. That was the best way to describe Kagaya Otsutsuki no Gaia. Much like what Sasuke had once told him about high-level shinobi being able to exchange thoughts with their fists, at some point during the fight with that woman, their souls had connected. "You have piqued my interest. At least much more than the other vermin infecting my body," she continued, her voice cold yet containing a twinge of curiosity. The sage had seen her true nature and it was tragic. Initially, a mortal princess from the First Age whose kingdom was plagued by wars over the god tree, she had prayed for an end to the violence and destruction. Her words were heard by Gaia herself who at the time, growing hopeless with humanity's actions, had tasked her with finding a treasure, the chakra fruit, born of the god tree. Gaia had thus become Gaia's champion. However, despite her good intentions, the power of the fruit had not been enough and so the princess took the decision to take the tree's power as well. This betrayal had been Gaia's last straw. She bided her time. Just as the princess's children grew up, and her happiness reached its peak, Gaia made her move. Using the very power she had gifted her, Gaia crushed Gaia's spirit and took control of her body, opting to use it to purify herself. Her first attempt had ended in failure due to two sons, Homura and Hagoromo, rebelling against her. Her second attempt had ended similarly with both the sage and his brother putting a stop to her. Her third and final attempt had been a partial success. Humanity was gone, snuffed like a dying flame as the very earth they walked on proceeded to devour them, as their fight caused catastrophes to envelop the globe. Mountains erupted into volcanoes, seas either dried up or drowned continents and the entire map of the world shifted. All that was left was a wasteland. He'd failed everyone. "Do you hear me, mortal? Or have you lost your senses as well?" The sage struggled to raise his body. Perhaps I could save you. I could use a servant by my side." The woman tilted her head slightly, making her offer. One that she saw as naturally generous. The answer she received was a glob of blood spat at her feet. Gaia narrowed her eyes. "Very well then, enjoy the rest of your miserable days." Alone, with these last words, she vanished. All was silent around him, no sign of any living creature in this desolate wasteland. Naruto and Uzumaki felt all the fight within him leave him, and collapsed face down. He wept. For he had lost everyone. The sage's greatest defeat. Near Washington State Park, New York, 28th of September, 2000, Bahahaha. "Stop it already, Pops. I can't help it. You looked like a grumpy cat. Bahahaha." The early risers around New York were treated to a strange sight this morning. A whiskered blonde man in a three-piece suit strolled down the sidewalk next to a blonde child in classy but disheveled clothes. The man had his jacket unbuttoned while he held his stomach as he let loose another loud laugh. The boy, on the other hand, seemed to be shuffling with his head bowed low while he rubbed his left cheek intensely. "Why won't it come off?" the boy asked. The subject of his ire was a big red lipstick mark on his cheek. Evidently, Ria had been overjoyed over the news that a member of her family she had mourned could potentially be found again and had proceeded to treat Zetsu like a plush. Hestia had, fortunately for Zetsu, settled for a hug. They'd left the penthouse not long ago, having spent the entirety of the night talking or in the case of the two parents, competing over embarrassing their children. Ria won but only because the younger Uzumaki had been too mentally exhausted to care and her daughter had been seconds away from burning the entire building down with how hot her face had gotten. Naruto wiped a tear from his eye. He's been laughing for the last 20 minutes. He couldn't help it. His new friend was just so fun. Someone around his age, with his sense of humor, and liked to mess with their kids. Where had that woman been all his life? Coming to the US had been worth it, if only for that. No offense to his siblings, but he's been getting sick of all the, "Maybe you should tone down the jokes, you'll never find friends your age like that," or the old, "Your subordinates don't count, they respect you too much to tell you how annoying you can be, blah blah frickin' blah." Stupid Kurama. Fuzzbutt just can't appreciate gold tier comedy when he hears it. Ha. Just wait till he has him meet wait. Scratch that. Damn it, how was he gonna see his new friend after this vacation? He was going back home to do stuff. He didn't really have any plans for now. Should he invite her to Oregon? Or just come back later? Mole in plain sight could just be used again, or just place a Flying Thunder God marker somewhere. But what if they start taking additional security measures after all the chaos that Zetsu caused? He didn't want to cause more issues than he already had, especially since he now had to run damage control on all of this mess. Their two new friends had proposed several options to help mend the bridge between the Uzumakis and the Olympians. It could serve as an apology for the trouble caused in their homes and a token of good intentions. First was finding Pan, and from what Zetsu told him, he was getting close to it. Or at least his clones were. Naruto did worry about one thing, however. Zetsu's clones were usually easy to control because they were exact copies of their original. The problem arises when those clones start making clones themselves, and then their clones duplicate themselves, etc., etc. In his son's words, it was like passing a document through a copy machine and then using that document's copies to make additional copies. Sure, the text might be the same, but it would get less and less clear the more copies created down the line. It was why he'd always tell his son to either make the clones himself or limit the number of clones spawned from other duplicates to around 10 to 20,000. And to make sure a kill switch was always implanted. He did not want another Reign of Zetsus incident on his hands, or a repeat of what his boy had done in the Taoist underworld back in the war. The sage shuddered. The thought of his own shadow clones rebelling and forming their own autocracy, or worse, causing absolute pandemonium for shits and giggles, was something he did not want to think about. Anyway, where was he? Right, the first option is Pan. The second option is having Rhea and Hestia both vouch for them while they attempt to look for like-minded individuals to introduce them to. Basically a classic meet and greet. The last option was something he was on his way to address now. Evidently, he'd been told some things about the kids, specifically regarding their godly parents. Annie being the daughter of the smarty pants Athena, the goddess whom he needed to speak to later on about some things, specifically about proper punishment. He hadn't forgotten about Medusa. He'd gotten reports from one clone he left back in Oregon with her, and the poor thing was trying to be better. At least, she refused the cure for her state for now, but she got along well enough with some of his subordinates. Luke being the son of that messenger god Hermes, the guy he needed to meet for a friendly prank war as well as a lecture on not being a deadbeat. Yeah, Hestia had made sure to tell him about the kids' pasts, and whatever she could recall from her observation of them. Despite his own protests, he wanted them to tell him themselves. Needless to say, he had half a mind to introduce their father's buttocks to his sandals. Frederick could be somewhat excused for being a mortal and woefully unprepared for the unnatural. Hermes, the brat, needed to have a meeting with his son ASAP to straighten things out. He could already see Luke was heading down a dark path in the future, something understandable considering all the bullshit he'd already gone through. He'll talk to the boy about possibly visiting his mother to see if there was anything he could do. After he apologized for his deception, that is. Finally, there was Zeus. The guy he also wanted to smack some sense into. From the nonsense he'd read about or heard about the guy pretty much putting the world at risk to get his dick wet. Yeah, no, an ass whooping was definitely on the schedule. Just as soon as he could get the whole matter straightened up, and maybe figure out a way to trap the guy in a pocket dimension for a little sparring. Wouldn't do to have Rhea angry at him for hurting the brat too much, even if he could use the humbling. Lightning or sky deities tended to have a bit too much pride to be healthy. Susanoo, Thor, Quatsi, or Ardent One. The Shinto god had been dealt with by his darling ray of sunshine centuries ago and was knocked down a few pegs. Thor, from what he heard, was just as much of a battle junkie as Quatsi, but unlike his daughter, the god was someone he hadn't had the privilege of raising or meeting. As for Arden, yeah, that was a can of worms he did not want to open again, especially after the war. The eldest prince of Notak was almost as much of a genocidal psychopath as his father Okwang, and conducted himself as such, albeit with a bit more poise. The whiskered man sighed. Well, no sense in dwelling on these memories. For now, it was time to focus on the matter at hand. So he had to just tell them, huh? Alright, he could do that. Easy peasy, ramen slurpee. Later, at the hotel suite. You faker. A scream tore from the raven-haired demi-goddess as she charged him. Easy peasy my ass, he thought with a grimace as he blocked the stab from a furious Talia with his palm, while Luke stayed to the side with little Annie hidden behind him. Grover just awkwardly stood to the side. So, the revelation hadn't gone as expected. Zetsu hadn't been any help, opting to assume his disguise and got to one of the bedrooms while Naruto gathered the demigods and the satyr in the main room. He'd gone about it as honestly as he could, mostly talking about being an immortal without really going into the specifics of his presence here. He even tried to break the ice with a couple of puns. When the older demigods started doubting him, he briefly showed them some of his abilities, like henging into Grover, making the goat boy bleed in fright, or the classic shadow clones, and even while walking. Those were the party tricks everyone usually liked. Not Luke or Talia. Annabeth had been shocked into silence, same as her older companions. Luke had snapped out of his shock first and hurriedly pulled the youngest demi-goddess behind him while pulling his club threateningly. Talia, like the Spitfire she was, went with anger over reason. She'd assumed he was a monster in disguise all along, or some other manner of weird creature up to no good and thus chose violence. As he saw the girl's spear begin to light up in electricity, his eyes widened. Oi, ooh, Talia. Calm down for a sec, you're gonna burn the carpet. He tried placating her only to see her snarl. Damn it, that was a Persian rug too. Oh, I'll burn a bit more than the carpet, you liar. What were you just looking to lower our guard to pick us off? Or is this just some sick joke to you? She fired back and once again went for an attack, one that he intercepted by simply grabbing onto the spear as it sailed by his head. The sage sighed. Damn it, kid, I didn't do this to hurt you. I wanted to protect you. We didn't need your protection, and it doesn't make sense anyway. Why do you need to hide if not to trick us? This time it was Luke who replied, a dark look in his eyes. Look, if you'd just let me explain. He raised his unoccupied hand pleadingly, but the two were having none of it. No, we don't need any more lies. So why don't you beat it? The demi-goddess tugged on her spear, attempting to take it back from him. Kids, come on, I'm trying here, he said, almost begging. Well, how about you? The blonde boy was interrupted as the door to the bedroom opened and Zetsu, in his true form albeit with a large band-aid covering his left cheek, strolled into the room. Silence fell among them as the small imp-like creature casually walked to the kitchenette in the corner of the room and grabbed the fruit basket before turning around and looking at the shocked group. What? The greenette said while munching on an apple. Satyr broke out of his stupor and shakily pointed at Zetsu. Ah, I remember now. You're that bah. Grover stuttered and went into a panic as the suppressed memories of his last meeting with the younger Uzumaki resurfaced. Wah. Huh. The other two weren't much better while the youngest demigod opted to peek at the newest arrival with less fear than was expected from someone her age. Naruto sighed and rubbed his temples and let go of the spear he was holding, making the still struggling Talia fall back. Who are you? Talia demanded as she got up as fast as she could and turned her weapon towards the shortest person in the room. Zetsu looked at her, threw the apple core in his mouth before swallowing it and speaking neutrally, I'm Zetsu, why do you look like that? You look like a monster. The Uzumaki interrupted her and took another fruit from the basket before speaking up again. This is my true form, Pops insisted I have a disguise around you. You humans seem to get scared by the silliest things. I swear, he shrugged as he munched on the orange he picked up without peeling it. Huh, both demigods were stunned, while Annabeth used their confusion to approach the two Uzumakis. Her voice got the two sages' attention. Why did you do it? She asked the most obvious question in the room. Naruto looked at her and huffed with a smile. He raised a hand, and despite the other two's protests, patted the girl's head, making her smile back. Hey, kiddos are always the most curious, he says. His action made Talia and Luke calm down a bit while retaining their glares. I swear if you harm a hair on her, the Ravenet took a threatening step forward. You'll what? Zetsu interrupted her harshly, narrowing his dot-like eyes. Kill us, hurt us, you realize we could have done that to you at any time, right? Hell, the only reason, Zetsu. That's enough. This time, Naruto was the one to cut in angrily, his eyes glowing gold. While the two older demigods, and even Grover tensed up, Annabeth was the only one unaffected by the anger and instead raised her hand to tug on Naruto's sleeve. The sage looked at her, and his anger melted away. He rubbed his nose before speaking, we didn't lie about everything. Zetsu's my son and we technically are tourists here. But I thought only the Greeks. Luke raised a hand in protest. A common misconception among demigods and mortals and even some minor deities in each pantheon. Zetsu retorted, having finished his basking. He walked towards the two demigods and stood in front of them before continuing, humans have many different beliefs and religions, and all of them, at some level have some grain of truth to them. Seeing as his audience was silent, he continued. We technically don't belong to any pantheon and are just a couple of immortals walking around everywhere. I was bored of Japan and Asia, so we decided to come here for a short vacation. Since we didn't want any problems with the Olympians, we decided to disguise ourselves, he finished. All of them seemed to digest the explanation slowly before Luke raised a finger inquisitively. This ain't a classroom, boyo, ask what you want, the eldest blonde in the room chuckled. The other blonde coughed with a small blush as Talia side-eyed him with a small smirk. If you were here to rest, then why? Why help us? He asked while scrunching his face. Naruto's answer was simple, yet left the others, once again, stunned. Why not? In their silence, he elaborated. You kids looked like you needed help, and well, I couldn't very well call myself the best father ever if I just left you there, right? He winked at them. He also ignored the grumbled, shoulda just left them aside and avoided the trouble, from his son. Annabeth seemed to beam at the information and ran to hug his legs, the action broadening his smile while the other two digested what was given to them. But, aren't you two going to get in trouble? The older demi-goddess asked them. Why? Naruto raised an eyebrow at the question. He had an idea of the reason she was asking this as he could pick up on her lingering suspicion. Probably something to do with how their motives differed from their own godly parents. You know, ignoring your duties or something. It's why our parents left us in the first place. Talia clenched her fist as she said this and looked down on the ground in anger. Ah, so it was about that. He once again wished he could have a serious talk with these gods, maybe convince Ria to come along and twist some ears. Hey, they could bond over that. Nothing relieves stress like dishing out some parental discipline. The thought of it did send a small laugh rumbling through him and he wheezed out a small giggle. The others found it a bit of an unexpected answer, and Talia decided to make her displeasure known. What's so funny? She said, gritting her teeth just as the sage recomposed himself. "Ma sorry little falls," he chortled as her face turned red in embarrassment while Luke hid his own smile behind a hand. "It's just. We don't really have duties to hold us back and we're not gods either per se, then what are you?" Grover, who finally found a bit of courage, stuttered out nervously. Before Naruto could answer, his son walked back to his father and stood by him, before speaking out. "We're just tourists." Talia and Luke narrowed their eyes at the answer while Grover bleated in protest. Just as they were about to press the issue, Annabeth decided to let go of her hug and turned towards Zetsu. She walked towards him and squinted her eyes. The Uzumaki tilted his head in confusion. "What?" he asked. The daughter of Athena raised her hand, holding it face down atop of her head, then moving it to level with the greenette's hair. With her conclusion done, she giggled. "Hee, I'm taller than you," she said cheekily while sticking out her tongue. Zetsu took a deep breath, Luke and Talia's cheeks puffed out, while Grover blinked in wonder. The younger Uzumaki made to lunge at the girl, only to be intercepted by his father. "Baha, oh Annie. Bahahay you got him good bahahahahaha." The man held his squirming son as he cried tears of laughter. Pops. All in all, the revelation could have gone worse. Takamagahara, hours earlier. There were stark differences between the Shinto and Greek gods. Apollo knew that, of course, be it on a cultural level, when it comes to abilities or even just general behavior. He'd seen a lot of Japan in the years he'd been visiting it, or at least the areas he was allowed into. He loved a lot of things about the country, to the point some might as well call him a weeb, or as he liked to refer to himself, a man of culture. Speaking of culture, he'd been hoping to get some new art for his collection. Art he'd fade before letting someone like his sister, or worse, his Uncle P know about it. He shuddered at the thought of the god of the seas finding out what mortals got off to in these particular pieces. Unfortunately for him, he had the distinct feeling he wouldn't be doing any tourism this time. Tsukuyomi had been as hospitable as ever. That is to say, not much. The god of the moon had made Apollo land in Nagasaki, before grabbing him by the arm and dragging him off. After some questioning which Apollo, being horrible at lying as he was, attempted to answer while keeping his objective hidden, the other god had gotten a bit more aggressive, even threatening with a horrifyingly scarring illusion. What was it about? The god of the sun had honestly suppressed that memory as soon as the illusion was cast and didn't want to think about it anymore. All in all, he ended up spilling the beans, or at least a bit of information Athena had tasked him with. She'd only told him to look for a weird symbol that reminded him of a Japanese monk too. It wasn't much, as his sister knew he could keep it a secret as well as Aphrodite could refrain from gossip. So not at all. Anyway, the symbol was something familiar to the other god, because he tore the picture he'd shown him from his hands and looked at it wide-eyed. He caught a small but distinct grumble, something about a damn shitty old clown. Weird. He then told him to stand still, while he put a hand on his shoulder. The next thing he knew, the blonde god was walking on a cobblestone road stretching in the middle of an expansive, almost endless plain. There were very few significant geographic reliefs that weren't indicative of one of the gods' temples, and he could spot some of the Shinto deities either floating around or walking on other paths adjacent to theirs. Most of them stopped what they were doing and stared at the new arrivals. The god of the sun, not one to waste an opportunity to show off, raised his muscular arms to support the back of his head, teasingly flaunting his body as he winked at a few of the good-looking gods or spirits they passed by. "You can whore yourself out later, we got urgent business now." The voice of his guide, he'd personally call him Warden, cut through his display, making him laugh nervously. Whatever it was that symbol stood for, it had the Shinto's third leader on high alert. So where are we going, Yomi Gigi?" the blonde asked, only to have his shirt grabbed by the god in question. Tsukuyomi's face was twisted in a snarl as his eyes glowed a menacing silver. "Don't call me that," he ground out as the Greek raised his hands in apology. Sure, Lord Tsukuyomi. Could you let go of the shirt? It's one of my favorites," he said sheepishly. The silver-haired god looked at him, but instead of letting him go, he opted to hold him with one hand by the front and roughly pulled him along. All right, easy on the shirt," Apollo yelled out. Tsukuyomi swiveled again and got right in his face, close enough that their noses almost touched. "We're going to see the single most important person in the pantheon," he growled. "Why you mean?" the blonde gulped. "Yes, my sister Lady Amaterasu, and I swear to Izanagi if you behave in any manner that isn't exemplary, I'll make sure any woman you ever see will have the face of your sister. Are we clear?" Tsukuyomi shook him a bit to drill his words in. "Crystal." Apollo once again raised his hands as the other god huffed before letting him go and speed walking in front of him. Sheesh, what's wrong with him today? The blonde thought with a wince. "Move it Gaijin. The god screamed back at him, making Apollo jog after him. In the distance, he could spot a golden palace. While not as shiny as his own, its architecture was just as gorgeous. Apollo gulped once again, mentally preparing himself to meet the Shinto's patron goddess. Hopefully, his mouth wouldn't betray him again. Chapter 18. Legends of the East speak of a slew of fearsome creatures. Be it gods, demons, or monsters of all shapes and sizes, the myths and stories were as varied as the very people who regaled them among the many Asian communities over the eons. Appearing in several works of literature, the most famous of which was the Journey to the West, the Nine Lords are a group of bestial creatures rumored to have been powerful enough to tear the heavens at the seams, especially in such events as the legendary Heavenly War. In the great Chinese novel, they appear as an assortment of demons who swear allegiance to the Monkey King, vastly different in nature from how they're depicted in other documents. Their forms may differ from one story to the next, sometimes appearing as a multitude of animals present in the Chinese zodiac calendar and other times appearing in humanoid forms in contexts related to more diplomatic meetings between them and other supernatural beings. Even with that incertitude, a few things remain a constant in their tales: their initial animosity between one another, their feud with both humanity and the gods, and finally, their relationship to a 10th mystical figure. The Gallant Sage of the East. Excerpt from a thesis on religious studies written by F. Yasuhiro at the University of Tokyo, Japan, 1975. Takamagahara, 28th of September, 2000. If there was one thing Tsukuyomi had learned to hate above everything else in his many millennia of existence, it was unwelcome surprises. Be it getting ambushed by his stupid brother, Kagutsuchi making another one of his mecha kaijus, the Shichifuku Jin's frequent acts of mischief, or the one Apollo had just unceremoniously dropped on his lap. He knew that symbol in the picture, but the Greeks shouldn't, they had no reason to. Not for a lack of possibility of course, but considering the owner was someone who even in the East was considered a cryptid, it shouldn't be something they could just randomly find in their territory, let alone send one of their stronger gods in an effort to investigate it. He also knew the Greek god of truth had been cursed with particularly loose lips, thus if the only thing he was told was to look for information on that particular mon, it meant that his worst fears were coming true. The shitty old clown was off gallivanting in places where he should not be and has probably gone and stepped in shit already, something that filled Tsukuyomi with unease. Not for that man's health obviously, no. That whiskered bastard could eat shit and die for all he cared, but he was not in the mood to restrain his sister in the events she wanted to chase after her so-called father. Again. The god of the moon had always hated the fact his sister seemed more loyal to that man than her actual family. He could understand holding some degree of affection for the man who had raised her. Izanagi had been a shitty father as far as he was concerned and deserved the fate he received at the hands of Amaterasu. But changing their policies. Insisting on an alliance with a faction most of the pantheon was not familiar with at the time. Coming and going to that sage realm, place whenever she pleased in spite of her responsibilities. That's not even getting into the fact that the old clown didn't give a damn about interpantheonic relationships. He only ever did what he pleased. He needed to see Amaterasu, have her call or just drag that guy back. That annoying, self-centered, irritating blonde bastard. Hey Tsukuyomi my man, I can appreciate the tour but is it really that serious? It's just a scribble, right? Right. Speaking of annoying blondes, Apollo had been following him silently during their brisk walk after his initial outburst. The Greek god had been looking around him like a tourist and Tsukuyomi bet he would have taken pictures if he could. For all his visits to Japan, this was the first time the god had come to their realm. It spoke of the seriousness of the situation. Thus, with a sigh, he decided to indulge him for now. It is just a scribble, but it belongs to a controversial figure here, the silver-haired god admitted with a wince. Like good evil controversial UOR, the blonde trailed off, staring at his guide expectantly. Not really, they're a good person, it's just that they have no respect for protocol. With these words, both deities arrived at their destination. Apollo was underwhelmed, to say the least. Amaterasu's home was not what he had expected. By that, he meant it wasn't a giant palace like his father's temple or a shiny architectural marvel like his. From what he could see, it was much more modest. Looking up, he saw a giant torii gate marking the entrance to a large garden with a cobblestone path cutting through it. The sun god could tell his sister would like the place, especially the multitude of sakura trees forming a sort of natural tunnel leading to the building. The temple itself was mostly built out of wood, with 9 amethyst stone columns holding up the front of the structure. Each column had a distinct animal carved into it, every one of those beasts with a different number of tails, from 1 to 9. Apollo could make out some of them, recognizing a fox, beetle, monkey, slug, cat, turtle, and an raccoon dog, some sort of kraken with a bull's head, a horse with the head of a dolphin. Something caught Apollo's eyes away from the works of art and brought it to the double doors at the entrance. His eyes widened as he recognized the symbol carved into them. Or what looked like it at least. He could recognize the design of a sun with a very familiar swirl etched into it. A swirl that looked eerily like the one he was tasked with finding information about. Weird. Was the whole thing some sort of calling card the Shintos used? But why did Athena ask about it then? Could it have been left in their territory? For the first time since coming here, Apollo gained a serious air around him. He could guess what the mission was about and he didn't like it, especially since he was pretty much walking into the wolves' den as it is. Could the Shinto be planning something? Was he being led to a trap? It was a good thing he didn't come in his true form and had left a part of himself to fulfill his duties in his absence. If anything happens, that part would be instantly alerted and spread the news. We're here. Tsukuyomi's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. The silver-haired god turned and glared at Apollo. I'm just gonna say that this is serious business, so if you dare behave unprofessionally I will be making you see something ugly. Are we clear on that? The god of the sun matched the other deity's glare with his own. Crystal. With that said, the double doors opened by themselves to greet them. The two entered and were met with one of the goddess's handmaidens who bowed low to them. Dressed in white and purple conservative robes, the blonde god noticed her feet were bare, yet did not seem bothered by it. Lord Tsukuyomi, honored guest, how can this one be of help to you today? She asked with a kind tone. Take me to my sister, and make sure to alert the rest of you that we're not to be disturbed, the elder god commanded, making the woman bow in understanding before welcoming them inside. As Apollo made to follow, he was blocked by Tsukuyomi's hand. The god of the moon looked at the god of the sun and gestured at his feet. Take your shoes off. Seriously. The god's answer was a glare that forced him to comply. Soon, both gods found themselves in front of the large oak doors leading to Amaterasu's office with the servant waiting for them there. This one wishes to inform you that Lady Amaterasu is busy at the moment. I don't really care, this is urgent, he waved the handmaiden away. The woman bowed obediently before walking away at a brisk pace, obviously intimidated by her superior. Apollo glanced at the back of the servant, his eyes momentarily drifting to her swaying posterior before his host's hand clasped his shoulder firmly. Don't fuck this up Gaijin, Tsukuyomi's reminded his guest. Yeah, was in the Shinto's opinion, lazy bum's answer. As the door was pushed open, the silver-haired god groaned as he heard the voice of another annoyance. Come on sis, at least bring him my designs when you go. A gruff voice pleaded. Suchi-kun, you know Papa loves your work but that day is not one for business. Another voice answered the first, this one much more feminine yet retaining a level of strictness. I know but come on. I know for a fact Lord Shukaku will be having his yearly competition and I feel like I could actually take home the trophy this time. Plus it's good publicity you know. Of course, Kagutsuchi would be there. That annoying brat always had the worst timing when it came to urgent matters. And wait, was it that time of the year already? Oh no. Oh hell no. The elder god slammed the door open with a snarl, surprising the other occupants while Apollo opted to peek from the door. Brat. Era, Yomi-kun. The silver-haired god had caught his brother in one of his classic pitches. The more imposing god of the forge stood in with a box of blueprints that he was trying to put on a desk in the middle of the room, while the other deity was pushing it back. You, the god of the moon yelled, pointing a finger at the larger god. First of all, I'm older than you. Most of us are. Stop acting like a geezer just because you like looking down on others. Now get out of here I got something of actual importance to discuss, he said and gestured for him to exit the room. The other god in the room stared at his elder brother for a moment before snorting derisively and taking his box back. As he walked out, he shoulder-checked the silver-haired god who glared back at him. I'll get you for this later, Tsukuyomi swore. Whatever, brat, Kagutsuchi sneered. The insubordinate brat. Apollo felt a sense of déjà vu at the scene. The smith god, Kagutsuchi, was someone he'd never met before but felt like he did at the same time. Dark skin, red shaggy hair with an even shaggier beard atop of a mountain of muscles, and a gruff attitude to bring the look together. Yup, it was like looking at less scarred but older looking Hephaestus. If he didn't know any better, he'd say his stepmother had twins when she conceived his half-brother and chucked one to the east. He briefly contemplated taking a picture, if only to show his half-brother and get a laugh out of him, probably asking if he'd cloned himself at one point. The idea was dashed as his eyes shifted to the other occupant of the room. His breath was taken away. Not an easy feat considering the company he kept but also a natural reaction. Fact number 1 about Amaterasu Omikami, she could comfortably rival even Aphrodite in the looks department. Dressed in a manner similar to a high priestess, or Miko as the sun god's brain reminded him of the term, the patron goddess of the Shinto was a sight to behold. With hair as dark as the night sky that struck a contrast with her porcelain white skin, she could be called the personification of the ideal Japanese woman. Or Yamato Natashiko for short. It certainly helped that her amethyst eyes, soft features, and attire gave her an alluring, yet regal air. Her white haori with purple accents was baggy enough to conceal her no doubt voluptuous figure. He'd seen her in samurai armor in Daauumn and was complemented by a pair of purple hakama all tied together with a thick black ribbon. It wasn't a surprise he'd been so attracted to her. Or anyone else for that matter. He noticed his host was talking. Maybe he should stop staring like an idiot. I can't believe you're still going to that stupid thing. We had this conversation last year. Keeping up an air of calmness, the goddess merely raised a delicate eyebrow at her brother's outburst. Indeed we did, brother dear, she answered with a nod, and if you remember the result, you'd know my work was unaffected. The god merely glared at her, making her raise one of her sleeves to mask her giggles. Cute, Apollo thought with a goofy grin. You foo, don't tell me Suchi-kun is jealous. Her large sleeve concealed her grin. The elder god's eye twitched. Of what? That old clown. As if. He crossed his arms with a scowl. The temperature of the room suddenly spiked as Amaterasu's mood did a complete 180. She moved her sleeve away from her mouth, showing a severe scowl, and marched up to her brother before grabbing the front of his coat and bringing him down to her level. Apollo's eyes widened from his position and he ducked back behind the wall just as the moon god's body was thrown through the doorway. "Ha, ye talkin' shit 'bout papa. Wanna get her ass kicked bitchoyomi." Amaterasu walked out while rolling up one of her sleeves, her veins bulging visibly on her arm and neck. Her voice, which had been soft and melodic before, became not too dissimilar to that of a common street thug. Just like that, Apollo remembered something about the goddess. Fact number 2 about Amaterasu Omikami: she flipped scripts from queen to yakuza at the drop of a hat and was extremely temperamental. Whoever this, Papa, was, he was a button the Greek will make sure not to press. The temperature was rising dramatically, and the blonde god would have thought the entire building would burn down had it not been buffed with magic. Just like his own place. But as mad as he got, Apollo knew as sweat began to gather on his brow, that even he couldn't give out that much heat. Fact number 3 about Amaterasu Omikami: she was both literally and metaphorically one of the hottest things around and knew it. Just as the raven-haired goddess came before her brother, clearly intent on dishing out some punishment, she caught the sight of Apollo from the corner of her eye and stopped. "Huh, who are you? You look familiar." Her mood changed again and she opted to look at the god in curiosity. In any other situation, Apollo would have taken offense to be forgotten. Now though, it was good. Gave him the chance for a fresh start. Hopefully, she also forgot about the embarrassing flirting incident. Give him a break. He didn't know she was the patron goddess at the time. He was too busy containing his libido. So, channeling every bit of swag he had in his being, he smoothly adjusted his position by the wall and threw the goddess his patented lady-killing smile. His teeth glinted too for good measure. "A pleasure to meet you again, Amaterasu-sama," he said, making sure his eyes did not stray beneath her own. Her oh-so-beautiful pair. Wait, Amaterasu walked up to the god and raised her, bringing her face incredibly close to his while squinting her eyes. Had it been any other time, the god would have taken it as an invitation to start putting on the moves, maybe pucker his lips for a kiss too. Not now though, nope. He could practically feel Tsukuyomi glaring a hole into his head from his position in the hall. "I think I know you," she said while humming. Apollo felt his lips twitch and sweat gather on his brow. Sometimes he hated his domain over truth. It gave him the shittiest poker face around. "A ball o?" she finally asked. "What? Wait no, water polo, staff. I got it, Mr. Popo. FFFFFFFFUUUUUUUUUU." The Uzumaki's group hotel suite, same time Luke was skeptical. "I just don't understand why you're hiding it from us. If you want us to trust you, don't you think you should be honest with us?" He folded his arms and sat on the bed next to the other two demigods. Talia had Annabeth in her lap securely while Grover sat to the side on a chair. In front of the group sat the two tourists. The blond man, still in his suit pants and white shirt, laid on a large leather chair while his son sat next to him on an identical yet smaller chair. One that Luke did not remember seeing in the room yesterday. Regardless of that, they needed answers. Luke felt like the trust they'd built up had almost been shattered had it not been for both Annie and the Uzumakis making a solid argument. Even if they lied to them, it was clear they weren't here to harm them. That wasn't what happened. Hell, Mr. Naruto made the trip to the camp, which both elder demigods had expected to be filled with hardships, to feel like a vacation. They'd gone sightseeing, had some beach days, and in a way, felt like kids. It was good. But it didn't change the fact the Uzumakis lied and were still hiding things from them. "I already told you, my boy, it was to protect you kids." Naruto smiled warmly at them, his arms resting on his knees as he leaned forward. "Protect? From what? Monsters? How would knowing who you are change that?" Talia interjected with a scowl, no doubt still angry about the previous scuffle. "From being associated with us, the shortest one in the room," and Luke was careful not to voice that observation, answered them, only to receive a chop on the head from the father. "Zetsu. Ow, what? Pops, they're never gonna let this go, at least give them the bare minimum so they're still safe." The son replied while rubbing his scalp with a wince. "Ah, fine," the blonde acquiesced to his son's point. "But you stay quiet," he added sternly. The green-haired immortal grunted before sinking into his chair. The blonde man adopted a thinking expression, muttering to himself in an unintelligible language. He looked at them before coming to a decision. "All right, I won't tell you the entire truth," he raised a hand to silence their protests. "But I will tell you enough to give you an idea of the situation, and how are we supposed to trust you? You could just be lying again." The raven-haired demi-goddess fired back before Luke could get a word in edgewise. Naruto seemed to scratch his head a bit. "I mean there is a way you could know but your mind wouldn't be able to handle it," he admitted. "Huh, what do you mean?" This time, Luke was the one to ask, eyes narrowed in suspicion. The blonde simply raised a fist in their direction. By fist bumping me, we can do a sort of soul meeting, where we both essentially see the other's life, so. What's so bad about that? Talia asked while Luke slowly caught on to what the man was implying. I'm around 12,000 years old, he admitted, shocking the four mortals in the room. Had it been a few decades it'd be fine, but even if I just show you a fraction of my life, you'd only get confused or worse, get some serious side effects, he explained. At their shocked stares, he elaborated. It's like, if your brain is a bucket, and I tried pouring an entire lake in it. It ain't gonna be pretty, he gestured with his hands to illustrate his point. The three demigods nodded in understanding and everyone fell silent, thinking over the dilemma. That is, until the resident satyr, and the most familiar person with the Greek pantheon in the room spoke up. Excuse me, Naruto sir, Grover said, clearly trying to stifle the whimper that was appearing in his voice. What is Grover, my boy? There's no need to be afraid ya know. I'm not gonna hurt ya, okay? Naruto said with a disarming grin. The satyr nodded in understanding before looking at the other demigods, who had turned to him expectantly. There's actually a way to err. Make sure you're saying the truth. Like a truth serum, Annabeth asked for the first time, eyes wide in curiosity. Grover bleated at that but shook his head. No. Err, it's more of a sacred oath. If you swear on the sticks, it's a binding promise that makes it so that bad things happen if you break your word. Naruto slapped a fist into his palm in understanding. Pops, I don't know about this, Zetsu interjected with an uncharacteristically worried tone. Styx is a goddess, and since we said her name there's a chance she's listening to this conversation right now. So we gotta be careful of what we say from this moment out, plus we don't know what that oath implies. It could give her information on us after swearing it, the Greenette explained. Depends on the goddess, domains, the blonde waved a finger, even if she can use the domain of oaths it'd only allow her to gain information related specifically to the promise being made, nothing about the user beyond the situation they made the promise in, he clarified. Luke was at a loss. He had no clue what they were talking about, and by the looks of it, neither did his two fellow demigods. Mr. Naruto. Grover cut in again with the same nervous tone. Lady Styx from what I know doesn't have that domain. It only so happens that the gods swear on her name as a show of gratitude for what happened in the first Titanomichi. Her only other domain is hatred, or that's what I can now, he stuttered at the end, when he saw everyone's attention was on him again. Silence enveloped the room as everyone digested the information before Naruto slammed a fist into his palm again. Well, that's great. He turned to his son, do your thing boyo. Zetsu shrugged and for the first time since they met him, the demigod saw the Greenette's form shift into the one they were familiar with, gaining 2 feet in height and becoming a teenage version of his father, with the only difference being the 2 whisker marks on each cheek. Luke wanted to say something, but as if reading his mind, Talia spoke up. If you can get tall anytime you want, why do you stay short? She asked with a grin. Annabeth giggled. Naruto's cheeks puffed as his face turned red. Luke was in a similar boat. Zetsu gave Talia a flat stare as his fingers twitched. Grover wisely kept his mouth shut. You're on thin fucking ice, ow. The younger Uzumaki was interrupted with a chop from his father. Zetsu, the man hissed. There's a child present. Whatever pops, in a few years she'll be swearing like a sailor too. The son of Hermes could have sworn he heard the man mutter, not on my watch she won't, but chose to keep it to himself. The entire situation was weird. Was this what drugs felt like? A complete lack of logic. Anyway, the demigod looked back at the younger Uzumaki as he stood up and raised a hand to his heart. Me and Pops here came to the US on vacation. We knew it was Greek territory and didn't want a hassle since our presence is problematic to those unfamiliar with us. But rest assured we didn't come with any ill intent. The Uzumaki looked at everyone in the room before speaking again. I swear to the sticks what we told you up until now was the truth. Everyone but the 2 immortals jumped as they suddenly heard the sky rumble. The Greeks got sound effects. Neat, Naruto commented with a grin. When nothing happened after that, Luke and Talia looked towards Grover, who sighed in relief. It's okay, they're telling the truth, the satyr admitted, with much less nervousness this time. Hold on, the Ravenette spoke up suddenly. If what you say is right, did Hestia know about you too? She asked. Luke jolted in realization. That's right, if Hestia knew about them, then how come they were still hiding? Naruto shrugged at the question. She did. But Hestia-chan didn't want to cause trouble for now, so she agreed to keep it a secret. Unfortunately, due to someone, he pointedly glared at Zetsu, who sighed, doing something they weren't supposed to do, we had to come clean to her and look for a solution. Is that where you two were yesterday? The blonde demigod asked. Yeah, with Hestia-chan and her mom. Hey, funniest lady I've ever met, Naruto answered with a large foxy grin. Well then. That was that. Luke thought about their situation now. They had a powerful ally who was willing to help them, random kids he picked up on a whim for nothing else than an apparent act of kindness. A thought occurred to the demigod. One he was hesitant to share but thought there was no risk to it. Mr. Naruto, he said, his voice heavy with uncertainty. When the man looked at him and nodded, Luke swallowed a lump in his throat and asked the one request he thought he'd never be able to. can you heal my mom? Chapter 19. The Forbidden Mountain was a place no child should come to, and yet, one such child riding a boar came upon it, reaching a lone hut atop of it. What is it, kid? Do you need something? The voice of a man greeted them. Are you the sage of the mountain? The child asked. The man, one dressed in tribal wear with a large and colorful mask hiding his face, chortled at the question. Is that what they're calling me these days? Bahahaha. All I did was make this shed here to relax like 50 years ago. Weird. Anyway, what you want? He asked, his mask tilting to the side in curiosity. The child dismounted the animal, revealing a dark-skinned boy of barely a foot in height, naked as the day he was born and whose hair was done up in spider braids. The boy walked forward with a confident gait, up until he stood before the sitting man, his head barely reaching the man's knees. Sage, I request your help in a quest, he began. I have been turned mortal and tasked with capturing 4 legendary beasts to bring back to Lord Niam. Only then will I be able to claim the story box, and go back to Alk, the boy explained whilst revealing his true nature. Oh, why would ya have to do that? The man asked him. Suddenly, whatever confidence the boy had vanished as he nervously looked down at his feet. I might have, you know. The man tilted his masked head and leaned down to face the smaller male with a hand raised by his ear. Can't hear ya from down there, kid. Speak up. The boy briefly glared for the jab at his height before taking a breath and admitting his sin. I sort of, caused a lot of mischief for the others, like pranks. In my defense, I was bored. A silence enveloped the mountaintop as the man's eyeholes seemed to stare into the boy. The man's shoulders trembled before he exploded. Fit bahahaha. A guy after my own heart he yelled while knocking his head back. So you'll help me? Sure, just as soon as my son returns. In the meantime, do y'all want some chow? I can make a mean wakai. Anansi. My name is Anansi. Tilde the sage meets the spider tilde. Olympus, Athena's temple, 29th of September 2000. Artemis was getting worried. It wasn't a very familiar feeling for her, especially when it concerned her brother. Strange as it may sound, but on an unconscious level, she'd always trusted in her twin's strength, she'd always believed Apollo would pull through no matter the obstacles. Skill-wise, the twins were amongst, if not the best fighters in their pantheon. Their unrivaled talent with long-range weaponry and considerable close combat experience made them fearsome opponents to anyone, even among the elder gods. But when she felt the part of her brother that he'd sent to Japan vanished 2 days ago, she'd almost panicked. Yes, gods typically got much weaker when they left their pantheon's territory. So it was natural for his signature to dim, but to vanish entirely. The only reason she didn't explode into action yet is that the second part her brother had left behind to continue his duties hadn't shown any signs of distress. So her twin was safe just somewhere else. Alright, they had sent Apollo over at night, making his meeting with her Shinto counterpart a certainty. Crap. She knew Tsukuyomi had issues with her brother. She knew why that was, and pig-headed as he may be, she would not leave her twin with the moon god alone in a room. That was another reason interpantheonic politics were such a hassle. It wasn't wise to venture into potentially dangerous territory at anything less than your best, especially when immortals such as them were very likely to hold onto a grudge. So it was likely the foreign god had intercepted Apollo and dragged him somewhere. Or Apollo, true to his idiotic nature, went and stuck his nose somewhere it did not belong. I swear if he's there chasing skirts all. Her musings were interrupted as a cup of sweetened tea was put before her, her favorite sister sitting with a cup of her own on the other side of the desk in the gigantic library. You looked stressed, sister, Athena answered the unasked question. The brunette raised an eyebrow. Oh, that's rich coming from Mrs. All-Nighter. The huntress allowed a rare teasing smirk to grace her adult features. The goddess of wisdom settled for looking to the side as her cheeks colored. It's rare to see you worried about your brother, the black-haired goddess said softly. Artemis regarded her sister with a small frown before looking down at her cup and taking a sip. Of course I am, he's. A blinding light enveloped the library as said god emerged with a frantic look on his face. An intrusive lazy idiot. Apollo. The brunette got up and marched to her twin with an angry look in her eyes. Although if anyone were to dig deep, very deep inside, they'd see a smidgen of relief in her silver orbs. The man didn't seem to notice his sister coming his way though. Instead, his eyes zeroed in on the oldest of the two goddesses and his face adopted a serious expression. A small pit formed in the brunette's stomach. Athena. He almost yelled and practically bounded over to her desk, climbing atop of it on all fours and even getting uncomfortably close to the deity. Did you do anything to him? Please tell me you didn't provoke him. He yelled in her face, grabbing the front of her toga roughly. Both goddesses would have long since skewered Apollo with arrows or spears for less, but they could also tell something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Apollo. Brother. I'm gonna need you to let go of me, take a deep breath, and explain yourself, the goddess of wisdom said sternly, her gray eyes reflecting a brief moment of anger before it was squashed in favor of a cold analytic gaze. The blonde blinked and seemed to realize his actions, before letting his half-sister go and moving back and down from the desk. He took Artemis' place while Huntress approached him and stood to his side. With a deep breath, he spoke again. That mark you've told me to look for, it's a Japanese mon. A clan crest. Athena raised an eyebrow. Yeah, that, and heir. It belongs to that sage guy from the stories, that sage of the East guy. Artemis cut in, eyes wide. At the god's nod, the huntress was about ready to flash out to Zeus' temple before her sister's words halted her. Hold on, Artemis, the gray-eyed goddess said before turning back to Apollo and narrowing her eyes. How do you know it's from him specifically? The sun god adopted a sheepish expression. Oh well, Utsi. Remember when I told you I never go at night anymore? At both goddesses, nods. Although Artemis wanted to elbow her brother because she knew why he stopped his nightly ventures to Japan. Well, the reason I don't go is because of Tsukuyomi having a grudge against me, and he sorta caught me. What? His twin screamed in his ear, her suspicions having been on the dot. But nothing bad happened. He placated his sibling. I kind of gave him the picture he pressed me. Okay. It was either that or seeing Artemis everywhere I go. The blonde god stammered. Huh. And what's that supposed to mean, dear brother? The huntress made a point to twist her brother's ear in response. Oh www. You think I want to see your mug on my mags? Why, you disgusting. Apollo. Artemis. Shut up and focus. Athena lost her composure, something she did very rarely. Apollo paused in his dispute, before coughing and recomposing himself, his sister doing the same with an innocent look in her eyes. Why that little? Apollo. Athena reminded him. Right, so, with a resigned sigh, the handsome god explained what went down in Takamagahara. He went into detail about meeting Tsukuyomi, being manhandled and dragged to Amaterasu, and the ensuing conversation. The Shinto goddess, upon being briefed about the reason for the Greeks' visit, had been shocked, yet also ecstatic. The ensuing one-sided conversation involved him seeing a side of the mighty chief goddess that he'd never seen before. Amaterasu was a daddy's girl. That would have been fine and dandy with him if it weren't for the fact, when she'd started talking about her papa. She did not shut up. Apollo had been mentally exhausted by the time that goddess had finished practically reciting a thesis to him about her father's supposed feats and greatness. Then, as if to put the icing on the cake, the beautiful deity had decided a tour of her palace was in order. He chose not to mention some of the stranger objects he'd seen, like the jacuzzi-sized ramen bowl, or the giant mugshot of Susanoo near the servants' quarters. The god of storms had thrown a fit at some point and became banned in retaliation. Something to watch out for, Apollo noted. Plus, despite her multiple reassurances about the sage allegedly being harmless and not looking for trouble, the blonde god had trouble believing the literal pantheonic threat would be anything but. He'd read some of the books, he knew vaguely of the person that supposedly inspired the character Sun Wukong, he was a geek and proud of it, and watched most of the animes that derived from the original works. He'd heard of the stories and the myths, and as much as the truth might be stretched, he could not help but be naturally wary of such a big security breach. Then again, Amaterasu did mention her father was someone who enjoyed people being direct with him. Would it be a stretch to just tell him to go away? Athena, we need to inform father. The huntress made her opinion known but was surprised to see her sister raise a hand to calm her. I don't think so, said the wise goddess. If what Apollo said is right, there might not be any need for any rash action. The man and his supposed son don't seem to have any intention of causing trouble, especially since they made a point to take in 3 demigods. What if they're holding them hostage though? The blonde god asked with a raised finger. In the unlikely scenario his threat level is a bluff, the man still has great influence over the Shinto. Provoking him could lead to a war with them, the wise goddess explained. Artemis suddenly adopted a nervous look. Sister, please tell me you didn't, the goddess of war pleaded, even though her mind had already formed the answer. The black-haired deity noticed this, and the corner of her lips twitched into a frown. Artemis, she began with a dry tone, you didn't do anything, did you? The huntress looked to the side. Apollo snapped his neck towards her. Sis, please tell me you didn't, he unknowingly quoted Athena's earlier thoughts. Might have, the brunette mumbled the rest under her breath. 2 palms promptly met the other gods' respective foreheads. This is bad. Really bad, Apollo nodded in agreement. New York, near Washington Square. The sage sat at a table by a Starbucks with his son and the other kids, all of them bar Annabeth sipping on various kinds of coffee while the youngest enjoyed some chocolate milk with cookies. The man looked at his son, in his human disguise, as the younger immortal distracted himself by watching the passers-by of New York, only occasionally chipping in on the conversation the kids were having. Since the kids have been let in on their secret, Naruto had taken the opportunity to wrangle his boy into his child form and put him in a cute outfit. The lad had refused to take off the band-aid though, but nevertheless, he had a feeling he'd made a wise choice. Luke, however, was silent, obviously lost in thought. Naruto could understand the kid in a way. What he did was a risk, but the boy was obviously desperate if the look in his eyes was any indication. A look that gained a feint he was going to help Luke. That issue was a no-brainer and was something he had intended to do the minute Rhea and Hestia told him about the kid's woes. Talia and Annie would get their share too, not like he had anything better to do. Really, this might have been supposed to be a vacation and all, but the man felt himself happiest when he helped people, especially mortals, who had much shorter and thus, more meaningful lives than his in his opinion. It was sad in a way. He'd already done all that he had set out to do when he himself was mortal. He'd traveled much of the world, settled down, and founded a civilization in a separate realm, before traveling some more. He'd made many enemies and many more friends. He'd created and found his own kids and felt like he'd checked everything on his bucket list. He and his siblings had each gotten their own thing that both defined them and made that eternity bearable, especially since most of them tended to stay in the sage realm. Shukaku, the most childish, had embodied the role of an entertainer. From organizing his fabled competitions, to creating their national sport and even hosting parties and concerts. It was a jarring but welcome change from the psychopath he'd been. Matabi, the most social, had, like him, taken a great shine to mortals. So much so that she had routinely disguised herself as either a pet or a young woman to live amongst humans and yokai alike. It would have been nice had one of her forms not been a cat girl. She had fans now, a lot of them. Isobu, the most bashful, had settled for a simple life of relaxation and learning. He spent his time either at the bottom of Oridux Seas or collecting books for his giant library. Son Goku, the most prideful, had taken to both studying martial arts and, in an attempt to assert his superior wisdom on his siblings, founded Oridux military dojo in the process. Kokuo, the most motherly, had started various sanctuaries for all manners of creatures and spent her time in the plains, enjoying life alongside her countless children. Saiken, the most gentle, had spearheaded their medical programs, often collaborating with Isobu to develop their techniques and facilities. Chome, the most playful, had taken to the sky, spending her time playing among the clouds and with other yokai, as happy-go-lucky as she ever was. Embroidery had also become one of her hobbies, with the beetle using some silk she produced to make giant tapestries depicting events from the lives of those she cares about. Yuki, the most serious and collected, had assumed leadership in their military, one that was created purely as a precaution, acting as a no-nonsense general and strategist and often taking in Son Goku's rambunctious students. Finally, Kurama, the most shrewd and yet the most protective, had taken the role of guardian of their society. Even if Naruto knew the lazy ass spent most of his time sleeping on a mountain of pillows. As for him, he tended to live vicariously through others, one of the main reasons he was so helpful, even to strangers. He simply couldn't see anything better for someone than to live a life without regrets. But yeah. Back to Luke, if one were to consider both the teen's testimony and what he'd heard from Hestia, who had been told by Hermes, there wasn't much to go off of. It wasn't a physical condition from what he was told, but more of a mental, or more precisely, a spiritual issue. He didn't get all the details, but the woman had essentially tried to take in the soul of another creature, and something went wrong with the process. That wasn't uplifting news. There was a reason messing with souls was generally a big no for mortals, and the reason had to do with the fact mortal bodies weren't made to house more than one. There were a few rare cases of courses, but those usually involved external forces or methods. Seals on him and other Jinchuriki, for one, could safely, if done right, house another entity, even one as powerful as a Biju, and give the mortal access to it. What May Castellan did was likely a failed sealing of a soul, either through hers or another's interference. In any case, it'll be ugly. This wasn't something regular Iryojutsu or medical techniques would solve, and even 12,000 years later, even with a mastery over Ninshu, he only barely knew how to suppress memories within an individual. Fixing a broken mind like one would fix a broken vase wasn't something he could do in his base form. So that left one solution: perfect sagehood. On one hand, he'd have access to any domain he wished to connect with, especially since he was going to be messing with souls, but it would be worth it for the blonde demigod in the end. On the other hand, that particular ability might as well act like a giant neon sign pointing at his precise location and thus alerting the Olympians. He didn't know what to do in that situation, so he resolved to ask his new immortal friends. That, and he already missed Ray's sense of humor, and believed it was his fatherly duty to give Hestia Chan some good ol' H&H hugs and headpats, trademark pending. But anyway, hopefully, the ex-Titan Queen and the eldest Olympian would know what to do. He realized he was asking a bit much from them, but thought it was for a good cause. Yeah, family was as good of a cause as any. The two Greek immortals could be contacted through prayer, or what passed for prayer. Psychic links were such a complex system that it served as a reminder why he never became a deity himself. While he loved his own followers, he did not need them assaulting his thoughts with praises and senseless requests. As his old friend, Shikamaru would say, it would be troublesome. He already had to curb their tendency to build him and the Biju statues, or come up with holidays, make offerings, start a damn cult. Also that brief phase where they tried to see if sacrifices would please him or Shukaku, who had been ecstatic to see bloodshed in his name. Let's just say spankings at the time were being handed like they were on sale. In any case, the man sipped on his own latte, ignoring the milk mustache that had formed on his upper lip. He closed his eyes and just savored the moment. Yuhu ... a cheerful voice echoed from down the street, making the group turn towards its source. Naruto felt his heart stop for a moment, and the same thoughts he had in their previous meeting resurfaced. "Whoa mama," repeated in his mind before his sun-like eyes shifted to the beautiful Titaness companion. "Oh. Ria had been ecstatic. While it had only barely been a couple of days since she had last met the Uzumaki family, she'd already missed the 2 new additions to her admittedly quite boring day-to-day life. Not to mention the recent news of little Pan, hopefully, being found. While a tad skeptical of the younger Uzumaki's capabilities, he just looked too cute to be dangerous. No matter what the little imp said, she'd give him the benefit of the doubt. Plus his dad did say his son could branch out very well. Uhuhuhu tilde. Regardless of the trouble the two had caused, she was still very much willing to help them smooth things over. So when Naruto had made a sage decision, hey, and contacted her tia with a request to help one of her great-grandbabies, she couldn't simply not get involved, right? So here she was, amidst many gawking men and even some women dolled up in her fall ensemble, consisting of autumn leaves patterned dress that came down to her knees and hugged her more than generous form while teasing a bit of cleavage. Even with only a pair of heeled sandals and a purse to compliment her, she knew she'd nailed the look. Mom, come on, we need to get this issue resolved soon, Hestia said. Ria rolled her eyes at her little girl. Oh hush baby, let your mama strut her stuff a bit. She winked, and swung a bodacious hip to the side, striking a small pose and making a mortal nearby pass out. Her darling daughter had, luckily or unluckily depending on who you may ask, chosen to go out in her 8-year-old form, giving the mother a chance to pick an appropriate wardrobe. As if she'd let her baby dress up like one of those space wizards from Apollo's movies. She couldn't very well show off her little flame like that. A cute summer dress was sure to make her tia be the focus of attention of any doting parent. After all, the score was 0-1 in Naruto's favor when it came to embarrassing their kids. That would not be tolerated. Uhuhuhuhu, I can't wait to see his face and meet the other kiddos, she thought fondly. She had babies to see and cheeks to pinch. Her determination renewed, she marched down the road from her home to the coffee shop a few blocks away, where the man had said he would be. As she came within sight of the place, she could make out Naruto's distinctive blonde hair even among the crowd. He sat at a table with 5 other children around him, all sharing separate treats and engrossed in a conversation. As her eyes briefly roamed his form, Ria hummed appreciatively at what she saw. Wearing a simple orange shirt with a pair of jeans, the outfit displayed his impressive physique. A pair of powerful forearms remained visible, decorated with intriguing flame-like orange tattoos. She remembered only seeing a glimpse of those on his hands and neck back at the dinner but thought nothing much of them. Now, they were oddly appealing, gave him a kind of bad boy vibe she'd heard was all the rage nowadays. She felt her daughter stare up at her and internally scoffed. What, she could window shop? Not like anything had happened anyway. They were pun pals. That's it. Yup. Electing to do something about it, she raised a hand and yelled out. Yuhu tilde tilde, she saw the man perk up and turn, giving her one of his, as she'd come to learn, foxy grins. She lit up, before her eyes scanned the table, looking for the man's son. Seeing a blonde boy sitting next to the man brought her thoughts to a halt. Oh. Zetsu felt as if ice had dropped down the back of his shirt. Oh no. Oh no, she was here. The Uzumaki turned to his father in panic, only to see him gain a serious look on his face. A quick check confirmed the woman had the same look on hers, and both had a twinkle in their eyes that just meant trouble. The blonde man got up, his abrupt movement almost knocking the chair over and gaining the attention of the others. With his hands in his pockets, he started walking towards the Titaness. Ria simply raised her arms to the side in response, in a gesture that might seem inviting but appeared to be provoking. Oh, are you approaching me? The green-eyed woman said with a smug grin. If one were to observe more closely, a shimmering golden aura appeared around the man as he advanced with a steady but powerful stride. A similar, but purplish aura appeared around the woman as the man came to a stop a few feet away, hand flexing menacingly. I can't take pictures of our kids together without getting closer, he answered gravely, unsealing a camera. The Titaness smirked as she pulled out her own device. Hugh tilde then get as close as you like tilde, she answered back challengingly. Zetsu slammed his head on the table. Fuck my life, the Uzumaki thought. Some fluff, some humor, and a JoJo to top it off. Am I overdoing it with the jokes and almost turning this story to a meme? Maybe. Do I care? Not really LMAO. Hope y'all enjoyed the chapter. Also, for the premise, I initially wanted to have it be a continuation of Chapter 7's preview, the Battle of Gyaren no Hankyochi. But I decided to go with Anansi and give a bit of background on him, mixing both his myth and Rearden lore from the Tristan Strong series. I got a wee bit of inspiration from Kuriko, one of my favorite childhood movies and later on, series. It was the tale of a very small but very wise African child who defended his village against an evil sorceress called Karaba. A pretty fun movie to watch as a kid, and has some underlying messages as an adult. P.S. I once again have made a mistake. The last chapter's endnotes have been corrected regarding Kagutsuchi. Also, enjoy a Zetsu scene. Probably one of the last ones. Zetsu Gaiden, The Hunt Quest for Pant Part 3. Quintus was used to the labyrinth being a chaotic place. Albeit it was organized chaos, the kind that made it all the more satisfying to fool intruders and visitors. But this was not the kind of chaos he'd liked. Moments earlier, an intruder had come through one of its entrances. Then another from a second entrance, then another from a third one. As if the metaphorical floodgates opened, an army of beings, all looking similar to the first intruder poured into the giant maze. Now Quintus usually wouldn't have thought anything of it, the labyrinth can comfortably take care of armies that size, even if it was still growing. Except it didn't. These imps were fascinating. They acted as if connected by a hive mind, dividing themselves into equal groups whenever they reached a fork in their road. Traps were useless as the imps proved to have regenerative properties. As for monsters, Quintus expected the ones he had roaming the maze to slow down the army a bit. Maybe lighten their numbers. Imagine his surprise when the imps took on a curious yet sickening strategy to take on their enemies. As if knowing that outright killing the monsters would have them turn to dust, the imps would jump the victim, dogpile it, then force one of their own into its mouth. The victim would bloat out and then explode into dust, revealing one imp had become more. Basically a viral infection, except they also multiplied on their own like bacteria. So biomass was clearly not the only factor in its division. Even one of those could comfortably take on anything in its path, as evidenced by the few that separated from the larger group and eliminated the monsters further into the labyrinth. So, if one were to extrapolate their number from an initial quantity of 7 to 11,000 by using a simple squared multiplication, and taking into account the rate of division with and without consumption of biomass, he would be left with, oh dear. A few thousands. That was fine. Tens of thousands. Still fine. Hundreds of thousands. Not fine. For original. A yell emanated from the army, as more shouts of agreement accompanied it. For a pun less future. Even more excitement stemmed from the invaders. For the horde, a lone cry overshadowed the others. As one, the entire army stopped and turned to a lone individual in the center of it all. Shut the fuck up Z420. They yelled as one. The automaton gulped. This was really not fine. From somewhere close, the spirit of King Minnow snickered. Chapter 20. Boom. The first meteor was met with a small ball of concentrated lightning, the resulting explosion all but vaporizing the falling mountain as the sage, whose tattoos had thickened to envelop his body, prepared another shot. Likewise, his opponent was not idle. The first meteor had been the precursor of the veritable shower that the Jade Emperor had seen fit to bring down on the blonde man. Lord of Vermin, do you understand the concept of devotion? The red-haired deity spoke, his tone dripping with mockery. The sage ignored him as he was more occupied with the projectiles. Just as he began his counterattack, his senses picked up multiple surges of power from the city below him. Dread enveloped his being. In his mind's eye, a slew of golden portals had appeared and from within them emerged an army counting in the thousands, glowing with splendor despite their less than benevolent intentions. Shouts of panic resounded from his people below him, sending a spike of despair into his heart. Zetsu. Protect the citizens. Protect everyone. A scream tore itself out of the man's throat, accompanied by a slew of clones that descended upon the town, intent on saving as many people as possible. The main body meanwhile continued launching attack after attack at the oncoming barrage. His son had come with him today but had relegated himself to people watching in the city's plaza. Fortunately, that put him in the perfect position to answer the obvious invasion, as not even an instant after the order was given, an actual forest of wooden barbs and rocky points emerged from the earth beneath the city, missing every citizen while targeting the invaders. Devotion is not simply an act of worship, or an act of loyalty, it is a strength that only few can inspire. Offering your body to your liege is one thing, trusting them with your very being, whether alive or dead. That is the one thing only a true king could receive from his subjects. The Jade Emperor continued his spiel, even as his troops were stopped in their tracks, skewered by the very soil beneath them, preventing disaster. For a moment, Naruto allowed himself to feel a smidgen of relief, as his focus went back to his enemy. He noticed something startling. Okwang was smiling. Unfortunately for you, King of Savages, the man's smile widened into a vicious grin. I am as true a monarch as they come. He spoke with finality and raised a hand, fingers curled in a particular motion. Naruto's eyes widened, and he rocketed himself towards the god, a large shockwave exploding from his abrupt movement. His body glowed gold, a glowing red Rasengan formed in his palm as he tried with every fiber of his being to reach that madman before he snapped. Krakababoom. The soldiers, be it alive or dead, had blown up, peppering the city with explosions and spreading anguish. Tens of thousands of lives were snuffed like a feeble flame faced with a gust of wind. Okwang. Naruto screamed in rage as his attack met the god's barrier. The Jade Emperor had planned this betrayal, and his vain expression only conveyed this truth. Thus, the first battle of the Heavenly War was in full swing. Assault on Gyaran no Hankyochi. New York, near Washington Square, 29th of September, 2000. Talia never thought she'd ever feel grateful for Beryl Grace's deplorable parenting. But for all her vices, at least the woman was sensible enough not to make her kids go through. Well, this. Click 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 click. Oh Hestia-chan, you little cutie, give me a smile. My adorable little Zetsu tilde, don't be shy tilde. Annie, who's the cutest little blondie? Bahahaha. Hoo 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 hoo. The daughter of Zeus had thought she'd seen enough bizarre things in the last few days. She'd found out the regular guy she'd thought was a super cool karate master was actually some uber powerful karate master who she refused to admit was cool due to her prior experience with so-called benevolent gods. This morning, she'd found out why Zetsu was always such an ass to people. Anyone getting babies at his age would have a grudge against general affection. Now, she was wondering if all super old immortals liked killing their kids' street cred. Zetsu and Hestia being forced into a sailor costume and a puffy dress respectively, then into a photo session. Damn. Talk about just straight up setting your kid up for getting wedgied at school. At least Annie was in normal clothes and didn't seem to mind the attention too much. Hell, she seemed to enjoy being treated like a little kid and lording her superior height over Zetsu, but none of the demigods were brave enough to mention that. The two parents, one of which she'd learned was Hestia's freaking mom, aka her grandma who looked way too young and pretty to be a grandma, were both blushing while taking pictures. Talia darling, come give Nana a big smile. The grandma in question gushed at her and her cheeks colored in response as a shy smile made its way to her face. The very tall lady had made it a point to give each of the children except Grover, who was unconscious in a chair, a hug, an audible kiss on either the forehead or the cheek that had the two older kids blushing like schoolchildren, and pinched said cheeks. It was, sorta, kinda, nice. Click 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 click. Oh, those freckles look so cute on you, Tilda. Did she like the attention? Nah. Nope, not at all. Okay, maybe a little. Just a smidge. Give her a break. She's never had a Nana before. It's not like Luke was any better. He practically looked like a tomato when the tall lady shoved him in those balloons she had on her chest. How did anyone even have? Nope, she wasn't gonna think about this. I know, right, and she's a little soon to boot. The grown-ass man gushed like a gossip girl. Soon what? What did that even mean? Damn it, Mr. Whiskers was ruining her image. Hoo. And look at Luke, what a handsome boy. I can see little Hermie in him. The raven-haired lady gave her 2 cents, making Talia inwardly glad she wasn't singled out. Said son of Hermes looked like he swallowed a lemon at that statement, as if unsure if he should take it as a compliment or an insult. Basically, Makej being edgy. The usual. Mom, can we focus for a second? Aunt Hestia seemed angry if her strained smile was any indication. Zetsu looked like he was 2 seconds away from committing a felony. Yeah, maybe she should put her foot down too. Mr. Whiskers. Nana, can we? She was cut off by a squeal and a hug from the grandmother. Mr. Whiskers. Hoo. That's so adorable, Tilda. Ah, so that's what Luke felt. A warm abyss, with the added bonus of gentle suffocation. Come Ria-chan. Not you too. Mr. Whiskers' voice sounded annoyed. But I think it's the perfect nickname for you. Ria, or Nana as the woman had insisted on being called, answered back with that weird tone of voice that sounded like she was flirting when she really wasn't. What's the word for it? Talia-chan only casts a pass cause she's cute. Oh, she'd show Mr. Whiskers how cute she was by showing him the business end of her spear. Also, she was running low on oxygen, and decided to make that known by tapping the woman frantically. Oh, and I'm not cute, Tilda. Her grandmother didn't seem to notice her struggles. Huh, I mean yeah, you're cute too, but that's different. The man stammered. Different how? Ouch. Thalia. Nana finally let go of the demi-goddess while holding her breast, after the latter decided to use drastic measures. What did she do? Naruto asked curiously, his eyes pointedly avoiding the Titaness's bosom. She bit me. The tall immortal puffed her cheeks, and for a small moment, Talia actually grew afraid of being smited. Smitten. Smote. Whatever gods did to people who annoyed them. Ria seemed to catch her change of expression, and her own face grew from mad to worried instantly, and approached the girl slowly. Talia hated that she flinched a bit. Oh, you poor dear. It's all right, I'm not mad. Her grandmother finally knelt before her and hugged her, much more softly this time. Another smooch seemed to do the trick as Talia's worries faded away and she hesitantly returned the hug. This was nice. Naruto inwardly awed at the scene. Ria was a really good grandma. Damn, it made him wish he had grandkids again. Or nephews. The latter was not probable due to his siblings technically being sexless masses of chakra. They only identified as females due to personal reasons. As for grandkids, well, he technically had some if you count all the mortals he'd taken care of and who started having families of their own, but it wasn't like he was always involved in their lives as much as his immortal kids. Zetsu was like the Biju in a way, a being with simply no need or desire to reproduce. Hell, his boy took it a step further and held a visible disgust towards the act in general. Amaterasu was a beauty queen and an absolute darling, something that moron Izanagi couldn't have seen for some reason. For all of Naruto's desire to be a good father and see his little girl in a happy relationship, it felt like he had to beat perverts away from her with a stick. If that Yomi brat or those other twinks thought their skirt-chasing asses were good enough for his radiant son, then they'd have an easier time getting intimate with his backhand. Quetzalcoatl, thankfully, was less troublesome. While just as pretty as her sister, the only time he'd ever see her want a guy intimately close to her was when she was crushing some poor sod's head with her thighs. Some weirdos seemed to like it though, go figure. As for Maui, While not immortal, the adventurer had lived much longer than the average mortal, and even if the blonde sage had been heartbroken after eventually burying his son, he had made sure the kid had led as full of a life as anyone ever had. He had sailed around the Pacific, fought the good fight, and helped mortals have an easier time on Earth. He'd ended up settling down at some point with a couple of gals and having a bunch of kids. It had been great for a while. He did have to distance himself again at some point, but last he heard, his son's descendants were still somewhere in the islands of New Zealand, and just as rambunctious as their ancestor. Hey, he needed to go there again. But in any case, looking at the Titaness and the demi-goddess still in their embrace, Ria seemed like a natural at taking care of kids. Naruto wasn't going to lie, it was attractive in its own way. A cough interrupted the moment and the two adults turned to see Zetsu with a frustrated look on his face. The sailor hat he was wearing was now crumpled in his hand, while Hestia simply removed the large bow Ria had tied to her hair. Hate to ruin the moment, not, but we gotta move it. Blondie over there's getting antsy, the Uzumaki said while pointing at the demigod in question. Naruto looked at the boy, who had a frown that could give Zetsu's resting bitch face a run for its money. His son was right. He shouldn't play with the poor boy's hopes here by delaying this, even if it meant getting more pictures for the scrapbook. Oh right, Ria spoke while releasing a now relaxed Talia. She quickly got up and made her way to the poor boy who seemed to freeze in place. The Titaness then proceeded to repeat what she'd done with the daughter of Zeus. You poor baby, she cooed. Don't you worry about your mom, we'll fix this, even if I have to twist my little Sparky's ear for permission, she comforted the teen who blushed again at the attention. A kiss to the cheek had the poor boy looking like a tomato. Huh, wait a sec, the sage paused at something she said. Whatcha means Ria-chan, why would we need your kid's permission for this? His statement surprised her and she turned to look at him with a raised brow. Well, we're going to explain the situation to him, introduce you two to him and get things settled. Isn't that why you asked me to come? She asked curiously. Naruto scratched his cheek in confusion. Not really. I wanted one of you to block out my energy signature. Well, most of it anyway, he answered before mumbling something unintelligible under his breath. The two Greek immortals both raised a brow at the statement, thinking it over, before Hestia, realizing what he meant, whirled to face the man, her face furious. Why would you wait? No. Mr. Naruto, you can't just do whatever you want like this. She scolded him. As ridiculous as it looked for an adult to be lectured by a little girl, Naruto stood his ground. Well, it's not really like there's another way, is there? He said with a tilt of the head, and this time Ria was the one to answer. We just need to talk to my son. He'll work it out, she said with conviction. Does she mean Zeus boyo? The man was himself surprised at the notion. The one guy he didn't want to tip off to his presence right now. Or at least before he helped out the kid. Seeing their intention, Naruto elected to argue his point logically. Hestia was 2 seconds away from exploding into an inferno. As calm and patient as she could be, even she had her limits and the two troublemakers in front of her were nearing them. She knew Mr. Naruto meant well, she'd pretty much peered into his soul after all. Zetsu may be less so, but he wasn't as bad as some of the less pleasant members of her family. However, both Uzumakis were really pushing it at this point. Zetsu making that army of his, even if it was for a good cause, was bad enough, but Mr. Naruto messing with curses was basically the equivalent of spitting at the Olympians' authority. The two had already slighted Demeter, Athena, and Hermes in a way. Any further antagonization wasn't going to help anyone. Oh, she fully understood that the father had no obligation to obey them, nor had they any business or probably the capability to try and force them, but no matter how you slice it, the man was sending ripples through their pantheon. Some of them are good for sure, but several are bad as well. She needed to put her foot down, she needed to. Then why didn't Luke's dad ask his dad for a cure? The man asked a simple question in response and the statement had the teens and immortals widen their eyes. What do you? Luke was the one to begin, but the older blonde raised a hand to interrupt him. I might not know much about Message Boy personally, Ria masked a brief snort at the nickname as Hestia glared at her, but I do know from what you two told me that he cares enough about his kid to at least worry about him and his mom. The sage finished his point. The goddess looked aside for a moment. There was a day where my nephew came to speak to my brother, she admitted. I saw them through the hearth and got the gist of their conversation, that's how I know of May Castellan's condition, she explained. The Titaness looked sad for a moment at the information. She was startled when Naruto came and knelt next to her, grabbing her shoulder tenderly. I don't mean to start trouble, Ria-chan. But I do believe in this situation, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. He threw a blinding smile in Titaness's direction. Hestia could have sworn she saw her mother's cheeks flush a bit, but chose to ignore it. That wasn't a can of worms that she was willing to open at the moment. So, she decided to take control of the conversation. Naruto, she drawled with irritation lacing her voice. The man waved a hand dismissively. All right, look, I just didn't want to risk coming out and have to disappoint the kid when King Boyo says no. The statement made the brunette's eye twitch at its nonchalance, but then he continued, since ya know. You got that weird law of non-interference with your mortal kids' lives. What? How did he? That wasn't public knowledge to mortals and many demigods who've yet to reach the camp. Something was off here. Yes, we do, the goddess admitted with a look of intrigue, but how did you even know that? She prodded. The sage shrugged his shoulders before pointing to the person next to her, which happened to be his son. The other Uzumaki took that as his cue to speak. What did you think I spent a month on Olympus for? He shrugged as well. The goddess of the hearth's eye twitched again and she took a deep breath. Alright, he'd done more than drive her sister to hysteria. Wait, so what else did he know? How big was the security breach? How much more do you know? She began grilling him, no pun intended. Zetsu's disguise didn't hide his discomfort at the question and he elected to deflect it. Oh you know. Stuff. What sort of stuff, Zetsu? This isn't a joking matter. The goddess got up in the smaller Uzumaki's face, her narrowed eyes searching for him. Not important, but if I might make the suggestion, you should really have someone fix up the time-space anomaly on 14th Avenue next to the Lords of Greece cafe the Uzumaki supplied. Time-space anum darn it, Hermes. She didn't want to point fingers, but the god of travelers had a bad habit of leaving a door open whenever he came in or out of Olympus. She could forgive it with the excuse her nephew was simply overworked and constantly in a hurry, but if even a foreign entity like Zetsu could find these doors, Hestia did not want to imagine who else could. Before the goddess could make her displeasure known, her mother decided to speak up. I think he's right in a way, Ria admitted with a frown, before she stood up to her full height and looked down at Naruto. As much as I care for my Sparky, I know how stubborn he can be. If Luke's father already tried convincing him, I'm not sure bringing a complete stranger on his doorstep would be better, especially one like Mr. Whiskers here. Oi, the man's voice sounded annoyed at the nickname and Hestia twitched as her dear mother, sire of the Greco-Roman pantheon, blew a raspberry at him. Oh hush you, the raven-haired immortal winked at the sage who frowned at her, before a smirk graced his features. Whatever you say, Big Mama, he grinned at her and jogged ahead with a laugh. The Titaness squawked in shock, hey, are you calling me fat? Get back here you Tilda. With that, she took off after him, laughing good-naturedly. The group looked on at the two laughing immortals. Talia leaned sideways towards Luke, and whispered conspiratorially, think there's something going on between them. The blonde teen deflected the notion, I don't know and I don't care, I just hope they can help Mom. Annabeth chirped in from the other side, hugging onto the teen's midsection. Don't worry Luke, Mr. Naruto'll definitely help her. He's a magic man. The older demi-goddess chuckled at the youngest's innocence and even Hestia cracked a smile, having heard the not-so-silent conversation. Zetsu on the other hand, sighed at the entire debacle and the goddess could sympathize with her fellow immortal. She too felt the urge to put her mother in a child harness. What was it with old immortals and acting so immaturely? With a sigh of her own, she elected to wrangle the two so-called adults, with the demigods in tow. Meanwhile, poor Grover laid in his chair, knocked out and forgotten. Ria was curious for once. It wasn't a very familiar emotion as, given how old and experienced she was, there wasn't much that she hadn't seen. But her new friend's abilities were still an enigma. She could feel the magic energy rolling off him, as suppressed as it was due to some technique he had used, but could not make heads or tails of what he was. He definitely was no god, or any other type of ichor-blooded immortal, and even though he felt like a nature spirit, he was neither satyr, nymph, nor any pantheonic counterpart she recognized. He was an anomaly in a way, a being that made its way to one of the top spots of the totem pole in the supernatural world. There was also the matter of what he'd told her previously, concerning what he needed her to do. Blocking an energy outburst was not something just anyone could do, it could be done through two different methods, masking the energy outburst with a bigger one, thus making it seem like she was the one releasing power, or by creating a barrier that blocked most of the energy and only let out a bit in a way that wasn't suspicious. As confident as she was in her own reserves, she had no doubt someone who even her ex-husband hesitated to fight would dwarf hers. So it came down to option 2, which also brought up a point the man had said. Having stopped running like children minutes earlier, they both elected to walk side by side at a slower pace than average, giving the others a chance to catch up. Mr. Whiskers. Ria grinned as she saw the man twitch at his now official nickname, but then decided to get serious, Naruto. This time, the blonde paused and turned to her with an inquisitive expression, yeah. Whatcha needs Big Mama? Her eyes twitched as well. Damn it. She sighed before deciding to ask what was bothering her. What did you mean when you said we'll be asking for forgiveness here? Are you going to make yourself known? The man hummed before shrugging, unfortunately, if we wanna heal the poor lady, I'm going to have to take drastic measures, and even if you can block most of the signature I'll emit, one or two of your gods would still be able to sense it. What makes you so sure? Can't you suppress it? That seemed like something easy to do for the Titaness. I can, he said while nodding, the issue is that it wouldn't help. Perfect sagehood. The technique I'm gonna use is based on the same system. Gods, used to connect to their domains, and since May Castellan's issue is likely related to her soul, I'm gonna have to use the death domain, the sage explained. So you're saying, the green-eyed beauty trailed off, as the man turned and sent her a wink. Even if I used an infinitesimal amount of energy from that domain, the local death gods are still gonna sense it by the simple virtue of it being used. It's kinda how demigods can be sensed by their parents. He waved his hands to illustrate his point. Ria nodded, digesting the information and eyes narrowing at the implications. So what's going to happen after that? I ain't gonna lie, I originally wanted to just get out without causing any more trouble. Boot. She glared at him at the statement. He better hope he doesn't run or she's going to drag him back by the ear. Oh wait, there's a but tilde hoo tilde there. I ended up deciding to face the music, and besides, he gestured back to the group behind them, pointing back at his son with a thumb. Zetsu's already found your lost little goat, he only needs to bring him back here and I'll do my magic to put him in tip-top shape. He wiggled his fingers and then raised his arms in a gesture of victory. We got our peace offering. Bahahaha. Naruto laughed heartily. Ray sucked in a breath at this development. Pan was found. And he was going to get better. Hishio, that magnificent man. Him and his son. Overwhelmed with happiness at the news, she expressed her joy the only way she knew how to. Chewed tilde. The Titaness skipped ahead, leaving behind a shell-shocked sage. Naruto held a hand tenderly to his cheek, tracing the lipstick mark that now adorned it, as his face flushed red. Ray's cheeks were dusted with a light golden hue. How forward of her. A more Naru Ria fluff. I love writing these dorks. Not much happened in this chapter as I mostly needed a breather for what was to come next. When I said shit was going down, I meant it. The preview here is the first of many. I'm gonna start recounting the major steps of the Heavenly War chapter by chapter, giving everyone a better idea of what went down. Before leaving, have one of the last parts of the Zetsu Gaiden series. P.S. I know it's still 2000 and the song mentioned later came out in 2010, but the meme needed to be made. Zetsu Gaiden, The Hunt Quest for Pan Part 4. Z2 was ecstatic. It had taken the congregation of clones almost a day to pin down the biggest source of natural energy within this maze. But they've done it. Sure, they might have divided a bit over the limit set by original and originals pops. Okay, so they might have overshot that number by a lot. But to be fair, the fact it took 1,480,042 clones to find this Pan guy should get them a pass for once. Maybe, probably, hopefully. The first clone stood in front of a large stone door that emitted a light glow. That was it. He felt a shiver of excitement at the thought of finally accomplishing his mission. He knew he'd get fused back into original, but at the end of the day, that's just how things were. And it's not like they'll be gone, they'll just return home in a way. They were all Zetsu, even if the newer generations tended to be a bit quirky. With that thought in mind, he turned back to the rest of the clones, just as some jazzy music began playing from nearby. I thought I had it all together. But I was led astray the day you walked away. One of the duplicates managed to sneak in a boombox. Go figure. You were the clock that was ticking in my home, changed my state of mind, but love's so hard to find. Z2 ignored the music and channeled some chakra into his voice in an attempt to amplify it. Zetsus and gentle Zetsus, we got him, he said, just as the beat dropped and the clones began cheering. Your feelings changed like the weather. Went from clear to gray on that cloudy day. Alright, that's enough now, Z2 asked with a twitching eye. How can I go on without falling apart? Love's so hard to find when someone's on your mind. Z469952 if you don't turn this racket off right fucking now, he let the threat hang as said clone cut the sound with a pout. With that out of the way, let's go back to our duty. The first clone turned back to the door. The rest stood silently behind him as he approached the structure and pushed. And pushed some more. He adjusted his position and put all his back into it. Nope, the door was still firmly locked. Seeing any amount of force wasn't going to do the trick, Z2 voted to try and wrangle the door open by using chakra. Still no response. Ramming boulders, trees, or even attempting to cut it with a high-pressure water jet didn't seem to do the trick either. Huh. Option dos is a go then. Alright, so it looks like this'll take a bit more effort than one of us can deliver, so we're gonna have to fuse back. Z2 began as he faced the army again, expecting to see them walk towards him in a single file line, as was the reabsorption process. He was surprised, however, to see them standing stock still and looking at him with a grim expression. Guys. A cough emanated from somewhere in the back as Z3 separated from the army and came forward to face the elder clone. About that, we're not going back. Yeah, we decided we liked fighting monsters and eating stuff, so we're probably going back outside to do that. Z3 explained. Z2 looked at the rest of the clones who were all nodding with his junior's words. Oh hell, no. This was just like the Reign of Zetsus incident. Clones down the line began developing as individuals, and it was all the more likely the further the clone was from the original. Not willing to argue any further, Z2 decided to forcefully absorb them by triggering the failsafe implanted in each duplicate. Making the ram seal, he said, well sorry not sorry, you're gonna have to take a rain check on that adventure, we got a job to do. Thus, he channeled chakra and waited for the clones to implode. And waited. Huh, so they figured out how to remove it. Damn. Plan C then. He'd have to use an age-old technique. One so devious, wars had been started over it, one so effective, originals pops had even forbidden its use. Z2 stomped the ground as wood sprouted from it and formed his weapon of choice. With zero regard for his actions and consequences, the clone threw the weapon in the air. "Oh my god, a chair!" one of the duplicates exclaimed. The army of Zetsus paused as they saw a wooden folding chair be thrown in the air, hit a nearby wall, and fall to the ground without harming anyone. Silence loomed for a few seconds. From the back, one clone broke the tension. "I'm mad," and thus, pandemonium erupted. Chapter 21. KRAKAKABOOOOOM. Explosions lit up the sky above the once prosperous city, as the sage and the emperor exchanged blows. Towers of smoke could be seen down on the surface as thousands of newly formed craters littered the area, leaving only death and destruction around them. The only activity permeating the city was the multitude of black figures darting from one point to another, helping whatever survivors they may find. A large piece of rubble was moved away, revealing a worn Zetsu, carrying the heavy load as a humanoid creature crouched on a single leg protectively over a human woman and infant. The Chinese Shansha 1 was only slightly scratched by debris while the two charges seemed unharmed. "Get yourselves to the central plaza, my clones are working on an escape tunnel there and will take you east," the Uzumaki said, ushering the family away. Zyxi, too, the mountain spirit offered a brief bow before carrying who Zetsu assumed was his wife and child and hopping away frantically. KRAKAKAKAKABOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOoooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooooo attacks. The Uzumaki should have known better than to let his father trust the so-called celestial bureaucracy, especially after the Great Chinese Migration to Gyaran no Hankyochi. Thousands of humans and humanoids alike had come in waves and the sage was only too happy to welcome them, not seeing the problems it might lead to. The city itself was made invisible to all but the ones allowed in by Naruto or his family, a precaution pushed by the Bijus who saw the newly built place as vulnerable. The migrants had to be met with a clone of Naruto's or his to allow them in, something the Taoists were not allowed to before today. Initially, they'd sent a few spies who were immediately routed out due to Sage's own empathic abilities. Their relationship had already been strained following his father's battle against Mara in Taoist territory, and the reveal of those spies should have soured that relationship further. But Naruto's ultimate flaw had been his overly forgiving nature, and because of it, their home was in ruins. Zetsu would never hold it against his father, even if he never understood the rhyme or reason behind anyone being so empathetic to others. But now, he needed to focus. He might have split himself a few hundred times over, but that didn't mean he could slack off from his. The green-haired immortal was startled as something lit up in front of him. He barely had the time to recompose himself before quickly jumping away, barely avoiding an icicle in the shape of a spear from impaling him. He looked up and saw a figure emerge from the light. The attacker was a god, that much was obvious, one that Zetsu, while not being very familiar with, at least knew the name of. "You," the Uzumaki said with a snarl, gearing himself up for a fight. "Bukusai. 3, the Taoist deity said with a clap of his dainty hands, "A vermin knows my name." "Chiguai. 4, the white-haired man exclaimed in a cheerful tone, swaying from side to side like a child. Despite his action and very childlike features, Zetsu did not let his guard down for a second. HMM. I usually won't bother myself with such barbarism, but pest extermination is a good sport." The god titled his head to the side in a somewhat cute fashion, smiling widely, if not creepily at the greenet. The Uzumaki huffed as he began molding great amounts of chakra, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You're talking a lot of shit for a guy in a dumb dress," he rebuffed the white-haired god. The Taoist's smile became strained, and his eyes flashed in fury. "And you're being quite out of line." Yi 5, the effeminate man spoke venomously as an array of ice weapons formed behind him, hovering in a large circle and poised to strike. Zetsu shifted his fingers into claws and elongated his feet, adopting a form more adept for speed. While emotionless on the surface, a storm of emotions raged within him, for despite his own talent and skill, he hoped any of his family would come to assist him soon. This was, after all, the Jade Emperor's middle child, the Lord of Storms, War, and Medicine. One of the celestial bureaucracy's vanguards, the second crown prince of Nadak. Lot 6. Assault on Gyaran no Hankyochi, Part 2. The Great Labyrinth, 29th of September, 2000. Above the many walls of the labyrinth, a falcon soared, performing impressive aerial maneuvers in an attempt to dodge a large black mass that seemed intent on knocking it out of the air. "I have to get away," the bird thought frantically, veering to the right as a tree-sized tentacle almost slammed into him. Pan typically presided over the wild, which very well included the aspect of primal fear, bestial instincts, and several more elements of the world's flora and fauna. In the distant past, the god was not averse to using this particular dominion of his to induce fear in his opponents, or at the very least trigger their fight or flight instincts and make them predictable. He'd rarely, if ever, felt that fear himself, and yet, going by the shivers racking his unstable physical form, that was the only logical deduction he could reach. He'd been born long after the two great wars most Olympians had been involved in and had never truly felt threatened by anything other than his looming fate. Said fate was the reason he had chosen to seclude himself in an unexplored part of the Carlsbad Caverns here in New Mexico, away from most mortal cities and away from his own family. It had broken his heart to leave them, especially his father in the dark, but he could not bear to disappear in front of them after witnessing the aftermath of Helios and Selene's fading. Thus, he'd isolated himself in this sanctuary, where the remainder of his power could be contained as he bided his time, even if some bursts of energy kept getting leaked to the labyrinth every once in a while. He'd hoped to pass away quietly, maybe even pass on the torch to anyone worthy that managed to find him. Not this. Not to be chased like prey in his last moments. The day had started so well too. Pan had been petting the last family of Smilodons he'd managed to save and care for before he felt something bang on the passage to the labyrinth. His instincts had screamed at him to block the entryway, that whatever laid on the other side had nothing but malicious intentions for him. Thus, he'd channeled a majority of his power into blocking the stranger's attempts to invade his sanctuary. That bang was followed by several others before they stopped and silence replaced their noise. Then, loud shouts rang out followed by what can only be described as these them awful recordings of human massacres his Uncle Ares loved listening to. The sound of flesh being torn, sliced, crushed, eaten was heard. Oh, Gaia, whatever was out there was something he did not want to meet. His body had begun twitching by then, his physical form almost glitching as it struggled to maintain itself. It would take hours after the initial banging for the cacophony of death and suffering to stop. Then, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The lack of noise somehow sapped away at the hope Pan was. The god had no time to shout in surprise as black tendrils emerged from the cracks in the passageway shaking it incessantly before, like water bursting from a dam, the entire entrance blew up, letting a mass of something enter the cavern violently. The god of the wild had to thank his instincts for allowing him to dodge swiftly, his form shifting automatically to a more nimble one. As a golden goat, he jumped off a nearby wall and ricocheted off another, luring his predator away from the entrance to the cavern. He had attempted to go out to New Mexico, and despite the fact it would contradict his earlier goal, it would still be a better option than to fall to that. That thing. Said thing seemed to predict his intention and block the exit to the outside world with its huge body. Within the black mass, a pair of yellow dots zeroed in on the god as more tendrils flew in his direction, attempting to snatch him out. The deity, now in the form of a small hummingbird, managed to maneuver himself around the attacks, aiming instead for the entryway to the labyrinth, now wide open. Oh no you don't, a gnarly voice echoed from the mass. Pan felt a pulse of energy cover the sanctuary, as a veritable forest erupted from the ground. The walls, everywhere. A spire of wood almost clipped his wing as the god mentally thanked his father for passing down some of his great speed onto him. His reflexes went into overdrive and his eyes squinted in an attempt to peer between the branches. His flight had long since broken the sound barrier, so much so that he could see everything around him begin to seem slower. He could see it in the distance. The passage to the labyrinth, while being blocked by a wall of thick wood, still had a small space. It was close, oh so very close, but he'd made it. He was free-ish, for now. His hunter was still on his heels and he needed to find a way out. He could call for help if he went anywhere in the US. His father, anyone would answer. Forget them seeing him die. It was still a more honorable death than this. The maze of the labyrinth usually had charms that prevented cheating. Something a falcon would definitely be doing simply by flying, and something anyone not divine would definitely regret. Good thing his ichor was still golden and pumping. The literal bird's eye view that the god was enjoying at the moment allowed him to spot multiple exits from here, and he simply had to choose one. Just had to find the right one. Get your ass down here. His hunter screamed at him. He dared not turn around and instead focused his energy on a high-speed dive towards the nearest exit. He would be saved. Woods of Connecticut, same time. So this is it, huh? Nice crib, the blond man's voice cut through the palpable tension that had enveloped the group in the last few minutes. They had taken their time across the state, and Rhea had even gone so far as to summon a few lions for the group to ride. Naruto had cooed at the big balls of fluff and made the Titaness promise to summon them later so he could thoroughly pet the big cats. Annie and Talia had the time of their lives while Luke had simply felt like a big ball of negative emotions the entire trip. But now that they were here, the boy's mood had become somewhat contagious, as even the sage began to think of his next steps. Still, though, he needed to boost the mood a bit. It really is. Secluded just enough for some peace and quiet, with a great view to boot. Tia dear, remind me to ask little Hermie for some real estate advice when we get back. I could use another summer home. The Titaness waved over at her daughter, who simply sighed at her antics. Mom, you already have a villa in every state and a few dozens in Europe, Hestia said exasperatedly, only to receive a pout in return. Ah pooh, you can never have too many man caves. The statement drew a booming laugh from the man of the group while the rest sans Annabeth groaned. Said man was currently walking closely next to her while carrying a still passed out satyr with him. They eventually remembered to get the poor boy. Bahahaha, man caves, oh that's good Rhea-chan. The whiskered man smacked the taller immortal on her back, startling the Titaness and making her frown at him. Her eyes then narrowed and a mischievous smirk graced her features. Naruto yelped suddenly and almost dropped his charge as he felt a pinch on his buttock. He whirled around with a red face to look at his fellow parent, only to see her sticking her tongue out childishly. Oh, she wanted to do this. Cheeky one aren't you, big mama? The sage smirked despite his blushing complexion while the Titaness gaped at him before narrowing her eyes challengingly. "And just what exactly did you find so big about me, Mr. Whiskers?" she said, prompting the man's eyes to widen and his face to resemble a tomato. Rhea saw this and grinned. "Oh, could it be that the big bad sage has a sweet tooth? It's the only reason you'd be eyeballing such a big cake," she purred, leaning towards him. By now, the man was sputtering denials and waving his free hand frantically while the taller immortal tittered at his reaction, her cheeks colored a golden hue. Meanwhile, Hestia and Zetsu, who were behind them, both raised a hand to their faces in shame. Annabeth, who was walking next to Talia, tugged on her sleeve, making the demi-goddess turn to her. The little girl blinked innocently at the teen and asked with a curious tone, "Why are they talking about butts?" Talia's face reddened a bit and her eyes swiveled to the two immortals bantering ahead while Luke scowled beside her. Luke was anxious. Again. It seemed quite a common feeling for him nowadays. He unconsciously knew there were a lot of risks with what he was doing. He was essentially trusting a monster or god or whatever thingamajig Mr. Naruto was to do something extremely personal to him. His great-grandmother and great-aunt's presence did alleviate his worries somewhat, but he still felt like this could blow up in their faces. Especially since Mr. Naruto was apparently trespassing here and had issues with the gods on Olympus. Luke wasn't an expert in criminal justice, but even he could tell they wouldn't end well if the man was found out helping them. Would he, Annie, and Talia be guilty by association or something? That was the boy's biggest fear. That, and meeting his mother again. He didn't want to imagine how much her condition had worsened. As they came up to his childhood home, the boy felt tense in preparation. He then felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see his best friend next to him with a worried expression. "Hey," she whispered softly, "you okay, man?" The blonde demigod felt a lump in his throat. Was he okay? Fuck no. There were so many things that could wrong. Hey, Talia's voice brought him out of his musings and he felt her squeeze his shoulder reassuringly. "I know this might sound stupid, but I have a feeling it'll work out. Plus you got Nana and Aunt Hestia here and they're cool," she told him and tilted her head to the side, pointing in front of them. When he looked ahead, he saw the brown-haired goddess look back at him with a soft smile while Zetsu, now in his true form, peeked at him from the side before grunting. This earned him a smack on the shoulder from a frowning Hestia. In front of everyone, the two eldest immortals were still bickering, with the Titaness now poking at the sage's sides with both hands while he lightly slapped her hands away from him. A soothing warmth washed over him, either from Hestia or Ray's doing, or just the silliness of the entire situation. Yeah, maybe it'll work out. With renewed determination, the boy marched ahead to the small house and went to the door. He paused before knocking and looked back at everyone else. He could see Talia and Annie giving him a supportive thumbs up, while Hestia smiled pleasantly and Zetsu gave a half-hearted wave of the hand. Naruto and Rhea seemed to have stopped bickering and looked at him with a nod and a warm smile. The boy exhaled and straightened his back. "It's now or never," he whispered and knocked on the door. Rhea had never met May Castellan, and while she did believe first impressions were important, she also realized the woman's situation and thus made sure to temper her judgment. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for the dureness of the poor woman's issue. White frazzled hair, a dress patched together haphazardly, and a frame comparable to a scarecrow. She saw her pair of cloudy gray eyes swivel to the young demigod at the door, before they snapped open in recognition. "Luke," she screamed, making the boy flinch but stand his ground as the thin woman enveloped him in a deceptively strong embrace. The Titaness didn't need to be an empath to sense the boy's discomfort, the sight itself was bittersweet in a way. A mother and son reunited yet under such troublesome conditions. Well, better help the family. She felt her companion's hand clamp down on her shoulder and turned to him, only to have the satyr shoved into her arms. She raised a brow but didn't protest, seeing the serious expression that suddenly overcame the man's face. Naruto walked steadily but carefully towards the parent and child at the door, treading as though he was tracking a deer, and finally came up to them. Poor May didn't seem to notice him, too engrossed in hugging the lungs out of her child. Seeing as her grip wouldn't let up, the man did something strange. Rhea raised a brow as she saw a puff of smoke cover both him and the boy, obscuring them briefly before disappearing to show the two had switched places, albeit the man was now slouching slightly. How odd. The woman didn't seem to notice the change of frame and continued her embrace, even as the sage straightened his back and subsequently raised her body off the ground, letting her hold herself up by the taller man's neck as he walked inside the house. The black-haired immortal shrugged at the strange method, refraining from teasing the man. For now. She adjusted little Grover and held him under an arm like a large sack, then walked in after the whiskered man, only to immediately recoil as the smell of burnt cookies, moldy bread invaded her nostrils. The rest of the group wasn't faring much better, Zetsu and Annabeth even going so far as to pinch their nose while Talia and Hestia covered their lower faces with their shirt and some fabric respectively. When Rhea saw the rest of the house, she internally swore to give both her son and grandson a piece of her mind. She could forgive the latter since he at least tried to do the minimum for his family, but little Sparky will be getting his ear twisted off for this. She didn't know what excuse he gave Hermes to keep the god from helping his lover, but if she had to guess, it was the same old, respecting the divine laws, he always went on about. Which would be fine if those same laws weren't practically pissed upon whenever one of her sons wanted to. She heard her daughter whisper in sadness as she looked at the desolate state of the house. It was a good thing they came when they did. Who are you? Where's Luke? Luke. Ria heard the woman scream from the other room. She quickly put down her charge in a chair and came in to see Naruto holding the woman down on a strangely new-looking chair. Lady, I'm gonna need you to calm down. It's okay, I'm a friend, the man tried to say softly only to feel Mei struggle more in his grasp. The woman's son rushed in after the Titaness, his face distressed as he saw the sight. That same face became angry when the sage blew something in the woman's face, letting her struggle cease as she fell back in the chair. What did you do to her? The blonde boy yelled and took out his golf club even as his hands trembled. Naruto turned to them and Ria was surprised to see the serious, almost cold look he adopted. He turned back to the woman and adjusted her position, putting her in a more comfortable one before turning back to the angry teenager. Relax my boy, I just put her to sleep, I didn't hurt her. Calm down, he spoke to the demigod. Luke clamped his mouth shut and hesitantly approached the man, only to be stopped by his raised hand. Sorry Luke, but for this to work safely I'm gonna need you to wait for me with the others, his words made the boy tense before he continued. Besides I'm gonna need you in one place, I and Zetsu are gonna be taking you to camp soon, you kids are gonna need to be there anyway, he explained, making Titanus wonder what he meant by that. Would they not be safe? Alright, Hades could come, or Thanatos. She still didn't understand what the man meant earlier but didn't ask about it as now was not the time. What do you mean? Aren't you going to heal my mom? You said so. The boy protested, only to pause as he heard the man chuckle lightly. Hey, gods ain't the only ones who can be in two places at once, ya know. What Ria saw next only added to her growing pile of questions. She saw a puff of smoke appear next to the man, revealing a copy of him. She had to fight down a blush when the clone took off his shirt, revealing his muscular and tattooed torso as the original came to face him with a glowing finger. Said finger then drew a strange rune-like inscription on the clone's abdomen, then the sage put his hand on the rune, making the clone glow before the latter to raise secret disappointment put the shirt back on. The copy then went to the other room where the demigod sat waiting, while 4 other copies that popped into existence went outside the house. Naruto then gave her a thumbs up, a wordless signal that prompted her to fetch her daughter, so they can both focus their power on cloaking the man. They briefly felt a pulse of power from outside, before their eyes snapped open at the original who seemed to release whatever he had suppressed his own signature. Gone was the slightly stronger than a nature spirit man, and in his place stood a titan, pun unintended as much as Ria wanted it to be. That was the only way to explain the unbearable pressure that almost brought the mother and daughter to their knees. Ria saw the man raise his hands, clasping them in prayer. Then, what she felt was indescribable. Somehow, someway, for a single instant, she could sense her entire family standing in the man's place, as if someone were to fuse the entirety of Olympus into one being. Hell, she sensed herself in his place too. The signature shifted to one closer to her son and his own subordinates. He couldn't be. Could this be what he meant? Were these domains? She thought incredulously. She saw his lips move, uttering a word she could not hear, almost completely overtaken by the focus she gave her task. Then, Naruto did something even more shocking. He shoved a hand through Mei Castellan's chest. Naruto entered perfect sagehood. To him, and only him, everything disappeared, replaced with the same void he had spent several millennia in, the same colored orbs from before appeared all around him. Domains. It truly never ceased to amaze the man, how something so beautiful could exist. Perfect sagehood was less a physical state and more of a spiritual one. Domains existed in a void beyond the known universe, in what was known as the One Above All's realm. Through many millennia of meditation, he had been able to reach into that realm, essentially attaining what Buddhists call enlightenment. The capacity to become one with everything. To harness the ability of all domains in existence. It had its limits, however, as hard as that was to believe. For one, it all depended on the One Above All's will. The big boss could cut him off at any moment and there wouldn't be a damn thing he could do about it. Then again, seeing as he allowed so many immortals to bond with domains, maybe he was just being lenient. God only knows, and he wasn't about to question the one being who could blink him out of existence. With a wordless command to one of the domains, one that flickered white and gray, and gave off a cold feeling, a tendril of energy emerged from the orb and hit him, engulfing his body in a shining aura of the same color. This was it. Death, he muttered as he came out of his trance. It all happened in a few seconds. He could usually do it instantaneously, but he had to try a bit more to prevent any surplus of energy from leaking out. He was already painting a target on his back for this Pantheon's death gods, he did not need the rest of Olympus on his ass right now. It was why he'd made his clones, for to perform a stronger variation of the 4 violet flames formation he'd created, one that didn't burn anyone who touched it and merely provided an almost impenetrable wall fueled purely by his reserves, one that he also made a single reinforced clone in the event one of the death gods came snooping and he needed a distraction. It's not that he couldn't fight them himself, but if he was right about Mei Castellan's issue, then this was gonna be one ugly sight. With that said, he shoved his hand in her chest, his limb passing through without hurting her while he grabbed something from within. With a pull, Naruto's suspicions were confirmed. Oh my god, the sage grimaced at the sight of the poor woman's soul. Or the abomination it had become. He could faintly hear the other two ladies in the room gasp in shock at the spectacle as well. The best way to describe the soul was to compare it to a Picasso painting. A second, green-colored soul had obviously attempted to bond or fuse with the first, to little success. Naruto gained a serious look, and raised his other hand, making the motion of someone holding a pen or in this case, a scalpel. With a lick of his lips, he brought the soul closer and began putting pressure on the merged parts of the amalgamation. It was like removing a tumor, as crude as it sounded. You had to cut the invading soul out. This was gonna take some time. Minutes passed before he was interrupted by his son's distinct footsteps coming up behind him. Not now, Zetsu. I'm busy with this. He didn't take his eyes off his work, not willing to let the boy speak for once. Whatever it is, it can wait. Boom. The entire house shook briefly, as an explosion came outside, startling everyone as shouts came from the other room. Dark, dead and gloomy must have come, huh? The blonde thought with a groan. He needed more time, and some peace and quiet. If you mean that Hades guy, my clone got him covered, don't worry, he attempted to reassure the greenette, unknowingly butchering the god of the dead's name. The sage couldn't see his son, but he knew the boy was wincing at his statement. It's actually had never mind that. The younger Uzumaki became more agitated, worrying the others in the room. We've got a bigger problem. My clones found Pan, that's nice, he said, at least that was some good news, now to get back to. And he went rogue. Goddammit, why did he have to jinx himself? That's not nice. Venezuela, same time boom. An explosion erupted as a sinkhole formed in the earth from it. From within the abyss, a golden falcon came swooping through, angling itself to fly more easily and soaring away from the hole. Seconds after that, a black hand, as large as a small house emerged, followed by a building-sized arm. With the arm came another, and then a green head of hair with similar proportions came out, revealing a Zetsu that, after standing up, could comfortably be compared to the Empire State Building. The giant raised a fist, shifting it into a series of spikes before launching them at his prey below, causing naught but destruction in the area in front of him. Z2, or Giga Zetsu as he'd taken to calling himself, had come out victorious from the clones' brief civil war. While his older juniors fought amongst themselves and attempted to take out the stronger obstacles first, he'd gone the opposite route and targeted the younger generations. This had allowed for an exponential rise in both chakra and biomass, letting Z2 overtake the others in the end. It's not like there was a stray clone that escaped either. An advantage of the original's cloning process was the mind link that was shared with all the duplicates, allowing any of them to find one another. No Zetsus left behind. However, a key development had occurred in that brief period. Due to the sheer speed in which the rogue clones had been consumed, their feelings of rebellion had remained within the larger body. Slowly, but surely, Giga Zetsu had become overwhelmed by these feelings, and his mind was gradually chipped away until the giant found himself consumed by rage and the desire to do what he did and loved doing the most. Eat. All he wanted was to find that annoyance that had led him on a wild goose chase across the continent, be rid of it, then ensure his continued existence by taking original out of the picture too. I'm going to enjoy this, ziahahaha. The giant laughed, flexing his feet before taking off in a run after his prey, making the earth shake in his wake. He could feel the little, godling's, fading signature. It was weak, but still very noticeable, and going further south. The giant clone briefly wondered why his prey would choose to go the opposite direction of the Greek pantheon, before realizing just what was in their current direction and speeding up to catch up to the little god. Because if he reached the Amazon, not only would he get a boost in power, he'd be entering her domain. Oh, hell, no. With but a thought, Giga Zetsu's next step sunk him into the ground with the latter's consistency shifting and almost rippling like water. A few steps hid the clone's body and allowed it to practically swim through the earth. Mayflight was the original's favorite technique. It was the ultimate spying tool that allowed the user to pass through the hard earth and any type of flora like going through water. While nowhere near as fast as teleportation, it served its purpose well. That being, in this case, a boost in speed, stealth, and closer contact with the surrounding forest's root system. The giant poured a large amount of chakra into his surroundings, using wood release and earth release to the best of his ability. On the surface, a ripple went through the forest, momentarily quieting the chatter of the various animals inhabiting it, before the large trees peppering it blew up in size, twisting and turning like snakes and making their way upwards towards the god-turned-falcon. Pan once again proved his great talent for aerial maneuvering, dodging the wooden tendrils' attempts at ensnaring him with minimal effort and increasing his speed. Even when the land below him began acting like an ocean in a thunderstorm, ever moving and violent, he continued on a straight path south. Before the two knew it, they had already reached Brazil and gone straight into the heart of the Amazon, and knowing just whose toes he'll be stepping on soon, Giga Zetsu became more desperate. Trees, boulders, even coming up to throw the occasional wind release, drilling air bullet and its water release equivalent. All in all, it was complete chaos and the clone was leaving naught but destruction in its wake. So much so that a half-mile wide canyon had formed behind the two immortals. In the end, it took a dozen more minutes before the giant felt like he had gotten a good grasp on the avian god's patterns, even if they tended to be a bit erratic to the outside observer. A few more projectiles to the east, 30 degrees off north, and a few bullets down south. AAANNNNDD. Gotcha, bitch. The giant exploded out of the ground, propelling himself briefly at supersonic speeds as he clapped his hand around the fleeing god. Ha! Pan shouted back, in a rare moment of confidence as he dodged the two palms. Unfortunately for him, he was not prepared for a cloud of green dust to erupt from the impact, as if the giant crushed a bag of flour in his hands. The god inhaled the dust on reflex and coughed as it enveloped him, before resuming his flight as Giga Zetsu fell back to earth. The ground shook on impact and a giant dust cloud obscured the supersized immortal. Pan continued to fly, even as a black substance began growing on his feathers. A smile suddenly bloomed on Giga Zetsu's face. Hey, spores for the score, the giant thought gleefully as his prey began to slow down as the black substance on his body took form, showing a small Zetsu clone. The clone proceeded to immobilize the god mid-flight and made the two take a dive down. Luckily for Giga Zetsu, he had the foresight to put his hand out, catching the two in his palm, where they began to sink into the black flesh, the smaller clone even getting absorbed back into the bigger one's body. Helm MMFF. Pan attempted to call out, only for the flesh around him to move and block his mouth. As the giant's Glasgow mouth formed into a large grin. Hey, like original says, a meal worked for as a meal best enjoyed. Ziahahaha. The clone's malicious laughter only increased the god's struggles. Finally, the god shifted his form, using some of his now minuscule reserves in a brief transformation. The difference in size briefly made enough space for him to scream, and he took the opportunity with gusto. Heal LPPPP. This made the clone's yellow eyes widen in momentary panic and glance around before refocusing on his captive and becoming angry. Oh, you little bastard. That's it. Giga Zetsu shoved his hand in his mouth, taking a bite of the entire limb for good measure. Before he could swallow, a dreadful sound froze him in his steps. Rumble. The sound of thunder made the clone look up at the black clouds covering the sky rapidly. Damn it, it was either the Zeus brat or her. His eyes widened in panic as he saw the source of his worries. Something was jumping off the cumulonimbus at great speeds, zigzagging in the sky and creating booms of thunder with each bounce. Just as he narrowed his eyes and clenched his teeth in preparation, swallowing his prey as the figure landed on a cloud before jumping off it, leaving a sky-parting shockwave behind it as it seemed to take the form of a serpent made of lightning. Here it comes. Nothing could prepare Giga Zetsu for the power of the strike. Even as he lifted a portion of the land as a makeshift shield, the attacker all but shattered the hasty defense and landed a powerful dropkick on his upper abdomen, one that sent the giant reeling and caused him to reflexively open his mouth, spitting out his captive in the process. Pan, drenched in saliva and what he feared was stomach acid, gave a surprised yelp as he saw the green-haired monster fly back. A small glowing figure could be seen on their body, before it jumped off again in the god's direction, snatching him by his midsection and falling back to a nearby tree at the edge of the destroyed patch of the jungle. The god landed in the stranger's arms just as their glowing subsided, revealing he was being carried like a princess by none other than, oh Gaia. Pan gulped, at the face of his positively enchanting female savior. He was no shameless womanizer like many of his family members, but damn if he didn't feel himself become flustered at the blonde-haired woman in skimpy clothing holding him. Oh, you poor Nino Tilda. You must have been so afraid of that bully, yes. Pan sat speechless in the goddess' arms because she was clearly too beautiful to be anything else. His face slowly gained a golden tint as his eyes did their best not to linger at the criminally small poncho that barely covered her modest chest. Aside from her appearance, the god was also surprised at the great amount of power he could sense from her. By Poseidon's beard, it's like standing in the presence of one of the big three. He almost panicked, only held back by the fact his body was only anchoring itself to the physical realm by a thread. He'd spent too much power and would need to recuperate, if only by drawing some power from the Amazon. The goddess blinked down at him before she abruptly jumped down to the base of the tree, setting the fading god down so he could concentrate on gathering some energy and extend his life. His focus was stolen as the woman bent over him, looking down at him. He tried not to let his eyes wander and focused on her face, idly noticing her lower lip was pierced. She then abruptly stood up and grinned, flexing her right arm in a heroic pose. Pan tried to, once again, prevent his eyes from wandering down the goddess' exposed midriff, down to a pair of the most powerful thighs he's seen on anyone. With a golden blush, he adjusted his legs, lest his savior become aware of a rising problem. Luckily, the goddess was too taken with her climactic moment. But there's no need to worry anymore. Why? Because Big Sis Quatsi is here. Chapter 22. Kurama. Bro. Come in. Boom. Oi Fuzzbit. I need you. Yuki. Son. Saiken. Anyone. KRAKABOOM. Guys. Where the fuck are you? Shut the fuck up whelp. We're dealing with our own shit. What? Brother Kurama means we're facing our own opponent. Try to hold out, alas as much as I hate to admit it, that foul beast is mightier than even I. We know son, we're all trying to kill it, Bao. What the hell do you mean? Or you all dogging one guy? Shouldn't you sense it? I'm a bit busy right NAWWWW. Close shave. But no, whatever it is, there's nothing there. You're fighting a ghost. Ghost. Schmost. Whatever the fuck it is, it's eating our bijudamas like fuck. ISOBU. KRAKABOOOOM. The hell happened? You guys okay shit? One of the bastard sons after Zetsu. What? Who's the dead motherfucker after my nephew? Kokuo. Calm down, Zetsu channel handle this, he's a smart boy. Naruto. You better not let what's his name harm a hair on Z-chan's head. KRAKABAAAOOOOM. About that, I'm kind of busy too. Oh, are you kidding me? Arden's here too. Naru bro. Sorry. I'll try to make it if I can, but right now we're CHOMEI. Less talking and more blasting. That pile of shit almost ate your brother. Calm down Mata sis. I got this. BABABABAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA versus wanting me like a bunch of, Fine, got it, kick that thing's ass guys. I need you ASAP, hi. Assault on Gyaran no Hankyochi, Part 3 Connecticut, 29th of September, 2000. Hades felt at home in the darkness. It was a nifty domain, among the most versatile ones out there. From travel to stealth to fighting, its potential uses were as vast as his imagination. One aspect of which manifested itself in shadow travel. While not as fast as teleportation, the technique helped him avoid detection. Pair that with his infamous helm and he was practically a ghost to anyone that couldn't feel him out like his mother and sister. Speaking of them, he'd need to visit them again. As much of an outcast as he was, they and his own wife were probably the most tolerable people in his life, even with his status in the underworld. The job came at least with its perks. Access to nigh limitless riches, endless servants, and his own slice of paradise where he needn't be bothered by all the useless squabbles and idiocy his blood relatives enjoyed getting into. As he said, perks. Perks that he'd felt being breached only minutes before. He had been in the middle of a delightful lunch with Persephone when he'd felt a tug at his spirit, one that took a portion of energy from something he and his subordinates used exclusively. On this side of the world at least. It would have been understandable had it been one of his children, but Nico and Bianca were more than 2,000 miles away from the signature's position and he'd know if Melino was doing anything. It wasn't Thanatos either, and he doubted his subordinate had the time to have demigods of his own. So that left him with the last option. Some fool was using his domain. Worst of all was, from what he could sense, they were trying to meddle with one of his curses as well. He took that personally. With a quick excuse to his confused lunchmate and a rapid change of wardrobe, the Lord of the Underworld went on the offensive. The god wasn't taking any chances, especially since, when he arrived, he was met with a most bizarre sight. A large glowing purplish cube enveloped a house on the side of a cliff in Connecticut, and from the looks of the 4 individuals sitting at each bottom corner of the cube, it was a barrier of sorts. He knew that house. It was only natural after all, one of the poor sops he'd cursed lived here, his twinkle-toed nephew's little flame. It was unfortunate what happened to her, but was it his fault Castellan sought after something that wasn't and would never be hers? No. Did he feel bad about it? Not really. So, still cloaked under his helm's field, he walked forward to inspect the barrier closer. He'd already tried to shadow travel or even teleport inside, but strangely enough, that purplish energy seemed to prevent that. Looking at the 4 sources of the techniques, he was again surprised by their resemblance to each other. Clones. Is the user a mage or a god? The level of power he'd felt suggested something stronger than a monster, yet it was too weak to be divine. In any case, the only conclusion Hades arrived at from the entire situation was that this was not a Greek entity, or at least not one known to the Olympians. Ergo, a very likely enemy. If that were true, there was only one reason for whoever that is to be at the failed oracle's house and using the god's abilities. Hades narrowed his eyes as the pieces slowly fit into place. The stranger was obviously after the oracle of Delphi's soul, and as much as the lord of the underworld despised Apollo's mouthpiece, she was still a vital instrument to the pantheon. For now at least. So, not wanting to bring attention to himself from Olympus whilst aiming to stop whatever was happening inside, Hades decided to opt for a more hands-on approach. The god gripped his bidet, his hand coiling a bit lower than the weapon's head, and raised his arm in preparation for a mighty swing. The stance would look strange to the outside observer, yet the god's brothers would attest to how devastating such a simple melee attack could be. He pushed off the ground, cracking it through sheer strength and catching the attention of the clones. When he neared the barrier, swung down his weapon, lightening his grip all the while to make his hand slide down the pole, building up both range and momentum. The weapon still invisible to the clones made contact with the barrier. Boom. The entire cliff shook at the impact, dust and debris flew up in a blinding haze, as cracks began to form in the limestone. Inside the house. Rogue. How can a clone go rogue? Rhea pondered before her eyes lit up in realization. Oh, is that like that Star Trek show? She asked from where she stood, still emitting her cloaking field. Star Wars, Zetsu absent-mindedly corrected and rubbed his arm as he thought over the best way to explain this rapidly. Is that the one with the little wizard boy? Naruto's curious question was ignored by his son. Hestia, who was also concentrating her energy, creased her delicate eyebrows in a frown, which looked adorable on her childish face. Is that why you took down Zetsu? She turned to Zetsu, referring to the clone she'd met, the one who had sought her protection. Naruto continued working on his patient, while Zetsu sighed at the two questions. Not taken down, took in. They technically all have a part of my soul. They're all me, but also tend to want to be their own people if you leave them alive long enough, he elaborated before turning to admire his father's handiwork. A tenth of the woman's soul was already free of the green specter, but it looked like the process would take some time. Boom. That they did not have. The barrier was nigh impenetrable, but every hit struck to it drained the clone's chakra further. It didn't help that he didn't create those clones with much chakra to begin with. As much as he trusted Ria and Hestia to help him, being ready for the worst was a must at this point. What are we gonna do about this? Zetsu voiced his worries. Another explosion rocked the house and made the Titaness stumble slightly. Mr. Whiskers, you got something? She asked, tone filled with worry. Naruto kept his eyes on the soul in front of him, but one could practically see the gears turning in his head. The man licked his lips in thought and briefly closed his eyes to concentrate. Boom. The explosions were getting worse. Rei's kid must have gotten wise to his intentions. Zetsu, before your clone went rogue, were you able to get an idea of Pan's state? He finally spoke up, making his son scratch his head in thought. I did, the Greenette said. And the sage prodded with impatience. Zetsu smacked his lips. He's fading, he admitted, then added, fast. The two Greeks widened their eyes in alarm. What? They both exclaimed in shock and worry. The sage exhaled deeply at the news. Ah, damn it, I thought we had more time, he spoke then, addressing the goddess. Hestia, is there any way you can keep the kid anchored to this plane? He asked. Hestia seemed to think, even as she kept up the cloaking magic, before nodding resolutely. So long as the hearth never falters, so will Olympus. I believe the same applies to our children, but I do not know if I can do anything more than physically force his body to stay together. I'll have to be there at all times, she said with a small frown. A sly grin traced Naruto's face at this, something the Titaness picked up on. Ya know, I just thought of a joke, he said while barely suppressing his chuckles. I guess you could say, he started. Ria, who either read his mind or simply clicked with him, continued. Home is where the hearth is. Both adults started cackling. Bahahaha. Hoo. Tilda. Pop's mom, come on. Their children made their annoyance known. After quieting down, the man hummed to himself, all right. I think I know what to do, he nodded to himself, before shouting, Oi. Naruto. The reinforced clone poked his head back into the room. Get the kids to huddle close, then get ready to distract the edgelord outside. His statement drew a frown from the latter's mother. Ahem. Rei's stern voice froze Naruto in place. Aw rats. That's right. Much as he wanted to keep throwing shade at them, the gods were still his pun pal's kids. He wouldn't like it either if someone insulted his own children, so he'd give the same respect to his fellow parents, especially since Ria had been nothing but kind to him. But the minute they stepped out of line, fatherly discipline will be dished out like an open buffet. Haha, he'll tell Ria about that one later, maybe get another cute laugh out of her. Naruto felt his cheeks redden at the thought. Yeah, he wasn't gonna mince words. Big Mama had a cute as hell laugh, and he'd be lying if he said he didn't like hearing it. Which is why he'd better stay on her good side. Aw sorry Ria-chan. Didn't mean to insult your boy. Got caught up in the moment, ha. The sage forced out a sheepish laugh, as the mother narrowed her eyes at him. Good, I can tolerate some ribbing, but uncalled for insults at my babies won't slide. You got that, Mr. Whiskers. The Titaness remained firm, getting a slight smile out of the man. Hey, I can respect that. You're a real cool mama, Ria-chan. He complimented warmly, drawing a flustered look from the immortal. Oh stop, she gushed, almost letting go of the cloaking spell were it not for her daughter. Mom, Mr. Naruto, not the time, the goddess complained from the side. You two can flirt later. Or never, the short immortal added his 2 cents, making a face of disgust at the very idea, even as the two parents only got further embarrassed. The sage recomposed himself first, fake coughing to hide the flush on his face. He then turned to side-eye the brown-haired goddess. Ahem, anyway, Sue, I think Ria can take over for now. Hestia, you go with Zetsu to the other room and wait for my signal. You'll then take the kids to camp, drop them off, then continue to air, Brazil, Pops, Zetsu supplied. Yeah brah, wait, does that mean Quatsy's there? She had to have seen the big guy coming. The blonde's tone suddenly became excited. How could he not get hyped? He'll get to see another one of his little darlings soon. I dunno, my clone cut off any form of communication with me, all I can do is sense it. The Greenette scratched his head, then paused as he visibly concentrated. Ayup Quatsy's there too, he finally affirmed. Yes. His excitement, however, wasn't shared by the younger immortals. Are you sure it'll be okay? If you meant Quetzalcoatl and a giant version of Zetsu, wouldn't that be? Well, Bad, the goddess said with hesitance, but the man waved her off. If the clone is anything like Zetsu when he's in a crappy mood, then he'll be so hungry that he'd eat pretty much anything and everything in his path, including God's boot. He trailed off as he could practically sense the two immortal ladies' growing horror. Luckily my radiant serpents got it handled, the sage said proudly. I hate to say it, but while Quatzi's the youngest of us, she's also the strongest, the greenette added with a grumble. Oi, don't sell yourself short, boyo. You might not be as flashy as Quatzi, but you pack just as much of a wallop, ya know. Especially when you get grumpy. The father reflexively threw out in support. Ria, who had been silently watching the interaction with a smile, spoke up with a question. Ooh, Tilda, so sort of like my Sparky. Wonder if they'd get along, Tilda, she asked teasingly, knowing no doubt that it'll rile up the man. She'd seen how protective he could be, and it was both adorable and charming in a way. I hope not, the man gritted out in a low voice. He shivered. The very idea of his little girls getting sweet-talked by some no-good shameless womanizer. The very idea made him want to punch something. As if sensing the man's tension, his son went to his fellow immortal child and tugged on her dress. Anyway, Sistia, come on, we gotta, he began before the entire house shook again. Boom. Oi Naruto, you ready in there? The sage yelled out. Yeah, you sure about it, boss? The blonde's clone came in with an appearance that surprised the two Greeks. Naruto didn't mind the surprise and instead bit one of his thumbs, drawing a small amount of blood, then smeared it on his upper forearm, where a glowing blue seal appeared. If you wanna distract someone, you gotta do it properly, ya know. Bahahaha, the man said, as a puff of smoke enveloped him and revealed a large object that he handed to his clone. With Hades. The god was beginning to get frustrated. It's not like he couldn't take down the barrier if he wanted to. But using any large amount of power would draw his brother's attention. He did not need Zeus bullshit right now. His strikes had been powerful, he knew from the ripple they sent through the earth, and even if the barrier stood strong, the clones were obviously starting to sweat from the strain of keeping it up. Speaking of the duplicates, one worrying detail about them was how they were able to follow him even with his helm hiding him completely from sight and sound. They not only reacted to his strikes but focused on his position after he moved back. No matter. As he geared up for another attack, the clones all clapped their hands, dissipating the barrier and giving the god a better insight on who was in the house. He barely managed to sense the signature of someone he could swear was his mother, as well as a few indistinguishable ones, before he was forced to block an incoming heavy object with his weapon. He didn't stumble, even if the hit took him by surprise and disrupted his concentration briefly, and reflexively pushed, throwing the weapon back to the house. A yellow blur jumped through the entrance of the house, catching the sword while doing a front flip and landing before the god. As it stood, Hades seemed more confused than anything. That confusion only increased when that disguised man or monster spoke up, standing with their back to the duplicates, as they put the barrier back up. Might a rude tae barge into someone's hame isn't it? A tattooed tan-skinned man spoke with a thick Scottish accent that Hades hadn't heard outside of television in a while. Couple that with the man's strange attire, consisting of a wooden mask with a headdress that covered his head, one that wouldn't look out of place in the African history section of a museum, and a tribal shawl made of leopard skin that followed a similar theme. All in all, the guy looked like he was doing some professional cultural appropriation. Oh, and did he mention the large 6-foot-tall blunt sword wrapped in white bandages? Strangely enough, the weapon seemed to be vibrating and emitting a low purr. All in all, it was a sight that filled the Lord of the Dead with questions. Enough that he didn't attack immediately, opting to observe the man more carefully as he trudged around him, still under his helm. What are ye keekin' at, laddie? Ne'er seen a Jimmy in a mask afore. Again, Hades was startled when the person's head turned to face him as he walked, seemingly ignoring the effects of his helm, something not even his brothers were capable of doing. Aw rats, guess you're a mute eye. The masked man hefted his weapon on his shoulder without much trouble despite the thing's size. Hades idly noticed a small skull on the bottom of the handle. Who are you? The god's voice was cold as ice, not a hint of pleasantry in it. The man facing him was either a fool or someone stalling him. Probably both. So Hades cut to the chase, he needed to know who the mastermind behind this plot was, best understand if this is part of something bigger, or just an idiot stepping on his toes. The latter case was unlikely, Hades assumed whoever was behind this at least knew who he was slighting. So, he'd tread semi-carefully. Both assert his dominance and assume the fool facing him was just putting on a facade to lower his guard. Either way, someone was getting in the pit tonight, whether it be this guy alone or whoever was in the house with him was left in the air. Ma cares about that. Let's be rammy. Bahahaha. The man blurred forward with a cackle, his weapon coming down with an overhead swing to meet with Hades, bidet. A swing that was followed by many others as the man attacked relentlessly, batting away at the god with his huge sword while Hades blocked every swing. The amount of strength behind them was surprising, in that it was enough to force one of the big three to dig his feet into the ground. The man was certainly a talented warrior. Nonetheless, the Lord of the Underworld made his decision. If the fool wouldn't cooperate, he'd just have to get his answers out after killing him. Either way, the man would answer for his transgressions. With but a thought, a sharp tendril of darkness rose from the shadow of a nearby tree and almost ran his opponent through, were it not for the latter's quick reflexes. The man demonstrated a good amount of acrobatics by abruptly turning his sword to the side, pressing on Hades' weapon with the flat of the blade, before using the whole thing as a springboard to jump back and avoid the attack. And leaving the sword behind. Seeing an opportunity, the god grabbed the strange weapon's handle, if only out of curiosity. What the? The draining sensation he felt from that thing made him release it immediately and flick it away, throwing it back toward the man who caught it easily and twirled it. Hades' confusion was exacerbated when the sword emitted a keener sound than it did earlier, except now he recognized it. GGGGGG tilde, the weapon laughed and wiggled in its owner's hands. We beauty like she said the man, no doubt referring to his weapon as it continued to laugh. Taking his power again. Hades grew frustrated. Enough, he shouted, flaring his power and moving forward at a speed unexpected from someone his size. His bident was enveloped in black flames of the underworld as he swung it horizontally, intent to cleave through his opponent with his now searing hot weapon. The man raised the sword again and blocked the flaming bident. To the god's surprise, even though the flames were only rivaled by his sister's Greek fire, which could not be extinguished, they only managed to burn away the bandages enveloping the weapon, thus freeing it partially. A few more strikes burned the rest of the cloth off, revealing the large sword. Or whatever abomination that was. Samahata, or shark skin, 10th, relics oth, old world, the man explained as if sensing his opponent's curiosity. Old world. He couldn't possibly mean. Bahahaha. She liked what she tasted. Ye got some good stuff on ye laddie. A tad bower dowie however, maybe smiling a tad would brighten flavor. The man outright laughed and waved the giggling sword in his direction again. You wretched clown, do you even understand who you are slighting here? The god snarled at the joker, the man's attitude infuriating him further. The man laughed again and pointed in his general direction. Is it the invisible Jimmy? Can't see a peepo ya, but I can cop a lot o negative energy comin' oot. Did ye ever see bout paintin' as a hobby? I heard it kin distress ye fair a bower. Hades narrowed his eyes, choosing to ignore the pleasantries and futile attempts at annoying him, and focused on the more important detail there. He can't see me, then how is he? Another swing forced the god on the defensive, bringing his face close to the now free sword. GGG gwa. Hades leaned back to avoid a sudden chomp from a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth sported by that weapon. If the god didn't know any better, he'd have assumed the whole shark motif was proof his whaler of a brother was probably the one pulling the strings, but even Poseidon wasn't that brazen or provocative. Plus, an unknown with the ability to use the domain of death sounded like someone his younger brothers would smite with extreme prejudice. Strikes were exchanged once more, the hits causing shock waves and splintering the ground as the two immortals fought. Throughout the back and forth, Hades began feeling a pull at his energy. With every blow, a smidgen of his power was sapped, and it only served to further irritate the god. He'd already tried pulling at his opponent's soul or even driving him insane with fear but got nothing to show for it. By Tartarus, he dared to say his soul-related abilities were refusing to work on the man. So, left with the options of humoring the fool or simply letting loose a bit, his choice was obvious. Even if it would garner Olympus' attention. The fool jumped back, barely avoiding a wall of flames. The masked man barely landed on his feet before he had to jump to avoid a bouquet of earthly spikes that popped up in his place. Perfect, thought the god. Now that the idiot was in the air, he wouldn't be able to dodge as easily. Shadows formed around him and launched at the still airborne warrior, intent on impaling him with tendrils of concentrated darkness. The man answered by swinging the sword around, using its weight to change his center of gravity, and thus maneuvering himself in the air, barely avoiding the attack in the process. He touched the ground only to jump once again as the ground became a literal harrow of exploding rocky and metallic spires. This time, the man landed on the barrier in a crouch, and to Hades' curiosity, stuck there like a fly. He looked at the god and laughed again. Bahaha, canny wi, that edge. Ye amaist cut me laddie. Hades had rarely wanted to kill someone as much as he did right now. I'll do more than cut you clown. Tell me how you're doing this. He spat out, pointing his weapon at the man, who shrugged his shoulders innocently. Day and wit, fame fancy mancy gymnastics. If ya must know, the fool was cut off as the god's patience reached its limits. My domain fool, how can you, know how dare you use a god's domains, he interrogated. Wheel a didn't see her name own it, was the infuriatingly smug reply. You, the king of the underworld finally snapped and stopped restraining himself. He exploded from the ground, bringing his judgment down in the form of a veritable tide of fire and shadows. As for the fool, he laughed in mirth, as chaos enveloped the earth. Half-Blood Hill, same time, it's so dark. Hestia was floating in murky, almost watery space. She couldn't see anything, all she could hear was a sound similar to slushing liquid and the only thing she felt was a warm hand gripping her. How did it come to this? This is just like. Her breathing accelerated and she began to feel panic overtake her being. Memories long since suppressed were forcefully pulled back to the surface of her mind. The image of Kronos' giant mouth enveloping her, her mother's wails of despair at the betrayal, the crushing fear she'd felt within his stomach as all her senses were muddled, and the need to shoulder her siblings' pain when they joined her. It all came back full force, so much so that her next action was almost reflexive. She let go of whatever was holding her hand. Her limbs trembled as they were enveloped in green flames, which were then shot into what she assumed was the top of the dark prison. A loud hum was heard as the entire space rippled and the goddess felt an unseen force jerk her violently. She was promptly ejected, and landed on the soft earth, before crawling into herself, her flames covering her in a protective shield. She didn't notice the 4 other travel companions yelp from where they landed around her. She also didn't register the green-haired Uzumaki's screams of pain as her fire burned him alive. Oj! A scream tore itself out of the young sage as his body rolled on the ground in a failed attempt at putting out the Greek fire eating away at his body. Hestia! Damn it, call them off, he screeched. To the outside observer, Zetsu was a writhing misshapen mass of black flesh covered in green flames, rolling around on the ground and spreading the fire on the grass and leaving ashes in its wake. Hestia og hhhhh. He screamed again, in a vain attempt to get the goddess' attention. This hurts. Oh god, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. He continued rolling for a few minutes, while the other kids watched the spectacle in horror. They couldn't do anything but watch as their travel companion was assaulted in an unimaginable amount of pain. The Uzumaki tried in vain to regain control of himself, his body contorting in various shapes and sizes and slamming itself into the ground repeatedly. Ah, the immortal remembered something through the haze. His body suddenly froze, before his head appeared. Then, like something out of a horror movie or a disturbing cartoon, Sage's mouth expanded and moved inwards, gobbling up his body. Damn it, just work. All in all, it looked like he turned himself inside out. Which is exactly what he did. The humanoid mass of black flesh and organs quickly opened an orifice from the middle of its body and spat out a black ball on the ground which caught fire immediately. The immortal shifted his body back into his original shape, now devoid of flames and looking much calmer, albeit he immediately fell to the ground and began gasping. Oh thank God. He dropped face first and rolled in some of the unburned grass before landing on his back and looking at the sky. That was a close one. That was a trick he developed centuries ago, in the event he made either Amaterasu or Aunt Matabi angry enough for them to use their own flames. He'd never tested it before, but he was glad it worked. What he spat out was several layers of his own skin. He didn't put out the fire as much as cover it in his own flesh and spit it out before the fire could eat through the ball. He breathed in relief and closed his eyes for a moment. He hadn't really given the kids in Hestia a chance to protest his plan. When the barrier came down to let his pops clone out, he just gobbled them up and used Mayfly to get the fuck out of Dodge. In retrospect, the whole thing was a rash and dumb idea, but it was the best thing he could think of in the few seconds of the time they had before the barrier came back up. He felt someone come close to him and nudge him lightly with a foot. You okay, Zetsu? The person's voice clued him into who they were. Luke. The Uzumaki clearly opened his eyes, seeing the blonde boy looking down at him with a worried expression. The immortal sat up with a huff and cracked his neck before looking at the teen. I'm fine. You guys go ahead to camp, he said, then began walking past the blonde. But, the blonde's protest was interrupted as Zetsu turned around, and grabbed him by the front of his shirt, bringing close enough to hiss into his ear. This isn't a suggestion, it's an order. If you want to live, rub a couple of brain cells together and fucking think. Me and Pops got Olympus on our asses, and the sooner you're gone the better for you. Go. His voice, although spoken out through gritted teeth, was heard by the others. The 4 kids hesitated and looked lost for a moment before Grover BAAED and dragged a protesting Annabeth away. Talia wished them good luck, then followed the first 2, jogging towards the wooden gate that marked the camp's entrance, where a few other kids in armor were already coming to meet them halfway. Luke gave one last look at the greenette, before asking, what about my mom? The Uzumaki let the boy go and turned his back to him. Your mom'll be fine. Pops, got this, but if you kids get into trouble because of us, I'll never hear the end of it, he grumbled. His statement drew a slight chuckle from the teen. Thank you. With these last words, the son of Hermes followed his fellow demigods to camp. That was one problem dealt with. Time for the new issue. He saw the goddess ahead of him, trembling and doing a good impression of a flaming armadillo, what with her head between her knees and her arms covering her neck protectively. Hestia. The Uzumaki hesitated, both out of caution and because he didn't know how to approach this. The goddess didn't respond beyond retreating further into herself with a whimper and intensifying her flames. Great juiced great. A rumbling noise made him look in the general direction of Connecticut, only to see the beginning of dark clouds forming overhead. Oh, for the love of. Chapter 23. Zetsu bounced off the rubble and the remains of buildings. His erratic movements allowed him to dodge lots attacks. The god looked amused if nothing else, sliding behind the Uzumaki on a sheet of ice and shooting weapons of the same element at his prey. Ho 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 tilde, for a worthless you can certainly dance well him tilde. The white-haired deity chuckled mockingly. I'll show you dancing, you cross-dressing piece of. The greenette's thoughts were cut abruptly as he weaved out of the way of another array of cold weaponry. The game of cat and mouse would continue for several minutes, with the Uzumaki even beginning his counterattack in the form of earthly and wooden spikes. The back and forth only intensified when a couple of Zetsu clones jumped at the original and merged with him. Green tattoos erupted on the original's body as he took the offensive, blitzing the god in an attempt to overpower him. Despite his father's strength, Zetsu was still several leagues behind the man. He hadn't yet mastered sagehood and relied on clones to gather natural energy for him. For a while, the greenette overpowered the god, drove him back into a corner, and even scored a few hits. The ice spears broke against his now hardened skin, his already great physical strength had all but decoupled. It was going great. Up until it wasn't. Goo. Zetsu was forced to jump away from a ball of molten earth that hit his position. His opponent seemed more annoyed than relieved. Jwala won. That was my Wanju too, he said, looking behind him. The Uzumaki dared to look behind him, only to be met with another white-haired deity. Wearing an open vest that displayed a swimmer's build, a pair of loose black pants, and a band of blackened glass covering his eyes, the newest arrival strode up with a gait that radiated arrogance. Really? Couldn't tell from how you were getting your ass whooped, bro. The new god replied to the other. Great, another of the princes of Nadak came too. Jwala, the Jade Emperor's youngest child, the Lord of Fire, War, and Violence 3. Zetsu felt his chances of victory go up in smoke. He might have been able to stall, even beat Lot if he played it smart, but facing two of the vanguards was suicide. Especially after spending more than half of his chakra and biomass on rescue efforts. Damn it. Hold your tongue, little brother, I was merely carousing, Lot replied, his soft features twisting in anger. The other whiteout shrugged at his elder brother's tone. Whatever, let's get this over with and help the old man. Damn it, where are the others? The Uzumaki thought frantically as he retreated into the shadows while the two deities squabbled. You know Lord Father'll flay you alive again if he hears you disrespect him, Lot mocked his younger sibling. Jwala shivered, then raised his hands in surrender. Okay. Wadea want to keep quiet about this. He caved in immediately. The Lord of Storms mockingly pouted and pretended to think, before snapping his fingers. Zetsu hastily moved to dodge another barrage of ice weapons. How about a small bet, little brother? Whoever kills the trash gets first pick on our share of the loot, Lot smiled. Jwala's eyes could not be seen behind his headgear, but from the feral smile that bloomed on his face, one could only deduce he liked the idea. HMPH. Now you're talkin' my language, bro. He summoned a ball of fire and launched it at the Uzumaki. Zetsu heaved as he kept dodging, doing his best to avoid ice and fire while the two deities laughed as they chased him. His chances of survival had just become close to null. But he wouldn't give up, he'd need to stall them, or trick them somehow. He still needed to wait until the entire area was evacuated, and his clones were hard at work getting the people out. Pops didn't raise a coward, so he'll fight to the limit. The earth exploded into a forest, momentarily blocking the two deities. It didn't do much, however, as it was simultaneously burnt and frozen over. The two gods looked around at the now destroyed area, finding no signs of their target. Suddenly, Jwala yelped as something sharp stabbed him in the side. His ichor flowed freely, from the wound, even as it healed rapidly. The ink-black appendage that had attacked the god, vanished back into the ground. The youngest of the princes reared back his foot and with a powerful step, lit the ground on fire. Lot made to jump up, but before he could, a pair of powerful arms grabbed his feet and pulled him into a sinkhole that formed on his position. Just as the god fell in, Zetsu jumped out, closing the hole behind him and avoiding the wave of fire that engulfed everything below and triggered the muffled screams of the other deity. The Uzumaki was not idle. He extended a wooden tendril to a nearby structure and swung from it in direction of the other god, avoiding fireballs expertly. Finally, Jwala threw a literal storm of fire at him, one that he intercepted with a powerful, exploding water-colliding wave. The resulting steam blanketed the area and blocked out Jwala's sight. A small fireball lit up above the god's hand as he looked around. Hello come out little kite for come out and face me . His voice rang out, playful and jesting despite the situation. Perfect, thought Zetsu. The god wasn't taking this seriously yet and his brother was still being dragged by a clone underground via Mayfly. He had bought himself a few instants. The Uzumaki prowled silently, his hand forming a small greenish Rasengan, as he made his way towards the Lord of Fire, intent on shoving enlarging the orb the instant he attacked. He was almost upon him, and the deity seemed none the wiser. Boom. The sky erupted into a giant glowing pattern, its lines being traced by the movements of Naruto, the Jade Emperor and a third adversary who had just joined in the fight. From the energy levels alone, Zetsu could tell it was most probably the eldest prince of Nadak, Arden. Shit, this was going from bad to worse. The colored pattern left by their energy trails would have been beautiful had it not been so deadly. The three fighters' ridiculous flight speeds and their continuous impacts left behind violent shockwaves. Shockwaves that blew the mist Zetsu was using as cover away. Also, sheet. His cover was blown. Nevertheless, the boy continued, seeing as Jwala had yet to turn. Just a little more. Jwala slowly turned to see the attack heading for his head. Just as he raised a flaming hand to defend himself, a sharp pain racked his body from the same place he was stabbed in before. Ow! What the? His voice was cut off as vines erupted from the location of his now healed wound. The vines wrapped around the god rapidly, and just as he was about to burn them off, Zetsu was already descending upon him. Gotcha! Yelled the greenette. Jaywalla's eyes widened as he saw the Rasengan grow into the size of a watermelon, its vibrations emitting a low hum as the Uzumaki brought it down on the god's head, intent on splattering it. Shink! Zetsu was cut off mid-jump by a purple-colored spear of ice. Its tip impaled him through his stomach and suspended him in the air. Ow! The boy muttered. On the other end, an enraged and dirtied lot came out of the ground. You filthy Haichong 5. You dare! The god spat his words, almost stuttering from sheer anger. He swung his weapon and dislodged the Uzumaki, the latter flipping through the air to adjust his position. However, a sudden feeling of queasiness assaulted the green-haired immortal. He fell down on his side and attempted to get up, only to fall down again. What's happened, Blard? The boy vomited all over the ground. His eyes widened as he beheld the distinct dark green, almost black blood making up most of the regurgitation. Any further thought was interrupted by a violent kick to the side that sent him flying again. I'm going to make sure you suffer, your filthy ye. This concoction was made specifically to curb any pesky weeds that might pop up in our peach garden. 6. It should be perfect for one like you. Lot's voice was laden with sadistic intent. Pops, somebody! Uzumaki screamed internally, as he felt his nerves grow inflamed, his cells were violently tearing at each other and his body was unraveling at the seams. Help! Had Zetsu been able to look up, he'd have seen the malicious grin that had taken form on Lot's face as a razor-sharp scythe made of ice formed in his hand. Jaywalla freed himself and came to stand next to his brother, rubbing his healing side. Su, Tai, the younger brother said. The statement made the effeminate-looking god to round up on Jaywalla. Preposterous, do you not see my poison working on him? He'll die whimpering like the dog he is. Oh come on, I had his ass. Do not make a fool of me, brother. Or you will end up like him. A buzzing sound suddenly filled the area and made the god pause. Hey, did ya hear something? Jaywalla asked, looking around, as the noise got louder. Do not change the subject, fool. Now I believe I've won our little bet. Lot was heedless of the background noise, even as the buzzing grew much louder. Oh, don't you start with that bull. CRAAASSSHHH. Both gods were cut off as the source of the noise. A giant seven-tailed horned beetle dive-bombed them and created a trench from the impact. Ant, Chome, the greenette thought in pain, faintly recognizing Biju's signature. A cool hand rested on his back before he felt enveloped in a transparent viscous substance. It's all right, Zetsu-chan, you did good. The mysterious person, a woman by her distinct gentle tone, spoke up. Zetsu knew that voice. Ant sickened, he felt a numbing sensation permeate in his body as the poison was extracted and his flesh began regenerating. I hope Pops'll be alright, was his last thought before he nodded off. Assault on Gyaran no Hankyochi, Part 4 .